Visualize squandering an entire decade attempting to vanquish the most brutal electronic challenge ever birthed, just to get sucked into that world as some puny lordling currently getting served a slow-acting poison cocktail by his personal cleaning lady. Within actual reality, this person was merely a common non-entity who squandered his existence gazing towards radiant monitors inside some shadowy basement. Currently, I am imprisoned within a savage magical realm where a malicious stepmother craves my immediate expiration. Although this scenario resembles a certain fatality, it represents the ideal recreation area, aimed at some dedicated butter masher. Antagonists presume this narrator is merely a delicate infant anticipating a visit to the local meat grinder. Yet such fools lack any suspicion regarding their encounter with a singular legendary digital overlord who plans to compel those villains into physically dismantling their unique supernatural gifts. We must retreat toward that very commencement so as to observe, regarding the manner whereby a solitary scholar morphed into the terrifying strategic genius across this entire landmass. This chronicle commences with a pathetic though familiar atmosphere, since my days were tedious, serving as a basic dull introduction for massive life-altering evolutions. Observe this typical learner possessing eyewear plus chestnut hair, likely appearing quite exhausted, totally vacant, as I merely performed those tasks of some monotonous day. The backdrop transitions toward a standard residential corridor in my dwelling, proving how unremarkable my domestic history was, being the peak of mediocrity with nothing fancy. This loner passed his hours simply breathing, trekking through campus corridors while other youths mingled nearby, existing as some background extra within his personal bio, enduring repetitive cycles. Pastimes remained isolated, just me, clicking away inside some pitch-black room, having already concluded that my existence would likely finish without any remarkable events. In that spot I sat, plumped atop some workstation during those midnight hours, while that voiceover hints regarding how things were different, implying that events are becoming extremely chaotic. Everything changed within some flash, one pupil reflecting that monitor radiance whenever sudden intensity peaked, plus I finally noticed a detail which truly ignited his fascination. This person gaped toward that mysterious luminous display, depicting a petite golden-haired sprite within some dark void, which seemed like some concealed game plus unforeseen invitation. Instantaneously, some sequence involving majestic skirmishes plus mythical lands flickered across that glass, titled Hero's Fate, representing some complete reversal regarding my boring routine, showing monsters and fighters. The computerized sprite marked, whereupon this narrator stood within a virtual vacuum encircled via recollections, prepared to exchange some stale reality regarding that fantastic alternate dimension. Observe this gold domain warrior, who represents my digital avatar, as it remains wild how I function like a completely distinct human, overflowing with audacity. The metamorphosis finished, and I proclaimed myself some sovereign over this globe, since this digital variant possessed radiant emerald pupils plus some vibe-emitting immense protagonist vibes. Formal education concluded for today, and this narrator basically bolted toward his residence to stay solitary, existing as some recluse who feigned indifference regarding campus life though obviously favored any alternative location. Initially, the scanner toggled that machine switch, seeking some private refuge away from any tedious reality, and rested there amidst the Azure monitor radiance feeling quite fulfilled. Assuming solo grinding remained possible, existence seemed perfect, consequently I popped my joints and access to flow state, claiming that I represent the lead actor. This expression displayed far greater enthusiasm within this room compared to those scholastic passages. I detailed those benefits regarding solo gaming experiences during the broadcast, specifically saving, reloading, or performing any desired action, viewing such things as methods to exercise absolute authority over some realm that appreciated me. This narrator's look became remarkably fierce, featuring that tight shot of one pupil plus some confident grin, since I existed for that rush of authority, rather than mere gaming. It felt like reality was constructed for some single participant, meaning me, becoming entirely lost within fiction while dismissing any tedious actual existence. This individual prepared to initiate a regular internet broadcast, donning some audio gear while behaving nonchalantly for those watching. Assuming today involved a typical grind, dev reality proved quite different. A rather janky, glitch-riddled notification for my stream launch suddenly materialized on the monitor. Apparently, the universe decided this was the precise moment to inject some actual excitement into my day. Instantly, the live chat flooded in, with a fellow named Judy K. already tearing into me for broadcasting midweek, questioning if I ever attended lectures. Honestly, the online world spares no one, especially not quiet types such as myself. I desperately tried to maintain my composure while viewers online duked it out, debating whether I was some kind of genius savant or just a complete dud. They clearly couldn't pick a lane, between praising or utterly destroying me. Out of the blue, an alert flashed up, showing someone named AGJ had dropped $10 whole. My jaw nearly unhinged, as even a measly donation felt like hitting the lottery for a fledgling streamer such as myself. I sincerely believed $10 was more than sufficient, so I quickly typed out a grateful thank you message. I probably looked like a humble, overjoyed peasant, just thrilled to receive any sliver of support. Then, as if reality itself decided to go rogue, my screen absolutely erupted with a fresh contribution. A user named DEA had gifted a whopping $1,000, which wasn't just pocket change, but truly life-altering funds for a broke student. I was utterly petrified, completely frozen in place, barking at the monitor as if I'd just witnessed a spectral apparition. My eyes were as wide as saucers, and my chin practically scraped the floorboards. A full-blown panic attack kicked in. I started yelling incoherently, struggling to comprehend the monumental event that had just transpired. Even the chat room descended into utter pandemonium, debating if it was some bizarre error or an elaborate prank. The comment section exploded with wild speculation, many predicting the generous donor would soon demand their money back. Then, a new message from DA popped up, stating they'd send an email and I should check it. I hastily clicked my way over to my email inbox, where a single, unread message sat glaring back at me with a little alert icon. This, my friends, was the precise instant everything in my reality began to dramatically shift. My gaze remained fixed on the glowing display, a bead of sweat trickling down my temple as I muttered about the mysterious email. I understood, with a creeping sense of dread, that whatever lay within that digital note was intrinsically tied to the colossal $1,000 donation. The mysterious email turned out to be from a game developer, who was surprisingly a huge fan of my channel. They confessed to spending an eternity crafting a game so ridiculously challenging, nobody managed to beat it during its initial beta phase. The text splashed across my monitor boldly declared that not a single soul had managed to conquer this game during its exclusive closed beta. It sounded less like a simple game and more like a personal gauntlet thrown directly at my inner hardcore gamer. My mind immediately started racing, conjuring up scenarios of what might happen if I actually managed to clear the game. I was already completely obsessed with the delicious prospect of being the very first person to conquer it. The screen, in a blatant act of digital provocation, reiterated the challenge. Absolutely no one had managed to triumph during the beta test, almost as if the game itself was a cheeky digital entity, personally daring me to try my luck. A massive, slightly unhinged grin stretched across my face as the realization dawned. This was my golden ticket to finally being extraordinary. I was utterly fed up with the mundane, convinced this game could be my glorious ascension to legendary status. The prompt to install the game, aptly titled Hero's Destiny, materialized on my display, feeling less like a game choice and more like a life-altering ultimatum. I dramatically slammed my mouse and bellowed, yes, fully committed and prepared to plunge headfirst into whatever grand, pixelated fate Hero's Destiny had reserved for me. The installation bar for Hero's Destiny zipped to completion surprisingly fast, and the game itself launched, bathing my screen in a bright, ethereal digital blue glow. It opened with overly dramatic lore about ancient imperial calendars and an impending era of chaos, placing my tiny avatar within a vast, shimmering, aquatic blue digital realm. As the game finally loaded, I felt a slight wave of disappointment wash over me, realizing the visuals were considerably less impressive than I had anticipated. It then politely requested I input my character's name, which, let's be honest, felt pretty standard. I casually brushed off the lackluster graphics, acknowledging that if a single person had made this, rough visuals were totally to be expected. I then confidently decided what my character's illustrious name would be. My fingers danced across my glowing keyboard, meticulously typing out Game Master as my chosen username. I was clearly aiming for the ultimate, supremely confident gamer tag to showcase my supposedly formidable skills. The game, with typical RPG grandeur, then welcomed me to the continent of Elen, Game Master, feeling very much like a generic RPG intro, yet I was inexplicably hyped for it. My digital alter ego materialized in a rather uninspired-looking forest, and I stood there, utterly bewildered by the sheer simplicity of my virtual surroundings. Noticing the complete absence of a tutorial, I foolishly concluded the controls must be elementary, feeling entirely too self-assured for my own good. I ambled around for a brief period before my eyes snagged on an NPC in the far distance. My hopes soared, imagining this would finally kick off my very first quest, or at the very least, provide some much-needed initial guidance. The NPC in question turned out to be a genuinely creepy-looking village chief, who immediately demanded to know my business in his settlement. The text box then promptly appeared, eagerly awaiting my type response as the mighty Game Master. I was thoroughly perplexed, mostly because there wasn't a single pre-written dialogue option to be found. It dawned on me I had to manually type out every single thing my character uttered, a truly bizarre and highly unusual mechanic for this style of game. The cursor, a beacon of silent judgment, incessantly blinked in the vast, empty dialogue box, patiently waiting my creative genius. The game, it seemed, was granting me absolute narrative freedom, which was simultaneously exhilarating and utterly terrifying. My fingers hovered over my keyboard, a wave of incredulity washing over me as I wondered if I genuinely had to painstakingly type out every single interaction. I silently mused, there's absolutely no chance this is right, but I decided to humor the peculiar system anyway. Attempting to channel my inner comedian, I gleefully typed out a message instructing the chief to immediately surrender all his precious gold, or else I would, rather casually, commit to slaughtering every single villager. Clearly, I hadn't quite grasped the gravity of this game yet. I reclined in my chair, a supremely smug smirk plastered across my face, eagerly anticipating the NPC's dramatic reaction to my delightfully edgy threat. I fully expected some cookie-cutter, canned response or perhaps a conveniently scripted brawl. Monumental error. The village chief, apparently not one for games, immediately clocked me with a powerful blow. I soared through the air with a startled shriek and an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. My character slammed into the ground with an audible thud, and a chilling message materialized. My eyelids feel heavy. I was already in the throes of death, mere moments after starting this infernal game. The screen dissolved into an inky blackness, displaying a stark "you died" message, promptly followed by grim confirmation that I had, indeed, perished. I remained utterly dumbfounded, staring blankly at the prompt inquiring if I wished to retry. Snapping back to my actual existence, I found myself drenched in sweat and trembling, genuinely questioning if I was actually conversing with a digital character. This artificial intelligence's conversational depth far surpassed anything I'd encountered, making me wonder if it had a secret life. That infuriating retry prompt just loitered, annoyingly flickering on my display, practically taunting me after my initial, utterly disastrous flop, like the game was a digital comedian. My temper flared, causing me to smack my desk with a mighty thud and roar about immediately hitting that retry button, as my inner competitive gamer, usually reserved for actual sports, had fully awakened following such an utterly humiliating digital demise. Upon my digital resurrection, the village leader repeated his query, prompting me to adopt a decidedly more cautious and exceptionally unassuming approach this time, perhaps even a little pathetic. I concocted a truly heartbreaking digital lament, explaining my dire situation as a lost wanderer, utterly starved and dehydrated, then implored the chief to take pity on this poor, pathetic creature, even mentally plastering on my most exaggeratedly adorable puppy dog face for maximum effect. Remarkably, the chief bought my sob story completely, expressed his sympathy for my supposed plight, and motioned for me to trail behind him, confirming that apparently, impersonating a destitute wanderer was the secret handshake to advancing in this bizarrely authentic virtual realm. Upon reaching a quaint dwelling, the chief extended a cup, advising me to imbibe its contents for a bit of calming relief, and I, feeling immensely thankful, foolishly presumed I had successfully navigated the initial, tricky obstacle like a seasoned pro. I snatched the goblet without even a moment's hesitation, offering a charming, polite thank you to the venerable gentleman, feeling rather smug about my uncanny ability to manipulate digital characters, the true master of virtual psychology. Driven by the thirst of my supposed arduous trek, I guzzled the entire concoction in a single gulp, convinced I was executing my role flawlessly, yet the chief merely observed me, utterly wordless, his gaze unerringly fixed. Then, a rather unhelpful message materialized, declaring I was afflicted with slowly creeping death and my eyelids felt suspiciously weighty. Turns out, the kindly old gentleman had served me a fatal nightcap, fork about bad hospitality. I was once again meeting my digital maker, my avatar dramatically slumping in the virtual chair while I watched, utterly flabbergasted. This game, clearly designed by sadists, consistently found the most incredibly inventive and surprising methods to off me. The grim, resolute expression settled upon my features as I pondered the potential repercussions of my next wild scheme. Having finally reached my breaking point and preparing to attempt something wildly unconventional, perhaps even unhinged, I began yanking cables from my computer like a mad scientist, loudly demanding to know what chaos would ensue, convinced I could outsmart the game's strict algorithms by physically tampering with its hardware or internet tether, a truly genius plan. I cackled like a cartoon villain, certain I had stumbled upon a glorious system exploit, firmly convinced that even a complete internet outage wouldn't stop me from somehow hacking or puppeteering the digital inhabitants of this perplexing world. I deliberately mashed a chaotic mess of random characters, a completely nonsensical jumble, into the dialog window, hoping to either spectacularly crash the entire system or at least utterly bewilder the sophisticated artificial intelligence. The game, however, remained unpressed, awarding me a truly grisly demise, stating that the game master, having spouted such utter gibberish, had his tongue brutally torn out and subsequently bled to death, which is frankly, quite disturbingly hardcore. My fingers instinctively released the mouse in utter shock as my display started to sputter and distort, and I began to grasp that this game operated under its own peculiar and frankly terrifying set of, shall we say, house rules. I was positively drenched in anxiety, finally comprehending that this perplexing digital world functioned perfectly without any internet tether, confirming this was far beyond a mere quirky indie title. It was profoundly more enigmatic. My gaze drifted back to the initial email, spotting the mysterious DEA moniker once more, prompting a cascade of questions about their identity and the motives behind bestowing me with this specific, sanity-bending creation. Lost in contemplation, the name DEA on my screen held my attention, a tantalizing enigma whether it represented an individual or an entire development studio. Yet one thing was certain, I was unequivocally captivated. A quick glance at my digital timepiece revealed it was well past 1:30 in the morning, a shocking realization that my utterly consuming fixation on this peculiar game had caused me to completely lose all sense of chronological order. I finally opted to declare a temporary truce with the virtual world, hitting the save button, my reflection showing an exhausted but strangely content individual, having uncovered something genuinely extraordinary and perhaps a little unhinged. While reclining in my bed, my mind persistently replayed the unsettling realism of the digital inhabitants, prompting me to seriously contemplate whether the vibrant world of Hero's Destiny possessed some tangible existence beyond my screen. I lay there, an arm dramatically draped across my eyes, pondering why on earth no other soul had managed to complete this perplexing beta test, already meticulously plotting my intricate strategies for the moment I eventually reawakened. A tranquil close-up showed my visage as I succumbed to slumber, bathed in the gentle luminescence of the moon, peering far more serene than earlier, until my eyes abruptly flung open with a fiercely resolute gleam. Now this is truly getting thrilling. I mused, no longer the world-weary scholar, but a man reborn, having discovered a formidable new drive within the perplexing confines of this game. Leaping forward in time, cityscapes reappeared beneath the brilliant azure firmament, indicating that numerous days had slipped by as I persistently indulged in my clandestine and utterly captivating digital fixation. I found myself once again parked before my computer, mindlessly clicking my mouse, and honestly, From the very moment I'd begun this digital journey, I had become so utterly engrossed that time itself simply vanished from my perception. My finger descended upon the load button within the sleek, futuristic interface, a familiar action that had morphed into my absolute daily ritual, genuinely the sole element I anticipated with such profound eagerness. I tapped the save button once more, a testament to my painstaking, almost obsessive progress, fiercely resolved to conquer this digital Everest. There I sat, a hunched silhouette in the dim light, utterly swallowed by the game, as if the entire mundane world outside had simply dissolved into nothingness. I clicked load yet again, primed for another intense gaming marathon. As existence, powered by pixels and passion, had become my unwavering reality, and I had absolutely no intention of pausing. Abruptly, the voice chirped, "Chiro," jolting me to the stark realization that I was currently trapped in an actual office job, the stark reminder that I had apparently transitioned into adulthood, no longer merely the carefree student holed up in his room. The massive, on-screen notification abruptly declared that an entire decade had elapsed, revealing me as a gainfully employed adult, though some endearing habits, like my obsession, clearly persisted. A rather attractive colleague with striking reddish hair presented me with the requested documents, her gaze holding a gentle, curious quality. I accepted them with a murmured, "Thor, thanks a bunch," embodying the quintessential handsome corporate drone, complete with a crisp tie and my trusty, ever-present spectacles. The large timepiece on the wall defiantly displayed a time well past 8 in the evening, prompting her to inquire if I had managed to wrap up my workday, as it was quite late, and we were practically the last two souls lingering in the nearly deserted office. I tossed a casual, "Utsur, Suzihara, great work," per way, but my gaze was firmly locked on a far more crucial, undeniably more captivating objective. Suzihara, looking like a shy tomato, fumbled for words, clearly building up to some deep, profound query. After a heroic struggle, she managed to squeak out an invitation for dinner before I vanished home, her hopeful expression practically a neon sign. My unwavering stare seemed to weigh a ton, making her fidget uncomfortably, and the sudden quiet in the room became so dense it could have been cut with a butter knife. Pivoting abruptly, I declared with the emotional warmth of a robot that my couch was calling, ending her hopes faster than a free sample disappears at her grocery store. She stood frozen, the deer in headlights, utterly flabbergasted by my swift dismissal after her valiant effort. I mumbled something about an important day and another time to cushion the impact, even as my bag was already zipped shut, clearly ready for my grand escape. Suzihara was left radiating pure disappointment, grumbling under her breath about yet another expertly executed dodge, suggesting my rejection technique was becoming legendary. Under the cloak of night, my apartment building gleamed, beckoning me to its sacred halls, my ultimate refuge. At my battle station, I positively pulsed with vitality, the far cry from my office drone persona, proclaiming this glorious evening as the final showdown for Hero's destiny. With a triumphant click, my fingers executed the last, decisive commands, a singular moment where a decade of dedicated digital warfare hung precariously in the balance. The game's grand finale unfurled across a canvas of celestial beauty, an absolutely breathtaking, monumental tableau I had painstakingly pursued for 10 glorious years. The dazzling message emblazoned the screen, proclaiming congratulations, Game Master. You are the pioneer mortal elevated to the divine pantheon. I had truly achieved it, becoming the undisputed, first ever champion of this digital realm. Ensconced within my dimly lit lair, walls plastered with esoteric scrawls and strategic blueprints, I knew my utterly fanatical dedication had finally culminated in glorious triumph. The thunderous roar of "I conquered it" escaped my lips, accompanied by a beatific grin, marking this as the undisputed peak of my earthly existence. My face, zoomed in for dramatic effect, flushed with an ecstatic glow, a radiance of accomplishment utterly alien to the humdrum existence outside my gaming den. Alas, my triumphant grin slowly dissolved into a blank canvas, the euphoria of victory evaporating like morning dew, leaving an unsettling void in its wake. The decade, the full 10 years, had been poured into this singular obsession. Gazing at my hands, I was struck by the relentless march of time, a harsh reminder that despite my legendary in-game heroics, my actual existence remained stubbornly, agonizingly mundane. There I sat, a king in pixels, a peasant on my tiny apartment floor, rudely yanked back to earth. The stark digital typeface on my screen seemed to mock me, affirming that yes, I was still just as spectacularly ordinary, a bitter pill that my virtual godhood hadn't magically upgraded my actual life. Plumping back into my chair, my eyes holding a vacant stare, I mumbled that it felt utterly hollow, the decade's monumental accomplishment surprisingly less satisfying than her slightly overcooked potato. My mind drifted, conjuring images of myself as a triumphant champion amidst breathtaking, radiant landscapes, the stark contrast to my current reality, where I truly felt a different existence during those sacred gaming hours. I recalled the intricately woven personalities I had encountered, individuals like the formidable Black Prince Gale Krakow, whose existence made my dreary cubicle life feel like watching paint dry. My thoughts also drifted to the enigmatic cardinal and the mysterious witch of the sealed tower. For me, they transcended mere non-player characters, possessing such distinct charisma and utterly convincing responses that distinguishing them from actual living beings seemed an impossible feat. I truly believed these digital souls had simply misplaced their physical addresses. A profound groan escaped me as I buried my face in my hands, lamenting that it was genuinely finished, a heartfelt mourning for the soul realm where my existence truly held meaning. Out of nowhere, my eyes caught a peculiar flicker on the monitor, causing me to physically recoil and emit a startled gasp as an entirely unexpected new message materialized. The display, with an irresistible twinkle, inquired if I yearned for fresh exploits, promising that her simple yes would whisk me away to the mystical lands of Olin. My jaw practically hit the floor as I tried to process this astonishing proposal. Could this be a secret level, perhaps even a brand new continuation? Just staring at the tantalizing offer was enough to ignite that wonderfully addictive, familiar surge of excitement deep within my gainer's soul. The mere thought of recapturing that electrifying sensation, even for an instant, was worth any price, a truly priceless opportunity. My hand, trembling with adrenaline, lunged for the mouse. With a resounding bang, I clicked, bellowing that this was my destiny, an undeniable call to plunge back into the unknown, come what may. The display blared its dramatic declaration, initiating transport to the majestic continent of Olin. Accompanied by a dizzying swirl of energetic lines, this felt like considerably more than just your average, mundane loading bar. A profoundly resonant, enigmatic voice boomed, "Greetings, illustrious game master." Then, "My chosen apostle," it added, a phrase definitely not listed in the game's official dialogue tree. Abruptly, the world plunged into absolute blackness, sending me into a full-blown panic as an intense inferno raged in my chest. Unable to draw a breath, I desperately questioned what bizarre transformation my physical form was undergoing. My eyes fluttered open to reveal a sumptuously appointed chamber, boasting soaring ceilings and furniture so opulent it probably had its own butler. Utterly bewildered, I peered around, mentally asking, where on earth am I, and did my apartment pack up and leave? A serenely soothing voice declared their immense relief at my reawakening, a comforting sound, yet one that rang entirely unfamiliar to my ears. Looming over me was a distinguished gentleman with a formidable mustache and a crisp, military-esque uniform. He gravely informed me that without the intervention of an exceptionally potent concoction, I would have tragically missed out on another glorious sunrise. Peering into my own pupil, I spotted a wrinkly geezer staring back at me from a teal iris that definitely wasn't my original shade, and after this ancient fellow addressed me as Calyx, I discovered I was a gorgeous blonde lad lounging on luxury sheets, which meant I had officially been magically transported into my favorite digital pastime. Regaining consciousness in this fresh skin felt like a bizarre hallucination, especially with a stern elder mirrored in my gaze, and my only response was a pathetic stutter where I desperately tried to ask this mysterious dude exactly who he thought he was. The elderly gentleman blinked in surprise, looking like a cross between a decorated general and a very expensive servant, and he merely grunted a contemplative noise while clearly processing my sudden lapse in basic recognition. Genuine concern washed over his face, as he muttered about how the local doctor forgot to mention any side effects involving memory loss, which was just great since I had managed to baffle the native population within seconds of opening my eyes. Panic flared as I gripped the duvet and scanned the strange surroundings, shouting demands about his identity and our current location, and I really doubted he grasped that I was currently having a massive mental breakdown. The fellow offered a low, formal bow with a hand pressed against his chest in a show of total loyalty, and he announced himself as Russell, though that name meant absolutely nothing to my brain. Flopping back onto the pillows, my thoughts spun wildly since this clearly wasn't Tokyo, and even though the tongue being spoken was definitely not Japanese, I could somehow decipher every syllable with uncanny precision. Things were already plenty strange, but then my day took a turn for the painful, as a fiery, stinging sensation began to erupt right in the center of my torso. I curled into a ball of misery, grabbing my tunic and hollering that my ribs felt like a furnace, while Russell dropped his professional mask and yelled out, sprinting toward me in a frantic blur. The poor guy looked devastated, rambling about how he shouldn't have pressured me so soon after my ordeal, but I was too busy attempting to inhale through the larva in my chest to really listen to his excuses. Russell insisted I relax, blaming the agony on some sketchy magical medicine he had administered, and while he swore the burning would vanish eventually, I wished eventually was 5 minutes ago, so he finally decided to scram to let me heal, promising a return at dawn while still using the Ovalus Stuffy, noble title for me. The massive timber doors latched shut once he stepped out, leaving me in solitude, so I was finally solo in this weird, dimly lit chamber to ponder my current predicament. With a miserable moan, I shifted weight until the fire in my chest cooled to a dull ache, and while the silence was heavy and smelled of ancient oak, I noticed a bowl of hot mush beside my bed that looked like the standard bland meal served to bedridden heroes in every RPG. The deep, weary breath escaped my lips as the sharpest pain subsided, and although the emergency had passed, the riddle of my new existence was only getting more confusing. After summoning my last bit of energy, I dangled my legs over the edge, and as my toes touched the carpet, it became obvious that this avatar was way tiny and fresher than my previous, freaky self. Stumbling toward a fancy, full-length mirror, I felt a knot of dread in my stomach, since I needed a visual to prove my terrifying theory about this transformation. Well, my suspicions were spot on, since the face in the glass belonged to a total unknown, and I was now a strikingly attractive, golden-haired youngster with intense eyes, which was certainly a departure from my actual physical form. Gaping at the stranger, I felt completely detached from the handsome reflection staring back, especially since the boy in the mirror wore the same baffled, spook look that I felt radiating through my very soul. Gripping my skull, the truth finally sank in with the force of a brick, because I recalled 3 decades of gaming in my Tokyo apartment perfectly, yet I had no clue what my current name was in this fantasy land. Gasping for air, I examined my palms as if they were ethereal and screamed at the walls about my missing identity, and since I needed answers immediately, I almost lost my mind right before a glowing azure light manifested in the empty space before me, revealing a hovering digital box that materialized like a classic gaming HUD, and I stood paralyzed, watching the see-through display hang there because I knew this interface was a carbon copy of the menus from the game I played way too much. My pulse thundered when I spotted the hero's destiny emblem shining at the top of the display, which clearly wasn't a fluke, seeing as I had somehow been sucked into the very software I had just finished playing. The truth struck with electric intensity, as I realized that the new adventure button I pressed was a one-way ticket rather than a sequel, and I was now a permanent resident of the continent of Alan. Thinking back to my cluttered desk and computer setup, I realized I was the legendary player who beat the toughest game ever, and now I was its protagonist, especially when a digital chart of the world appeared, displaying the territories I spent a decade traversing through a screen where every frozen peak and dark woods was now a tangible reality for me. I tried to keep my oxygen levels steady and mentally told myself to chill out, so I paced around internally, attempting to grasp the fact that my boring existence had transformed into a high-stakes adventure. Leaning against some huge bookcases, I contemplated my next move, since I needed to figure out my character's lore and exactly what kind of overpowered abilities I possessed now that this was actually happening. Just when I was starting to feel cool, the internal inferno decided to ignite once more, and the agony returned with a chip on its shoulder, making it clear that I was currently a very broken protagonist. Dropping to the floor, I wheezed as the torture ripped through my torso, and I marveled at how intense the sensation was, which served as the final proof that I wasn't just dreaming since I still hadn't woken up in my apartment. Sprawled out on the carpet, I finally resigned myself to the cold, hard facts. Because this wasn't a computer bug or a bad trip, this was my new life, and I needed to not die immediately. Heating myself up, I hardened my gaze and prepared to commit to this insanity, resolving to embrace the identity of Calix Shekin while officially accepting my new name. And then the floating menu shimmered back to life as if it heard my thoughts, proving the game's UI was connected to my brain. I stood tall, staring at the hovering statistics like I was just relaxing in front of my computer screen. And honestly, that familiar neon blue light was the only thing keeping me sane in this posh bedroom. This convenient digital display was apparently visible only to me. The secret perk, it was like getting cheat codes in real life, letting me possess world-class knowledge in the strange fantasy realm. This thing was truly amazing. A single thought summoned the data immediately, essentially a futuristic encyclopedia overlaid on my sight. I couldn't stop grinning, realizing how valuable this was for my new existence. Phase 1, stockpile intel before venturing out. My expression darkened considerably. I recalled the game's difficulty, where a single poor decision could mean instant death. I began scanning my personal data. My name was Calix Shekin, I was 15 years old, and my current designation was noble. It was bizarre seeing my new life summarized in stark, clinical text. I discovered I belonged to the direct lineage of the Shekin earldom. I figured I had won the lottery. High-ranking aristocracy usually guarantees resources, influence, and a decent safety net while I gain experience. Sudden, loud rap at the door shattered my focus. Someone was approaching, and I needed to project confidence. My body stiffened, and my gaze shot toward the entrance. I had no clue who it was or how the real Calix behaved. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I internally commanded myself to relax. If I made a mistake and they figured out I was an imposter, my current situation would rapidly become fatal. I drilled my new identity into my mind, repeating it like a strange prayer. I am Calix Shekin, the direct heir of the earldom family. I am Calix Shekin. The maid stood outside, her form visible through the slight opening. I attempted to project an air of authority, demanding to know what she wanted. She carried a tray holding a small bowl, stating that it was time for my medicine in a smooth, professional tone. I settled back, adopting the posture of a refined nobleman, and told her to enter the room. She glided in elegantly, wearing a dark skirt and white apron. She kept her head lowered, projecting an image of total obedience. I tracked her every movement, my gaze following her as she neared the bed. I was searching for the smallest hint that something wasn't quite right. She carefully placed the tray on the nightstand, murmuring softly, "Your medicine." Her gaze remained fixed downward. The very deliberate close-up focused on her assets as she bent over. I internally grumbled, seriously, even in this fantasy world, the fan service never stops. She knelt beside me, presenting the bowl with both hands. She sweetly encouraged me to drink it while it was still hot. My thoughts were racing as I tried to recall if she was a significant character from the game, but I couldn't place her. I quickly realized asking her name would instantly expose me as an imposter. I needed to act normal and keep silent. She glanced up, sensing my delay, and asked if I had a problem. Instantly, a digital status display appeared directly above her head. I mumbled an incoherent response, trying to dismiss her concern. I understood I wouldn't need to actually ask for her name. My cheat system had already provided the information. The full status report for the maid materialized beside her head, displaying a massive block of text detailing her history. I rapidly scanned the details. Her name was Leeler. Alright, Leeler, I thought, let's figure out what secrets you're concealing beneath that pleasant expression. Her profile indicated she was 21 years old, a commoner, and a housekeeper. Then I noticed the affiliation, Viscount Hosheran's estate. Hold on, I thought, this doesn't make sense. My eyes widened in surprise. Why wasn't she tied to the Shekin family, but instead to Viscount Hosheran's forces? And why was this outsider giving me medication? I squinted at her data, reviewing the fine print. To make matters worse, another detail on her profile absolutely terrified me. I glanced at her combat ability and almost gasped. She was a Class 3 warrior, essentially a special forces operative in maid's clothing, a true expert among experts. I stared at the girl, suddenly feeling a cold dread creep into my veins. She appeared to be a sweet, completely harmless housekeeper, yet she had the skills to easily end me in moments. I stayed at the medicine bowl, my thoughts spinning out of control. The wounded noble from the Seiken family was being attended by a maid from rival territory, bringing medication. My instincts for survival were screaming bloody murder, telling me to avoid this liquid at all costs. This wasn't a healing potion, this was definitely poison. Lilo tilted her head slightly, maintaining that unnerving smile, and inquired about my hesitation. She was standing perfectly still, waiting patiently for me to accept the bowl. I attempted to sound nonchalant, suggesting she just leave the bowl on the table, but she instantly refused, demanding I drink it right now. She leaned in closer, her smile transforming into an unsettling, a natural rictus. She repeated her demand to please take it, her voice suddenly containing a sharp warning. Panic surged through me, realizing this woman intended to force me to consume the poison. I was essentially trapped in bed with a highly skilled assassin. I had to devise a solution immediately. I grabbed my chest and let out a dramatic, exaggerated cry about a sudden pain. I truly hoped my theatrical skills surpassed my non-existent fighting ability. My staged heart attack was successful. Leelor was so shocked that she fumbled the tray, sending the bowl of dark fluid soaring into the air. Perfector, I thought. The bowl tumbled through the air in agonizing slow motion, splashing the suspicious liquid across the floor. I believed my desperate maneuver had succeeded flawlessly. The tray crashed onto the ground with a loud bang, and Leela failed to catch it in time. I observed the ensuing chaos while continuing to feign my intense suffering. Leela fell to her knees, gazing intently at the liquid soaking into the carpet. Her face remained concealed, and she was eerily silent for an extended period. When she finally looked up, her expression was entirely different. She was absolutely livid. Well, this is terrible, I realized. I've just provoked a highly dangerous assassin. I landed face first on the mattress as the poison bowl launched into the air, but this maid possessed reflexes that were far beyond superhuman. Leela blurred into motion, capturing the bowl mid-flight before a single drop could touch the rug. She returned to her standing position, holding the bowl perfectly stable, acting as if nothing unusual had occurred. I was internally screaming in disbelief at her impossibly fast reaction time. I simply hadn't anticipated this kind of ability from a simple housekeeper. My gaze darted around the room, confirming I was in profound difficulty. I understood that if we made eye contact now, she would see my fear and realize I had deliberately knocked the bowl over to prevent being poisoned. I hunched forward, letting out another exaggerated groan, maintaining my pretense of a heart attack. Leela remained standing behind me, completely silent like an ominous statue, which is infinitely more frightening when you know she's a hidden operative. With the serene demeanor of a seasoned professional delivering bad news, she extended the tray once more, reassuring me the medicine was perfectly harmless. Apparently, avoiding my daily dose was no longer an option, a fact I pondered while perched precariously on the bed's edge, my pores practically weeping from anxiety as Leela stood over me like a grim reaper with a prescription pad. I reminded myself to brace for the absolute worst outcomes. The strategy I'd learned often materialized with unsettling accuracy in this twisted game. The innocuous bowl, I was certain, contained a direct express lane to the great beyond, and while I refused to sip from the cup of doom, I found myself thoroughly trapped by a woman capable of dispatching me with a mere dessert utensil. The fierce resolve hardened my features. Passive acceptance was no longer on the menu. I simply couldn't remain rooted to this spot, patiently waiting the delivery of my last supper. Without a moment's hesitation, I lunged, snatching the bowl from her grasp. Leela visibly recoiled, her gaze flaring with surprise from behind her fringe, and she even asked if I was well as I clung tightly to the dish. Her oval swift concern, however, screamed red flag louder than a fire alarm at mine convention, suggesting this was no ordinary household assistant. I promptly reactivated her status screen, realizing this was my sole opportunity to pinpoint a vulnerability, meticulously sifting through her biographical details to uncover the true identity of her employer. I swiftly connected the dots of this convoluted familial saga, deducing that I was the offspring of the Count's first, now departed, spouse, the quintessential wicked stepmother, craving the family fortune, and naturally, I was smack dab in the center of her nefarious machinations. All the puzzle pieces slammed into place when I spotted the name Kaushalen emblazoned on her digital profile, a familiar surname I recognized as my stepmother's maiden moniker. This maid, then, was clearly an elaborate setup, dispatched to discreetly dispose of me. My gaze remained fixed on the luminous blue display, validating every one of my darkest suspicions. Leela was merely a pawn in my stepmother's grand scheme, deployed to ensure I never laid claim to the prestigious sheikdom and earldom. Imagine a still image, capturing Leela cloaked in menacing shadows, the chilling aura radiating from her. While she presented the facade of an ordinary housemaid, her eyes possessed that unsettling, soulless glint typically reserved for professional killers. Her reasoning, though straightforward, was lethal. My demise would elevate her son to the esteemed position of Count. She had been rigorously groomed as an enforcer, specifically tasked with eradicating any hindrance to the second wife's lineage. Rather than succumbing to terror, the mischievous, almost unhinged, smirk stretched across my lips. "Oh, this is rather entertaining," I mused, acknowledging that the legendary high difficulty of this game was at last revealing its true colors. I casually brushed off the incident, assuring her everything was perfectly fine. Thank you very much, as I returned the bowl. My mind, however, was already a whirlwind of tactical maneuvers, plotting my imminent reversal of fortune. Fixing her with an unsettlingly confident stare and a sly grin, I inquired after my stepmother's welfare, essentially detonating a conversational hand grenade just to observe the ensuing chaos. Leela visibly recoiled, her gaze dilating with authentic astonishment. Clearly, she hadn't anticipated the ostensibly frail young lord to so nonchalantly inquire about the countess, especially not immediately after a brush with the Grim Reaper. Swiftly regaining her composure, she declared the countess had been utterly devastated upon learning of my alleged self-inflicted demise. She was certainly piling on the emotional manipulation, attempting to sustain her innocent charade. A sudden hush fell over me as I processed the unsettling fact that this body's prior inhabitant harbored suicidal inclinations. This revelation instantly made my stepmother's wicked scheme disturbingly flawless. If I perished from this so-called remedy, the consensus would be that I had simply completed the task myself. My gaze drifted downwards to the prominent scar marring my chest, precisely where the status display indicated I had, apparently, wounded myself. The searing agony I'd experienced moments before suddenly clarified itself with chilling precision. Lifting my head, I solemnly vowed to cease causing any further distress to the countess. Liller, with a respectful dip of her head, informed me that her mistress would be immensely relieved to learn this a perfectly generic, pre-programmed response straight out of an in-game character script. I curtly informed her she was free to depart, attempting to usher her out so I could devise a proper strategy. Her swift exit was paramount before I initiated the subsequent stage of my schemes. Liller, however, remained rooted to the spot, unmoving. She raised her head, fixing me with an unnervingly dark stare, and declared, with an apology that rang utterly hollow, that I had yet to consume my prescribed dose. The entire pleasant servant charade was, at this point, visibly crumbling. My jaw slackened, suspended in sheer disbelief. This woman possessed an unnerving tenacity, her form practically radiating a visible, malevolent, purple glow of homicidal intent. The stark truth dawned on me. She had no intention of departing until I had swallowed the deadly concoction. So, there I was, confined in a chamber with a seasoned executioner and a goblet brimming with death. What a perfectly dreadful turn of events. I settled onto the bed's perimeter, a frigid perspiration slicking my brow. A simple refusal was out of the question. I was confronting a bona fide master of assassination while inhabiting a body as robust as a wet paper bag. I inwardly bemoaned my predicament, stuck as a healthy, 30-something consciousness trapped within the frail shell of a mere adolescent. Physically, I was unmatched by every conceivable metric. I momentarily entertained the notion of crying out for assistance, but a cold certainty enveloped me. It was a cunning snare. Any commotion, and my throat would be expertly slit long before any guards could even approach the entrance. The sheer intensity of the situation was churning my stomach. I understood that if I fought back with too much vigor, my demise was guaranteed, and it certainly wouldn't be attributed to a gentle chemical compound. My gaze returned to the ominous medicine bowl, pondering if ingesting its contents was truly my sole recourse. Though utterly trapped, my veteran gamer mind relentlessly scoured the metaphorical environment for a clever loophole or advantageous bug. Hold on a second, a sudden epiphany struck me with the force of her falling piano. My eyes fixated on the bowl, the desperate strategy rapidly crystallizing in my thoughts. I questioned aloud, to myself, why she would bother with an elaborate poison when a straightforward stab while I slumbered seemed infinitely more efficient. Administering toxins, after all, involves considerably more finesse than simply introducing a sharp object to the chest. And then it clicked. Her objective was to meticulously skirt any undue scrutiny. If I succumbed to poison, the incident could conveniently be portrayed as a tragically successful suicide attempt, ensuring my stepmother's reputation remained spotless and her hands entirely untainted. My gaze narrowed on the murky liquid, immediately identifying its true nature. This wasn't just some generic toxic brew. It was the particular venom, the very one responsible for my untimely demise no less than 3 separate times during my past playthroughs of this digital world. Liller, ever so helpfully, suggested she could assist me in consuming the vile draft should I find it challenging. Simultaneously, an ominous message, reading slow, creeping death, materialized, solidifying my direst anxieties regarding the concoction. I gripped the bedsheets with white knuckles, pondering the harsh realities of heroic starvers. It became chillingly clear that in this treacherous realm, mere existence hinged entirely upon anticipating and preparing for the most dire possibilities imaginable. The fierce, analytical gleam ignited within my eye. The days of being a trembling child were over. I was now the seasoned game master pro, the legendary player who had conquered even the most supposedly insurmountable digital challenges. The singular principle that had sustained my virtual existence resurfaced, and I embraced it fully in this crucial moment. Always anticipate the absolute worst, it echoed, for that is precisely what is destined to manifest. I understood, with grim certainty, that persistent defiance would only culminate in her physically overpowering me and forcibly administering the draft. Therefore, I resolved to seize command of this precarious predicament. A maniacal cackle erupted from my throat, my voice proclaiming the sheer exhilaration of the moment. I was, astonishingly, relishing the fact that this game refused to temper its intensity, even well past the initial introductory phases. I snatched the bowl from her grasp, eliciting a faint, startled whisper of my lord as she observed me preparing to consume the liquid with an unnervingly self-assured demeanor. I lifted the nefarious container to my mouth and commenced gulping down the deadly concoction without hesitation. Leela remained utterly motionless, observing in stunned quietude. I swallowed the toxic liquid as if it were a revitalizing sports beverage, downing it with absolute abandon. One could almost distinctly hear the exaggerated in-game gulping sound effects as I meticulously emptied the entire receptacle. Leela stood utterly petrified, her crimson eyes fixated in sheer astonishment at my abrupt display of audacious courage. She was undoubtedly concluding that her mission had just become remarkably simpler, yet she certainly hadn't anticipated such enthusiastic cooperation in my own demise. The system alert confirmed my worst fears. The insidious, slow-acting poison had fully taken hold. I managed a small, pained smile through the agony, figuring this whole situation unfolded just like reading a tutorial guide. The venom walloped me like a speeding semi-truck, sending me into a fit of agonizing spasms. I frantically racked my brain for an escape route, scouring the room for a person or object that could intervene before the clock expired. The memory of Russell claiming I survived only due to his rare-grade potion surfaced. It was a textbook video game clue. If a special item appears once, there's always a possibility of finding another one lying around. Recalling Russell's stiff demeanor, I figured the old guy was probably my sole ally in this mess. I focused all my desperation on him, knowing I still needed whatever remnants of that amazing cure might be close by. My eyes shot open with a sudden, sharp clarity. I immediately grasped that my singular opportunity for staying alive meant clearing out the maids so I could ransack the entire place. I glanced at Leela and commanded her to leave immediately, fetching Russell from outside. She hesitated, looking suspicious as she witnessed my pain and questioned my abrupt request. I put on my best spoiled royalty act, snapping back at her about whether I needed to justify my actions to a servant. It was a dangerous bluff, but deploying my noble authority was the fastest way to get her moving. Leela instantly retreated, offering apologies for her oversight before exiting. I watched her disappear, my face hardening into a look of serious determination once she was gone. I understood the specific high-grade potion Russell had applied was my sole salvation, an incredibly rare item worth more than a small fortress, making it the ideal cure. I tracked Leela as she departed, her dark clothing vanishing beyond the entrance. I began counting down, acutely aware of the small time frame I had before her return. The instant the door clicked closed, I launched myself from the mattress. Shivering and covered in sweat, I frantically peered into the corridor to confirm her complete absence. I wasted no time and immediately stuck my fingers down my throat to make myself throw up. I wanted to expel every last molecule of that venom from my body, regardless of how disgusting the process was. I coughed and begged, the shadowy toxin splattering onto the floor in a hideous pool. I fought for my survival, appearing utterly pathetic yet completely committed to staying alive. I crouched over the carpet, gulping for breath while still trying to purge the contents of my stomach. It was a disgusting sight, proving exactly how dedicated I was to finishing this level. I cleaned my face, understanding that throwing up wouldn't be enough to halt the slow, insidious death. The cure absolutely had to be concealed within this chamber, probably stashed here by Russell. I ripped through a huge wooden trunk, tossing garments and documents onto the floor. Cure's destiny might be a difficult challenge, but I was positive a seasoned player like me would find a solution hidden somewhere. I staggered to the dresser, my fingers shaking uncontrollably as I tore open the compartments. I started to panic, whispering desperately that it must be nearby, while the venom drained away my energy. I checked yet another drawer set, only to find it equally deserted. My hope evaporated as my sight started to fade, signaling the final phase of the toxin's effect. I collapsed against the cabinet, receiving the awful notification that my eyes were growing heavier. I roared in anger, realizing I had nearly exhausted all my options. I'd frantically ransacked every nook, turned over every scrap of paper, and yet here I was, still completely empty-handed. The impending system alert hovered above me as my view dissolved into darkness. I looked utterly beaten, my physical self finally surrendering to the venom's deadly impact. I fell forward onto the carpet with a dull thud, encircled by the results of my frantic search. It felt precisely like a game over display as I lay there completely still. While sprawled on the floor, I pondered if dying here meant true permanence or simply a system reboot. I was petrified of actually expiring in this place before I even reached the first level. My eyelids were drooping shut, the sparkle vanishing from my striking teal eyes. I was fading quickly, surrounded by the deepening quiet of the chamber. There was a last, tight shot of my eye rolling back in my head. I hovered near the edge of oblivion, when suddenly I noticed a faint twinkle reflected deep inside my pupil. I spotted a miniature, luminous container pushed far back underneath the furniture. I wondered what it could be, channeling my final shred of awareness onto the enigmatic item. I lay flat on the ground, fixated on the tiny, glowing bottle concealed under the cabinet. This had to be Russell's hidden away, powerful potion, my very last chance at survival. I was practically dead, spread out like roadkill on the carpet. My eyes were unfocused and glassy, yet I managed to glimpse a small flicker of potential salvation beneath the heavy wooden dresser. I stretched out a shaking hand toward the tiny, pale ceramic container concealed in the gloom. This was unquestionably my final and singular opportunity to avoid a game-over screen. I hauled my toxin-ridden carcass over the floor, each movement demanding immense effort. I looked like absolute garbage, but my gaming instincts confirmed that the best loot is always tucked away in inconvenient spots. I finally clutched the container in my hands, gazing at it with frantic intensity. I pondered its contents, desperately wishing it contained the fabled, top-level cure Russell had discussed. Using every bit of remaining energy, I yanked the cork free with a gratifying *pop*. I didn't bother analyzing the contents. I was prepared to gulp down anything to stop the burning agony. I began swallowing the fluid, the sunlight highlighting the container as I consumed it. I was betting all my chips on this mysterious vial I had unearthed beneath the furniture. I instantly retched and recoiled from the jar, my expression contorting with repulsion. I yelled about the flavor of spoiled milk, a colossal disappointment when you're anticipating a powerful magical cure. The system verified my absolute worst fear, rancid goat milk. My inner monologue shrieked about spoiled goat milk. I genuinely put everything on the line for rotten dairy products. But then it dawned on me completely. I recalled from the game Hero's Destiny that yogurt was a classified cure for slow creeping death. I suddenly understood this spoiled milk could potentially save me. I stared at the lumpy, foul-smelling substance with genuine skepticism. I seriously questioned whether this expired goat milk could even qualify as real yogurt. A valid point, but I figured dying people can't afford to be particular. The system's countdown didn't pause for my snack break, flashing a stark red message that my eyelids were drooping. My virtual life was running on fumes, and things looked grim. I felt myself slipping away, still gripping the empty container as the terminal warning popped up again. I genuinely believed I wouldn't survive another 60 seconds before the dreaded permadeath kicked in. I hit the floor with a groan, cursing Leeler, the traitorous maid, under my breath. My final, desperate act was forcing down the disgusting, lumpy yogurt, a sworn vow for revenge fueling my determination. I decided right then I would definitely get payback, chugging the chunky antidote with absolute focus. Everything went completely black as I lost consciousness, entering the terrifying void where you don't know if you're hitting respawn or seeing the game over screen. Russell's stern voice cut through the darkness, asking if I'd finally woken up. The old man, still looking sharp in his red military suit, hovered over me. I jolted awake in bed, eyes wide and completely bewildered. I checked my surroundings, wondering if this was déjà vu or if I'd just cheated death by a respawn loop. Russell stared at me as if I'd lost my mind, asking what on earth I was talking about. The old man clearly wasn't prepared for my full-blown gainer panic. Russell immediately launched into a complaint about the chaotic state of the room, pointing at the mess I'd made during my desperate search for the cure. He explained he found me collapsed on the floor and nearly summoned the healer. I was internally throwing a party, realizing the antidote actually worked and I was alive. I lay there sweating and completely traumatized, vowing never to relive the dying feeling again. I officially declared myself done with the tutorial difficulty and hardened my gaze. No matter what happened, I declared, I would definitely survive. I was completely committed to winning this time, and anyone standing in my way better watch out. I decided it was high time to stop making assumptions and actually learn who I was dealing with. I focused my attention on Russell, planning to check his stats like a good RPG player. I activated my cheat skill immediately, and Russell's face appeared in the glowing reflection of my TLI. I was about to find out exactly what this old soldier was hiding. The status screen for Russell Hursley flashed onto my view, and the first detail I spotted was his title, Acting Count. This guy wasn't just some butler. He held all the authority for the entire territory. I scrolled through the information, noting that since the former Count died airless, Russell was merely a temporary stand-in. This meant the old man actually carried significant political weight. I analyzed Russell's personality, concluding he seemed like a strict, reliable military veteran. Plus, the fact he used a super expensive, castle-level potion to save me early suggested he was probably my most dependable ally. I stammered for a moment before formally addressing him as Acting Count, trying to adopt the proper tone of this world despite feeling like a complete imposter. Russell responded crisply with yes, my lord. As I looked out the window, trying to figure out how to bring up the attempt on my life, Russell's expression was difficult to decipher. He looked like a man who'd witnessed too many conflicts to be easily startled or impressed, waiting patiently for me to get to the point. The room was bathed in moonlight and long, ominous shadows as I tried to explain the maid's betrayal. The air was thick with tension, knowing an assassin might still be lurking somewhere nearby. Russell turned away, gazing through the window. He appeared skeptical of the maid poisoning story, which was exactly the reaction I feared. Russell apologized politely, but bluntly pointed out there was no physical evidence. He was a man of strict protocols and proof, and right now, I had absolutely zero proof that the milk was ever poisoned. I looked incredibly frustrated, muttering a quiet curse to myself. I realized having a cheat status screen didn't automatically mean non-player characters would blindly accept everything I claimed. I admitted that even though Russell had saved my life, he didn't do it because he loved me. He was simply following protocol and executing his duties as the Acting Count. Russell made his position abundantly clear. To him, both me and my rival, Lord Grunvin, were equals. He was obligated to serve us both impartially, which was his polite way of declaring total neutrality. He emphasized his point by clenching his fist, asserting that without solid witnesses or concrete proof, he couldn't take action against anyone. It was a complete and utter political stalemate. I started to get heated, asking if Russell was seriously telling me I needed to keep taking poison, pointing out how absolutely insane the current situation was. Russell asked if I had truly suffered memory loss, explaining that the Shaken family was in serious financial difficulties. We tried to justify the current chaotic state of affairs. He claimed it was a blessing that Leeler, the maid from the rival house, was now helping with the family business. Talk about being completely oblivious to the impending danger. Russell looked at me with a tired expression, asking if I didn't remember, clearly thinking my injury was making me difficult. I clutched the bedsheets tightly, understanding I had absolutely no choice. I had to somehow produce undeniable proof if I wanted anyone to take me seriously. A calculating look crossed my face as I thought about Leeler. I figured that the woman who poisoned me must be certain I was dead. I was already planning to use her overconfidence against her. I sighed dramatically and told Russell, "Fine, let's just drop the subject for now." I pretended to let everyone lower their guard, then flashed a devious grin that might make a demon nervous. I added that I had just one request, and it really wasn't too difficult, which everyone knew meant I was cooking up something absolutely wild. Russell watched me go, pondering to himself how differently I was acting than usual. The old soldier was starting to suspect that the fragile, weak boy he knew was gone for good. Fast forward 4 hours later to Shekin Castle. The sun had completely set, coating the castle in dark, gloomy shadows, creating the perfect atmosphere for a midnight assassination. An exterior shot showed the castle towers under the pale moonlight. The guards were on high alert, their torches moving like fireflies across the balconies as they rigorously patrolled the perimeter. A close-up showed quiet, professional boots moving along the stone walkway. This person clearly knew exactly how to move without making a single sound. It was Leeler, no longer in her maid outfit. She wore a dark, hooded cloak, looking like a proper professional assassin, letting out a soft sound of relief after slipping past the outer defenses. She carefully peeked over the balcony edge, observing the guards patrolling below. Armed with pole arms and torches, they remained completely oblivious to the elite assassin who had effortlessly bypassed their watch. The increased security measures were exactly as she predicted, making her cold expression even more focused. This wasn't a casual visit. She was here to terminate the contract, taking zero chances. She spotted a tiny vent and advanced toward it with practiced, nearly supernatural grace. She was essentially a ghost in a ninja suit, completely undetectable unless you had a very good reason to be looking for a murderous shadow. She landed in the hallway without making a sound, her cloak dramatically billowing as she settled into a low crouch. Her movements were ridiculously graceful, like watching a Class 3 warrior perform gymnastics. When she arrived at my room, the lack of guards was immediately surprising. For a brief second, she wondered if the lack of security was, perhaps, the slightly too obvious trap. She cautiously peered through the doorway, her eyes scanning the dimly lit chamber for any signs of movement. She remained completely poised for immediate retreat, ready to flee at the first hint of trouble. She spotted the familiar shape of her human form beneath the bedsheets, lying perfectly still in the center of the large, shadowy room. It seemed I was exactly where I should be, apparently deceased on my mattress. She looked at the motionless figure, letting out a small sigh of relief. This meant the entire scheme, orchestrated by the wicked stepmother, was proceeding without a hitch. She mentally reassured herself that, given the specific type of toxin used, my passing must have been entirely painless. It was almost like she was trying to convince herself she had done me a favor. Reaching into her cloak, she retrieved a folded piece of paper, the fabricated suicide note designed to make my sudden demise look less suspicious. She efficiently searched my desk drawers with gloved hands, looking specifically for the family's official seal. She located a small box and extracted the stamp, which contained the authentic seal of the shaken direct family. This was precisely what she required to make her blatant forgery completely convincing. Carefully, she pressed the stamp onto the note, the sound echoing in the stillness. She inwardly congratulated herself on a successful night, certain that I was now ancient history. Suddenly, a cold steel blade pressed against her throat. A shadowy figure materialized behind her, completely overriding her elite senses. She froze in sheer terror as a familiar voice spoke, and her heart sank when she realized the supposedly dead lord was holding a knife to her neck. That's what you call a serious plot twist. The tables had officially flipped, and now I was the one holding the cold steel blade to Leeler's throat. I clenched my jaw tight as I held her life in my grasp, watching her face twist with panic and disbelief. Her perfectly executed plan had just detonated in her face. Even with the sharp blade pressed against her skin, she attempted to sound tough, shouting that her work was already finished. She was still desperately hoping that the he's already dead card would somehow work in her favor. The camera pans to the disheveled bed as she continues to insist Lord Calix was a corpse. The irony, of course, was that the very person currently holding a knife to her throat was very much alive and perfectly healthy. She had already begun celebrating the demise of the shaken family, believing only the Grunban heir remained. Her internal monologue revealed exactly how deep the conspiracy to seize the inheritance actually ran. Leeler yelled out for Lord Russell as the acting count appeared in the light, looking as stern and unimpressed as a garden gnome. She desperately hoped he would assist her, but she was in for a rude awakening. Leeler's face was half-shrouded in shadow, her eyes narrowing with the malice of her cornered cat. She understood she was in serious trouble, but an elite assassin always has an escape plan hidden up her sleeve. She attempted to lecture Russell on his loyalty, insisting he should be serving the family rather than engaging in whatever this was. Russell simply returned her stare, completely silent, refusing to budge. I emerged from the darkness behind her, maintaining the blade against her neck. I remarked, as expected, just as I predicted, sounding far too relaxed for a person who should currently be dying from poison. Leeler's eyes bulged with pure astonishment, as the full realization that she had been completely upside dawned on her. The only sound she could produce was a shocked gasp as she saw the supposedly dead lord working and torquing. I leaned in with a slight expression, bathed in a backlighting effect that mocked her predicament. I casually referred to her slowly creeping death as quite stimulating. which is essentially the ultimate power move. I dropped some hard truths on her, explaining that in noble family feuds, poisonings are just another Tuesday. Leela stared at me as if I were a ghost, desperately trying to formulate an escape strategy in her head. I retrieved the fraudulent suicide note, examining it with a profoundly bored expression. I wasn't impressed by her penmanship, noting that this evidence, if found, would be rather problematic. I essentially held all the proof required to have her immediately executed. Leela gritted her teeth so hard they might have chipped, letting out a frustrated, muffled sound. She realized that her victim wasn't merely alive. He was a full-blown nightmare. Leela attempted a desperate escape, but Russell was having none of it. He moved like a speedster, immediately neutralizing her attempt before she could even take a single step. The speed was truly impressive. Russell practically teleported to get behind her. Leela's eyes went wide as she realized she was dealing with a genuinely high-level warrior, not just a count. Russell delivered a devastating strike that sent Leela tumbling to the ground. She screamed in agony as the acting count demonstrated exactly why he held power. Russell pinned her down with an iron-like grip, making it clear the battle had ended before it ever really started. The camera zoomed in on a powerful, armored fist. Russell was definitely not holding anything back. This guy was a total battle tank, and there was absolutely no way this assassin was getting away. Russell seized her by both the collar and her hair, effortlessly hauling her upright as if she weighed nothing. The disparity in power was absolutely ridiculous, and poor Leela was now just along for the journey. I watched the entire event unfold with a chillingly serene smile, completely impressed by the whole production, wondering if this was the three-class difference I saw on everyone's status screens. Russell stood like a titan, glowing with a terrifying purple Marner aura that took up all the space, representing the acting count in his full Warlord glory, and it was absolutely magnificent. I looked down at the captured Leela, reminding her that even in basic poisonings, you never leave evidence or witnesses behind, fully embracing my role as a self-appointed dungeon master. I laid down the hammer, declaring that anyone who attempts to assassinate a noble will face immediate execution with zero exceptions. Leela looked up with fear and hatred as she realized her fate was sealed, while I stood by the desk, casually pointing out all the evidence right there in the room, looking like a detective who solved the easiest case in history. I strolled over to the bound assassin in bare feet, radiating an aura of utter relaxation to highlight how little of a threat she posed. Getting close enough to invade her personal bubble, I pointed a finger and asked about any remaining evidence she was attempting to conceal or destroy. Leela looked completely broken, her eyes glassy and unfocused as the full weight of her failure sank in. She went from an elite assassin to a helpless prisoner in less time than it takes to make instant ramen. Leela suddenly passed out, either from stress or a minor injury, leaving me completely confused. I genuinely wondered why my key witness decided to take a spontaneous power nap. Russell knelt down to check on her, wondering why she suddenly changed and fainted. He looked concerned that perhaps he had applied a bit too much force during the initial confrontation. I simply stood there with my hands on my hips, stating the obvious fact that she had fainted, appearing far more annoyed by the interruption than concerned for her well-being. Russell reached out, likely using his Marner to check her condition or search for hidden weapons. He was being incredibly meticulous, behaving exactly like the seasoned veteran he was. The bright purple sphere of Marner glowed in Russell's hand as he scanned her body, revealing high-level detection magic in action. While I made mental notes for my future skill tree development, I immediately recognized the Marner hold technique and realized I could finally understand the class gap between Russell and Leela, essentially using the system's knowledge to power level my own brain. Russell stood up straight, commenting that these assassins lacked the ability to use Marner breathing techniques, proving they weren't exactly high-level bosses. He seemed relieved to discover they were just elite soldiers and not something truly problematic, like a dragon or a tax auditor. Russell estimated they were probably only on par with well-trained elite soldiers, meaning there was no need for expensive, high-speed Marner restraints, and he was already planning out their prison accommodations. Russell suddenly looked genuinely shocked when he caught sight of the bizarre expression on my face, realizing the fragile young master he knew might be hiding a much darker personality underneath. I maintained this knowing, eerie stare into the distance, prompting Russell to completely freak out internally, wondering if I possessed some kind of sixth sense and already knew exactly how everything would unfold. I flashed a subtle, unsettling smile and casually declared that it wasn't a big deal at all, essentially acting like I had just finished a mundane tutorial mission rather than surviving an assassination attempt. Russell just stared at me, absolutely convinced my behavior was a complete departure from the norm, and the kid he was supposed to protect had somehow become a bit intimidating. We stood over the bound and unconscious Leela, now secured in a chair in a more interrogation-friendly location. I mentioned I had a laundry list of questions, making it perfectly clear that I wouldn't be gentle in seeking answers from her. Russell poured a small amount of bright red liquid onto her restrained hands, possibly an antidote or just something to jolt her awake. It looked clinical and completely devoid of warmth. She woke up with a sudden, sharp gasp, her eyes snapping open in pure terror. The first thing she saw was the dimly lit room and the two men silently waiting for her to start talking. My face was completely obscured by shadows, making me look exactly like a villain from a cheap horror movie, as I simply stared her down, allowing the uncomfortable silence to do all the heavy lifting. Leela looked up, tears welling in her eyes, utterly broken as she finally grasped there was no mercy or escape coming from this new me. Puddled over, she murmured about drinking slowly creeping death, clearly haunted by the very poison she tried to use on me. She explained that the poison would have caused a slow, painless death over 3 to 6 hours. Her face looked ghostly pale as she recounted the details of her failed murder weapon. I leaned in close as she confessed that because of my previous suicide attempt, the poison was chosen to appear like a perfect, poured, self-inflicted end. I listened to her confession with cold, calculating fascination. I stood up straight with a backlit, wicked grin, thoroughly mocking her entire strategy. I pointed out that everyone would have simply assumed I finally finished myself off, making her job ridiculously simple. I informed her that if she had opted for a fast-acting poison and possessed the determination to die with me, she wouldn't have failed, essentially providing professional consulting services on how to be a better assassin. I got right into her personal space, my eyes glowing ominously as I asked one single, terrifying question: why? I wanted to understand the motive behind the woman who tried to abruptly end my new life. Leela looked totally lost, muttering a quiet, disoriented what? While Russell watched from the background, likely wondering exactly where this ruthless and calculating new version of me originated from. Russell stared at me, his brow furrowed with utter confusion. Even the loyal acting count was struggling to keep up with my rapid-fire, drastic personality shift. The Heimer dropped with a heady question from me, asking if she truly desired death. I'd seen straight through her feeble excuse of duty and refused to let her hide behind that flimsy professional facade. I turned up the heat, questioning her true dedication to Countess Stellar, suggesting she lacked the commitment. As I chipped away at her resolve, Leela looked ready to combust, her eyes spitting metaphorical fire. I pressed further, labeling her a coward who clearly loved her own existence more than her assigned task. I nodded toward Russell, giving him permission to proceed with the conversation, which basically meant I was done with pleasantries and ready for his more persuasive techniques. Russell's grip clamped down on her jaw, a powerful and unyielding squeeze. Leela yelled that this was ridiculous, but her eyes clearly broadcasted pure panic about the imminent future. The tight shot focused on Leela's eye, revealing my reflection in the pupil, like the hunter seeing the trapped prey. The tables had turned completely, and she stared directly at her own personal boogeyman. I presented a small, luminous purple gem I had conveniently extracted from her cloak. I inquired about its purpose, genuinely fascinated by the new toy I'd just looted from this assassin's inventory. Russell held her jaw open as a noxious gray liquid was poured down her throat. Leela immediately gagged, the smell alone making her stomach turn as she was force-fed this unpleasant concoction. Leela was choking and vomiting as the disgusting gray substance was forcefully administered. The scene made it clear we were absolutely not messing around with pleasantries anymore. Russell made certain every drop went down, following my command without a sliver of hesitation. Leela slumped against her buns, letting out muffled cries of agony while struggling to catch her breath. Her professional training was thoroughly defeated by my completely ruthless methods. Russell maintained his vice-like grip on her jaw, ensuring not a single drop was wasted. Leela started drooling uncontrollably, looking completely defeated as her eyes began to roll back from the intensity. Leela let out a spine-chilling scream as she was forced to ingest whatever foul brew we had prepared. She stared at us in absolute terror, trying to comprehend exactly what kind of nasty stuff we had just poisoned her with. Leela remained bound to the chair, thoroughly disheveled and gasping for air. Her professional facade was completely shattered, and she stared up at me with wide eyes, frantically demanding to know the identity of the poison I'd just used. I stood there completely unimpressed, as if confirming her order at a fast food drive-thru, simply stating that I had just fed her poison. The look of utter shock on her face clearly indicated she hadn't anticipated this particular menu item. Panic set in as Leela's red eyes trembled, repeating the word poison in utter disbelief. She hadn't expected this seemingly delicate young noble to possess the audacity to poison her in return. I then revealed the name, Cetus's puppet, a legendary and lethal substance, visualized by a fearsome purple flame Grim Reaper. Leela shrieked that it was a lie, arguing it was completely impossible for a count's son to acquire such a legendary substance. I locked eyes with her and explained that having enough gold makes everything accessible. I then started rattling off technical jargon about specific ingredients like white nappers, using my gamer expertise to flex on her. Both Leela and Russell watched in shock as I displayed an encyclopedic knowledge of illegal toxins. Russell stared at me as if he'd just seen a ghost, his mustache practically twitching with pure astonishment. He simply could not believe the young man he protected for years possessed such deep, practical knowledge of high-level assassination tools. I gave Leela a completely empty stare, a look that conveyed omniscience. She was speechless, her mind probably screaming impossible repeatedly. I inwardly mused that with the proper terminology, no one would ever suspect my true origins. Leveraging my decade of gaming experience, I was playing the hidden genius perfectly. I declared I would release her right away, leaving both Leela and Russell completely confused. My final order was specific: go back and report that the assassination was a success, turning her into my unwitting messenger for a long-term deception. I began to work away, pausing just long enough to ask if she genuinely believed she had any option other than following my instructions. She was completely trapped, and we both knew it. I leaned in, giving her a cold, intense look, and asked the crucial question: you don't want to die, do you? While she processed the offer in silence. The system intel revealed that Cetus's puppet possessed over 3,000 different antidotes, depending on its specific formulation. This made it the perfect psychological weapon, as only the person who brewed it knew the precise cure. I flashed a wicked grin and informed her that the exact antidote was conveniently located in my possession. I enjoyed dangling her life in front of her, savoring every moment of this power play. Leela, still bound to the chair, looked completely defeated as she stared down at the floor. I instructed her to stop being so stubborn and simply listen if she wished to avoid dying a completely pointless death. The frame focused on Leeler's legs, revealing she was literally trembling from a combination of fear and physical distress. The poison might have been a complete fabrication, but the psychological manipulation was working perfectly. Russell cast a long shadow over her in the dimly lit room, pressing her one final time for her response. The visible purple aura around Leeler indicated she was under immense duress, both physically and psychologically. Leeler was sweating profusely, her eyes wide with desperation as she looked up at Russell. She had finally reached her absolute breaking point and was moments away from revealing every last detail. Russell watched her with a steady, frigid gaze, patiently waiting for the words to spill forth. He did not seem to possess a single shred of mercy remaining for this captured assassin. Leeler completely lost it, screaming, "Alright, fine, just let me go." She had completely given up, abandoning her professional duties in exchange for basic survival. I adopted a genuinely surprised expression and questioned her disrespectful tone. I reminded her that I was technically saving her life, so she should really exhibit some basic manners. Leeler was completely shattered, pleading desperately for me to release her immediately. She was reduced to tears and tremors, a complete transformation from the elite assassin persona she presented earlier. Russell leaned in suspiciously, asking what was happening. He found her sudden compliance highly suspect and refused to believe her change of heart was real. A hilarious chibi version showed Leela begging for mercy while I maintained a smug expression. I inwardly gloated that the rotten goat's milk trick had succeeded beyond my expectations. I then ordered Russell to finally release her, which left him completely stunned. Russell immediately pushed back, asking if I was truly serious, given that she had just tried to assassinate me. He was visibly uncomfortable with the idea of releasing a highly trained kill back into the wild. I settled onto the cushions with an air of sophisticated indifference. I declared that she was a crucial witness and deserved fundamental respect, acting like I was the hero of a drama. I was basically pulling the classic "I'm better than you" routine for the cameras. Russell looked absolutely bewildered, his expression morphing into a giant, visible question mark. He sputtered something about basic respect, completely missing my brilliant strategy. Meanwhile, Leela stayed sprawled on the floor, untied but still complaining loudly for us to speed things along. It seemed her true self was less silent assassin and more petulant toddler. The deep flush crept up her cheeks. She looked like she might start bawling from pure humiliation. Her sleek, deadly assassin persona vanished instantly, replaced by the image of a thoroughly annoyed teenager. The camera pulled back to show the castle exterior beneath a clear sky, but her desperate, "Please hurry," could still be heard echoing from the windows. The interrogation had definitely reached a higher decibel level. Leela had put her hooded cloak back on and was kneeling before Russell and me. I reiterated my instructions for her to go report that the assassination had been completed successfully. Russell and I watched her depart from the doorway, engulfed in an oppressive silence. I pointed out that we still required someone to tamper with the nightly records to make the fabrication believable. The view zoomed in on a heavy wooden door as my voice faded out, saying, "And that person would be." The air thickened with anticipation for my dramatic announcement. I stared directly into Russell's eyes, finishing my statement with a serene, "My lord." I had just assigned him the most morally questionable element of my brilliant scheme. Russell looked unconvinced, questioning where in the world I had gathered such specific intelligence. He was starting to suspect I wasn't merely odd, but perhaps some kind of strategic mastermind. I offered a nonchalant grin and asked Russell if he'd accept my explanation that I simply read it all in various books. I really wasn't in the mood to explain the whole alternate dimension thing just yet. Russell immediately turned serious, noting that publishing such dangerous information would result in immediate execution. He insisted it was highly unlikely for such a forbidden volume to be lying around. The screen acquired a blue filter as I mentally acknowledged my current fabrication was weak. I figured no one would ever believe I actually fell out of another dimension. I quickly shifted gears, asking Russell if he recalled the dagger I used to stab myself in the chest. I adopted a grave expression while mentioning the unpleasant incident. Russell looked bewildered, wondering why on earth I was mentioning that at this specific moment. I stood beside the bed, peering ready to divulge even more of my complicated family history. I revealed that the dagger itself represented a source of power, which I had finally managed to acquire this time around. Russell was completely flabbergasted, his jaw dropping as he responded with a simple, "Really?" My elaborate new origin story for my abilities had successfully captivated him. I figured Russell didn't actually buy my explanation, but I pressed on regardless. I realized it was highly improbable anyone would guess that stabbing yourself in the heart was their key to unlocking the dagger's full potential. Russell fell into a deep contemplation, staring at the door and murmuring that things felt odd. As a highly intelligent individual, he was attempting to align my current narrative with all his existing knowledge. I averted my gaze, beads of perspiration forming on my brow, as Russell pondered that if the item was genuinely unique, its fame would be universal. My carefully constructed fabrication was beginning to show cracks once again. My vision narrowed as I understood I needed to quickly change course. Could this be the one? I wondered, frantically digging through my memories for a better name. I stood abruptly and inquired if Russell was familiar with Claire's legendary dagger. I tossed out a deep-cut lore item, desperately hoping it would stick. The screen went dark as Russell's expression brightened with understanding. Success, I thought. I finally hit on a legendary item that he actually recognized. Russell was completely sold now, commending me for my extensive understanding of mythical artifacts. I just stood there, Feeling awkward but immensely grateful my guess paid off, I scanned the surroundings with a wary glance as a massive BUT text bubble popped into existence. Of course, I muttered to myself, there's always a drawback in this wretched place. Russell's face instantly became terrifyingly serious. He leaned forward and demanded to know if anyone else was aware of this information. He looked genuinely prepared to eliminate anyone who might have overheard our conversation. I felt rather cowed by the old soldier's intensity, stammering out that Russell was absolutely the first person I'd shared this with. My entire body felt the strain of maintaining my intricate web of deceit. Russell visibly relaxed, reverting to his normal demeanor and saying, "Then, by the way," indicating he was ready to shift subjects, which was a huge relief for me. Russell inquired about my opinion on Leeler's narrative. We were positioned in the center of the room, encircled by bookshelves filled with volumes of history. He adopted a solemn expression and revealed that every single one of Count Karin's movements had been compromised. It was obvious the treachery within the estate ran far deeper than a single person could account for. I cast my eyes downwards, my hair obscuring my expression, as I pointed out that a knight on the brink of an elite class promotion had supposedly died from a simple monster attack. I definitely sensed something fishy about the official explanation. Russell scoffed and asked if I genuinely accepted such a preposterous tale, making it clear he was just as skeptical of the monster alibi as I was. I leaned forward in contemplation, mulling over the entire situation. I confessed that while I couldn't involve myself directly in a political power struggle, there was certainly ample reason to be suspicious about Count Karin's death. A hand tightly grasped a sword held as a large no bubble materialized on screen. It appeared someone was making an unyielding decision about which side they supported. The wide angle showed me seated while Russell loomed above me. Russell emphatically stated that as a professional soldier, he absolutely declined to engage in political maneuvering. This was his fundamental guiding principle. Russell seemed slightly emotional as he looked down at my face. My internal monologue, however, was yelling about why my father had to perish, revealing my true underlying motivation for everything. We were viewed from a distance behind us, the room completely quiet as we both contemplated our next actions. My fists were tightly clenched, and my entire body thrummed with contained rage. The final frame captured me looking upward with a truly terrifying, manic grin. I asked, "How shall we seek vengeance?" And everyone knew exactly how horrific the answer would be. I delivered a massive truth bomb to Russell, flatly stating that his father, once his master, had been assassinated. The swirling vortex of darkness behind me made it clear how utterly devastating this news was. The camera focused on my agitated footsteps while I revealed the Kosherin family orchestrated the whole murder for Grunbin's advancement. I was essentially sketching out a detailed organizational chart for a high-stakes political conspiracy. Standing tall, I announced that Grunbin taking the Count's chair meant revenge was officially cancelled. I gave a motivational speech, insisting we couldn't give up just because the situation looked impossible. My expression was incredibly intense, half-shadowed as I stared directly forward, essentially letting my inner mastermind calculate how to completely dismantle the competition. The tight shot captured my glowing teal eye as I challenged Russell on his sense of honor. I questioned whether it was truly chivalrous to keep serving a family that had specifically plotted a murder. It was a high-level manipulation technique disguised as a moral inquiry. From behind, Russell's shoulders were hunched over as he attempted to process the massive moral dilemma I created for him. You could almost hear him internally screaming, realizing that 5 decades of unwavering loyalty might have been completely wasted on the wrong people. Russell remained completely silent, his expression a chaotic mask as he kept his gaze fixed on the floor. He had always been defined by his principles, and I had just completely shredded them like confetti at a party. The seasoned veteran finally made his move, stepping forward with an air of absolute determination. He had arrived at a decision that would single-handedly alter the entire trajectory of the territory's future. Russell dropped dramatically to one knee and pledged his absolute allegiance, drawing his sword in a flourish. This was the epic moment where the most formidable warrior in the entire region officially changed loyalties. I offered him a soft, almost sympathetic smile, addressing him by the title Commander Russell. I understood the profound weight of what had just occurred, yet I was already focusing on the however that inevitably comes next in my strategic plans. Russell looked up, enveloped in a truly terrifying purple aura, reminding me that he had just discarded 5 decades worth of personal convictions for this very moment. He resembled a demon that had been unleashed, and it was clear he was not going to be patient about the outcome. I was mentally celebrating, quickly realizing that Russell, a high-level rank 6 warrior, had become my most powerful ally. This felt exactly like bagging a legendary boss-level character right at the beginning of the campaign. The narration referred to Russell as a tiger who had been walking a silent path, but now he was firmly harnessed by the reins of vengeance. The spectral tiger appearing behind him was unquestionably a display of pure intimidation. Russell immediately transitioned back to practical matters, bluntly stating that he had no need to swear allegiance to someone who lacked an official knightly title at the moment. He was certainly being grouchy about it, but I understood his underlying good intentions. In a humorous chibi moment, Russell threatened to give me specific training designed to make me strong. I started sweating profusely, frantically trying to change the subject before he made me complete 500 push-ups. The camera panned out to capture a wide shot of the library as I began explaining the details of the strategy. I noted that the Countess had been exceptionally sloppy, leaving behind both evidence and numerous witnesses who could easily lead to her downfall. I flashed a truly devious, supervillain-grade smirk, declaring that this was only the very first act of our revenge. I appeared to be having far too much fun playing this very serious game of high-stakes political manipulation. Russell watched me intently, clearly ready to jump into action. He asked, "So then, what precisely should this old man do now?" He was completely committed to executing whatever chaotic plan I had managed to devise. My sinister smile widened as I responded, "For now," just as the scene cut to an exterior shot of the castle, where a palpable sense of calm before the massive storm hung in the air. We then cut to a grand view of the meeting hall, where nobles were gathered in their best attire. It looked like a typical court session, but the tension in the atmosphere was thick enough to cut with a knife. Countess Stella was present, looking regal and smug as she hid behind her red fan. She was absolutely convinced she had already won, surveying the room as if she were the queen of the castle. The common nobles were busily whispering to each other, wondering aloud why the countess was currently seated upon the throne and why the knights had been on high alert throughout the entire night. The rumors were spreading incredibly fast through the hall. Stella lowered her fan just enough to reveal a nasty little smirk underneath. She began her address, mentioning that, "Some of you may already be aware concerning my predicament." She then formally announced that I had attempted to take my own life using the legendary creeping death poison. She was selling the lie perfectly, embodying the persona of her grieving stepmother. An old bearded advisor chimed in about how famous that particular suicide poison was, sounding as if he had already finalized my obituary. The entire court was accepting the lie as gospel without raising a single question. The whispering grew more intense as people concurred that my death was now unavoidable. They were already treating me as a historical footnote, which was precisely the outcome the countess was attempting to orchestrate. Another noble loudly proclaimed that, since the first prince was effectively deceased, my entire political faction was completely meaningless. The power dynamics in the room visibly shifted as everyone turned their attention toward Stella's side. Stella looked as though she was floating on cloud nine, convinced that with me out of the picture, her son Grunbin was guaranteed the count's position. She was practically calculating her future profits in her head already. The question of who would be the next count lingered, yet everyone in the room agreed it was already a done deal. They were simply waiting the official coronation ceremony. The narrator noted that Stella was currently acting as a proxy count, making the unfolding drama significantly more interesting. The design of the hall truly gave off the feel of her stage play. Stella turned toward the position where Russell usually stood, asking if he was prepared. The camera immediately cut to a close-up of her glowing teal eye at the very bottom of the frame. The true star of this performance was clearly about to make his grand entrance. A close-up of a pair of high-quality boots walking purposely toward the hall was shown. The voice responded confidently, "Of course, we'll follow you to the very end." Russell was standing at the entrance, fully clad in gleaming silver armor, looking like an absolute powerhouse. He shouted for his lord just before the doors burst open. Stella and her son Grunbin turned to look toward the entrance, likely anticipating a very formal ceremony. Grunbin looked incredibly bored, completely oblivious to the impending disaster heading straight toward him. The enormous wooden doors burst open with a deafening thud, scattering a cloud of dust and light across the hall. It was a definitive, I have returned, entrance for any protagonist worth their salt. There I stood, my blonde hair gleaming in the light as I stepped into the room. The entire hall fell absolutely silent, a look of utter shock appearing on every face as their brains seemingly short-circuited. I worked calmly across the cold stone floor, my boots making a distinct clicking sound with every purposeful step. I was taking my sweet time, allowing the shock of my unexpected presence to thoroughly paralyze every noble in the chamber. Stella's face contorted into a picture of pure, unadulterated horror as she screamed out my name. Her perfect plan had just casually strolled through the front entrance, and she was clearly not handling the unexpected development well. I stood there in a vibrant red cloak, looking far more princely than I'd ever had before. Russell and another high-ranking knight stood directly behind me, providing serious, intimidating muscle. Stella was absolutely fuming, her face literally turning purple as she wondered, but how? She had personally witnessed me consume the poison, so seeing me stand there healthy was a literal nightmare unfolding before her eyes. The entire hall exploded into murmurs once again. The first prince is alive. Why is Russell standing with him? Did he truly not consume the poison? The nobles were quickly realizing they had been completely lied to. Stella glared down at me from the throne, peering as if she wanted to leap off and strangle me. I looked directly up at her and shouted to the countess to grab the entire room's attention. I pointed a single finger directly at her, informing her bluntly that the throne she currently occupied absolutely did not suit her. I was calling her out in front of the entire assembly, and the palpable disrespect in my tone was undeniable. Stella tried to maintain a facade of composure, forcing a strained smile as she asked about my well-being. She was desperately attempting to regain control of the narrative, but her efforts were failing miserably. The tight shot captured my devious smirk. I knew that I had successfully trapped her, and I was thoroughly enjoying watching her squirm in humiliation in front of all her peers. I confessed that someone had forced me to drink poison, but thankfully I survived by immediately throwing it up. I was basically giving her a cheeky nod while simultaneously charging her with attempted murder. I coolly suggested she acted too quickly, watching Stella grip her fan so tightly it looked like it would shatter into splinters. She was clearly having a meltdown internally as I calmly shredded her credibility. With a smug expression, I noted it was unprofessional to twist the facts. I was working the crowd like a puppeteer, ensuring Stella looked like a desperate cheat. Stella finally broke, shouting that even if I refused to acknowledge her as my mother, accusing her of murder was beyond the pale. She tried to use the outraged noble lady routine, but it fell flat immediately. The nobles in the hall began yelling about the need for accountability for every statement made in such a high place. All eyes turned to me, demanding that I finally produce irrefutable proof. I remained completely unbothered, inquiring whether Stellar could possibly keep her nerve when the real facts were finally laid bare. I possessed the ultimate trump card hidden away, and I was about to slam it down on the table. Stellar was now looking genuinely alarmed, demanding to know what exactly I was plotting. She finally recognized I wasn't the timid child she once preyed upon, and she was utterly terrified of what evidence I had gathered. I simply glanced away and replied with a vague, well, perhaps for the moment. I was deliberately stretching out the suspense, ensuring every single person present hung on to my every utterance. I produced a sharp, distinct clap, signaling for the next act to begin. The single moment would utterly reshape the futures of everyone in the Shekin household forever. The camera focused on a close-up of someone's hands tightly bound, just as I requested the witness be presented. The atmosphere in the room was now so incredibly thick with tension that it felt palpable. A panoramic view revealed the knights bringing in an unknown person into the main hall. I reiterated my command, suggesting we should finally listen to what this mysterious witness had to say. Leeler finally stepped inside, causing a flurry of whispers among the nobles who wondered who this unknown woman was. They were completely oblivious that they were staring at a deadly assassin ready to expose the entire family's secrets. Stellar's face turned ghastly pale as if seeing a phantom, realizing her most reliable pawn had been successfully turned against her. Leeler fell to her knees at the very center of the hall, encircled by knights and under the intense scrutiny of the court. She appeared tiny and defeated, a stark contrast to her previous image as an elite operative. I towered above her, demanding her name with a voice that echoed throughout the vast chamber. I maintained a strictly formal demeanor for the sake of the official legal transcript. Leeler raised her gaze, her eyes vacant as she began her introduction. She murmured her name softly, her voice trembling slightly in the silence. A wide shot captured Leeler kneeling directly beneath the elevated throne where Stellar was seated. It perfectly visualized the witness standing against the person she had identified as the true villain. She completed her self-introduction with a distinct, "My name is Leeler." The name itself meant little to the confused assembly, but for Stellar, it sealed her fate completely. A close-up shot revealed Stellar's eye, twitching violently with an adulterated fury. The only thought she could manage was a desperate wire, as her meticulously built world began to crumble around her. The final shot captured the Countess's face contorted into an awful mask of rage. She internally questioned why this girl was present, finally understanding that I had decisively triumphed in this battle. Leela then revealed her true secret identity, explaining that she was not just a common servant, but rather a top-tier agent from the Kosherin family's covert Shadow Corps. I actually found myself impressed by the grand title. I murmured about this mysterious Shadow Corps, obviously enjoying all this new information. Leela detailed how they selected gifted orphans and subjected them to ruthless survival training within the Highlands. It sounded like a truly horrific experience. Only the most resilient survived the ordeal to become secret agents, dispatched everywhere using fabricated identifications. I leaned closer to Leela, inquiring about her specific cover story for her work here. Stellar was visibly vibrating with anger in the background while Leela verified what had become obvious to me. She had been disguised as the Countess's personal attendant this entire time. I finally delivered the pivotal question: did Lady Stellar truly know your real identity? The tension in the chamber became almost unbearable. I stared intensely at Leela, ensuring that every noble in the audience grasped the severity of her reply. Leela held her head down, fully prepared to face the repercussions. Stella completely snapped, screaming accusations about a vast conspiracy while a chilling, deadly aura surged around her form. She was now clearly operating from a position of desperation. One nobleman came to Stella's defense, yelling that Leela had served for 5 full years and that labeling her a spy was completely absurd. He was attempting to use a legal technicality to derail the entire proceeding. The remainder of the assembly began to grow unruly, calling for an official condemnation of the Kosherin family. They were all clamoring for proof, confident that none would materialize. The judge was visibly perspiring, internally panicking that there was, in fact, an actual witness present. He realized this whole affair was rapidly spiraling out of control. He quickly spun around to face Russell, demanding to know why he remained silent and if he truly intended to trust a mere servant over the Countess. Russell simply remained standing, a large, impassive figure in the crowd. He appeared completely unfazed by the judge's frantic yelling. Then Russell delivered the definitive blow. He clarified that Leela was not just a maid, but a confessed spy who had been apprehended in the act. The judge had made a terrible miscalculation. Take a look at my chibi self in the background, sporting an entirely smug grin as Leela's confession echoed through the room. My strategy was clearly paying off perfectly. The judge became thoroughly flustered as Russell instructed him to be quiet and actually listen to the testimony before prematurely passing judgment. The nobles remained in complete denial, shouting that the entire situation was ridiculous. The judge, meanwhile, appeared as if he longed to vanish completely into his enormous beard. The entire assembly erupted in chaos, with everyone yelling louder than the last, some craving honesty, others still labeling her a complete fraud. The magistrate finally yielded, questioning Leela about her purpose while pretending to be a maid in this domestic charade, and Stella looked ready to commit assorted felonies. Leela revealed her role as a regular spy, dropping every bit of juicy gossip she managed to snag. She was even pilfering the territory's confidential financial ledgers and treasured documentation. Nothing escaped her prying gaze. Stella shrieked, demanding a full inventory of her leaks, her voice quivering. realizing the gravity of her predicament, as Leelor went even further, admitting she shared Count Karin's secret travel schedules and every vassal's clandestine political maneuvering, making Russell look utterly repulsed. A sudden hush fell over the bewildered audience, with murmurs of disbelief spreading as the sheer scope of the treason began to dawn on everyone. I simply requested the final act, per most recent assignment, and Leelor confessed to plotting my demise via a slow-acting, stealthy poison drink. Per marching orders involved staging my own demise by strategically placing a fake suicide note right there in my private quarters, a genuinely chilling level of calculated malice. I lowered my gaze upon her, completely devoid of feeling, merely inquiring about the outcome, feeling entirely in command of the entire situation. Leelor reported that she successfully administered the toxin, but Russell intercepted her while planting the fraudulent message, pausing Chibai Grunbin in the rear to look like he was about to spontaneously burst into tears, and Stella finally shattered, screaming for silence with all her might, having utterly lost all composure. She began screeching for tangible proof and verifiable evidence, practically vaulting the table as her own entourage struggled valiantly to restrain her wild movements. I merely allowed a wicked, knowing grin to spread across my face, asking if she truly desired concrete proof, while Stellar's frantic shouts about a massive conspiracy continued unabated in the background noise. I pivoted towards Russell, who provided a silent, affirmative gesture, confirming our readiness for this very precise confrontation. Russell then produced a roll parchment, proclaiming loudly that this was the doctored suicide note, an absolutely epic moment of theatrical finality. He informed the assembly that he caught the scoundrel Leelor attempting to hide it in my sleeping chambers the previous evening, surely sealing the deal. No, but the plot thickened unexpectedly, as Russell unveiled the Scroll of Terrestrial Recall, a legendary magical artifact that most of the assembled gentry immediately recognized, explaining it magically manifested the true, nefarious intents of anyone who laid a hand upon it via vivid spiritual imagery. The judge visibly paled as Russell announced this enchantment would clearly illustrate who issued the deadly directives, promising that the raw truth was about to be violently exposed. The judge dissolved into sheer panic, clearly calculating the necessity of stopping this damning evidence from surfacing, even if it meant silencing every single witness present. This fellow was clearly at his wit's end. Another prominent figure in the room shared the judge's profound terror, knowing that the scroll's activation likely meant their own heads were next on the executioner's block. I sent a deliberate, knowing look across the room, confident that I could read their panic-stricken thoughts and foresee their next desperate maneuver with perfect accuracy. I extended my hand dramatically, signaling for reinforcements to arrive, as the real entertainment was just about to kick off in earnest. I bellowed the command for them to enter at maximum volume, and instantly, the confines of the hall became significantly more congested. The judge froze in utter shock as the massive entry doors were violently thrust open. He absolutely had not anticipated this level of organized backup, as a contingent of imposing knights clad in their distinctive purple and white regalia marched in, bristling with battle readiness, causing the panicked nobles to erupt in confused shouts as their secret gathering was comprehensively seized. They weakly attempted to lodge official complaints, insisting that military personnel had no jurisdiction within this chamber, but the resolute knights paid their protests absolutely no mind whatsoever. The soldiers officially assumed complete authority, declaring that the security of this entire venue was now firmly under their military supervision, thereby finalizing the abrupt transfer of power. Gazing down from the rafters, one could clearly observe the knights forming an inescapable perimeter around the central dais, meaning I had effectively placed the entirety of the court under house arrest. The judge tried to demand a formal explanation, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his total surrender. He knew the reins of control had irrevocably slipped from his grasp. Russell then brandished the powerful scroll, stating he had already witnessed its earth-shattering contents and had summoned the knights specifically to contain the inevitable civil unrest following the revelation of the absolute truth. He informed the room they were expected to cooperate while the knights secured the exits with massive, immovable shields. This was less a suggestion and more an immutable decree. The aforementioned nervous noble continued to loudly denounce the proceedings as an illegal overthrow, but his tirade now sounded precisely like someone shouting into a thick, unyielding wall. Grunbean was a total wreck, openly weeping and apparently calling for his maternal caregiver, confirming this young man was poorly equipped for such high-stakes melodrama. Stellar was visibly seething, radiating an almost palpable aura of violet fury, recognizing that the involvement of officially sanctioned neutral forces provided undeniable confirmation of my claims, signaling utter defeat for her. She clenched her jaw, understanding that every avenue of escape was closed and her fabricated reality was collapsing spectacularly around her. I turned to Russell, inquiring casually about the prescribed penalty for a high-ranking family member attempting patricide, asking as if checking the footnotes of her board game, and Russell's response, delivered with grim finality, was death by hanging, as an ethereal garrote instantly materialized and tightened around Stellar's neck, cementing the horrifying reality. Stella yanked on Grunbean while shrieking that the whole mess was her solo project, hoping her child might dodge the consequences of her failure. The lady attempted to milk the relative vibe, whining about our supposed bond even though we share zero DNA, which smelled like pure panic. Her sobbing pleas fell on deaf ears while I gave her a frosty stare, all as Leela stood nearby enjoying the front row seat. My response was a dry chuckle followed by a skeptical inquiry regarding her solo status. Then I invited Leela to spill the actual tea. Leela looked like a horned doll as she started narrating the specific instructions she received from that fancy lady in charge. The witness dropped the bombshell that Grunbean was chilling there too, forcing the entire crowd to forget how to breathe for a moment. I flashed a creepy grin that would haunt nightmares while my eyeball sparkled with malice, savoring my landslide victory like a gourmet meal. Stell yelled about conspiracies while hugging her weeping kid, peering about as stable as a three-legged table in an earthquake, glancing at them as if they were pests. I commented on their dishonesty while teasing the possibility of it being true, then called them cowards for starting the fight. I noted that the biggest chickens were the ones plotting murders behind curtains, peering at their pathetic forms on the rug with pure disgust. Those two huddled in the dark corners as I announced that my grand safari for pests was finally reaching its dramatic series finale. The prince vibrated like a cheap phone on silent while I proclaimed the big finish, giving me the perfect chance to gloat impressively. Positioned against the scenic view, I radiated divine energy as the official boss of reality, no longer just some royal kid with titles. The lady was a tangled mess on the floorboards, grunting against her ropes and looking nothing like the snooty noblewoman from Breakfast Time. My half-brother beat the pavement while howling my name, realizing the household was toast and hoping he could bribe me to spare his mommy. I remained upright and bored with Big Russell as my wingman, staring at the kneeling sibling with a look that screamed budget cuts and ice. The kid stayed folded on the floor in complete surrender, looking like the stress of maternal felonies and potential hanging was flattening his soul. The woman squirmed in horror while witnessing her offspring big, as the boy wept over his ruined social life, though I just watched the drama like a boring movie trailer, with my brain skipping toward the next level of my scheme as I scanned the frozen faces of the elite guests nearby, and the air felt heavy with a scent of high-stakes failure while the audience wondered if I would go full tyrant or keep it classy. The expensive threads on his back served as a reminder of the fancy lifestyle he was losing, while he gritted his teeth to avoid sobbing like a toddler, and since silence gripped the room like a cold hand I became the pivot point of the entire universe as even the giant Muslimman beside me looked nervous, while the upper-class onlookers were having minor heart attacks, unable to believe the formerly pathetic heir had actually become the ultimate dealer of fate. I sliced through the quiet by barking the boy's name like a drill sergeant, ensuring every single person in the room focused on our finale. The prince turned into a human fountain, offering to take any licking I could give if I just let his mother keep her head. A muffled sound escaped the lady's gag as she started leaking tears, realizing her little boy was tossing his entire existence away to save her neck. The heavy armor guys grabbed the woman while she attempted to yell at her kid, though her warnings sounded like a confused duck behind the gag. The boy kept his face glued to the chilly tiles with zero dignity left, fully prepared for me to decide if he lived or became history. Gossip among the fancy folks intensified because they felt bad for the kid, marveling that he would sacrifice himself for a woman who favored fratricide. The guy looked like he had swallowed a lemon in a brick, dripping with nervous moisture because the current drama was way above his pay grade. I noticed the vibes in the room changing toward me being the bad guy, suspecting that going full executioner might ruin my popular reputation rating. He peeked up with glowing violet eyeballs, hanging onto the tiny possibility that I might actually have a soul and decide to be somewhat nice. I looked at him with a blank expression, calculating the exact amount of compensation needed for the lady who tried to turn me into a ghost. I finally crouched down to his eye line, whispering gently about his maternal loyalty and suggesting we make a deal to resolve this mess. The blonde guy peeked upward with a minute glimmer of positivity, letting his trap hang loose as he desperately parsed every syllable I happened to utter. This narrator shifted near with a grin terrifying enough to unnerve a predator, murmuring how admitting to the felony would decrease the jail time, essentially tossing out the lore. Yours truly pledged to petition the count to keep Stellar away from the gallows if the boy spilled his guts, eyes glowing like radioactive waste while cautioning my kin that once words leave the mouth, they stay out. My kin started dripping like some leaky plumbing as that heavy dilemma crushed him, since he sat stuck between jagged stones and swampy mud while trying to bail out mommy. The lady flopped around like some hooked tuner, producing muffled grunts to warn her offspring against speaking, fully aware this narrator currently built a superior mousetrap. The woman stared with pure venom, her peepers screaming internally because she could not fathom a tiny brother giving orders to someone senior like her. The fancy crowd felt flabbergasted by such spicy behavior while tied up, hooting about the nerve it took to attempt my murder and still act like royalty. That fellow acting as magistrate was practically melting, sensing the political vibes had shifted, wondering why the young prince was currently committing social suicide. This narrator rose, completely ignoring the ruckus as people hollered my name, remaining the only person in the entire building who was not currently having a total meltdown. Bressel marched forward, using a drill sergeant voice to demand the lady's attention, signaling that playtime was officially over and it was time to bring out the heavy hand of the lore. The commander signaled toward the sentries, commanding the lady's immediate detention, while the plated warriors shouted a sharp and unified agreement. They dragged the countess out, flailing and yelling to halt while questioning if the guards recognized her, as her highborn title now held the value of her soggy napkin. My sibling watched his mother get escorted away, squeaking out her title in a tiny voice as the reality of the massive failure finally started to sink in. A tight shot showed the cloth biting into her face as she made sad hamster noises, her ego finally having been smashed into a million little pieces. The lad ground his teeth together, looking like he was passing a very large stone but ready to do anything to save her, while the three of us appeared like tiny bugs in a giant bowl as the formal confession began. Yours truly peered down at my sibling with a gaze as frigid as a winter morgue, questioning one last time if he owned up to trying to garnish my beverage with lethal toxins, landing the final blow. The guy's mud was hidden in darkness while he choked on every syllable, leaking like a faucet because he grasped his career was toast, finally muttering yes to that assembly of snooty aristocrats. Naturally he caved, since avoiding that choice would have evaporated his final prayer, demonstrating that this narrator was manipulating him like a master puppet performer. The view of the prince showed him slumping over as he realized I had basically written the script for his downfall months ago, leaving him completely bamboozled. The leader peeked at the crouching boy and merely nodded his head, since the court business was essentially finished once an admission of guilt appeared. That official declared that because the kid confessed, the dirt regarding the Earth Scroll would stay buried to save face for the family, making the whole thing sound like a generous gift. This narrator threw my hand out with plenty of drama, my red cape fluttering behind me like a giant bat wing. As I prepared to reveal the steep price for his discount on jail time, the camera panned to show the massive scale of the drama, as I told the crowd that to prevent any annoying appeals, the bad guy had to pay a very unique fee. Yours truly declared the culprit must seal his own magic pipes, which effectively terminated the boy's career as a knight. The story explained that in this weirdly strict world, magic juice was the only thing keeping the rich people important, and losing it meant becoming a regular peasant overnight. Shutting down your internal battery was known as the social equivalent of a funeral, a fate that most fancy folks thought was way worse than actually dying. My brother was shaking like a leaf, leaking tears and calling for his mommy, finally grasping the impossible trap I had forced him into. That woman was grappling against her guards, emitting desperate humming sounds to keep her child from speaking, knowing that this narrator had secured a total victory over her. My sibling's mind was racing with absolute dread, realizing that refusing would send his mother to the gallows, yet agreeing would dump his own prospects directly into a trash heap. The prince weighed his other options, but a date with the news lurked beyond the path, leaving the man petrified and cornered within the labyrinth yours truly constructed specifically to catch him. Stella kept squirming and making distress sounds around her mouth covering, watching her child, while the guards struggled mightily to keep her immobilized. She finally managed to emit a pathetic, smothered negation, like a tiny, wet nope, realizing her son was set on this terrible course, reaching out with eyes already leaking sorrowful remorse. Grunbin cemented his final, painful verdict, knowing that for someone of noble blood, snuffing out one's power core was practically signing a life-ending contract, yet he couldn't stand by while his mom suffered. We snatched the arcane document, this tone barely audible as he mumbled that he was definitely honoring the bargain he had struck with yours truly. He looked heavenward with an expression mixed between pure panic and stiff resolve, claiming that all promises must be upheld no matter the cost, apparently trying to sell himself on the righteousness of the act. Russell merely gazed upon the youngster with the cool detachment of her seasoned professional, stating flatly, well, naturally, having witnessed countless backstabbing political dramas conclude exactly this way. I accepted the magical parchment, making my brief query, and I confirmed with an icy affirmative that the peculiar ceremony was prepared to kick off, focusing on Grunbin's tightly clenched hands gripping the scroll, his fingers bone-white and vibrating uncontrollably, about to obliterate the very essence of his existence, just as the script burst into a fierce golden flash initiating the core shutdown magic, bathing him in raw energy as his power source began its termination sequence. Behind the fabric gag, Stella shrieked and wept, witnessing her son's entire future dissolving, silently pleading stop it while she violently struggled within the guard's restraint. Once that vital power structure is permanently sealed, even the chief wizard couldn't reverse this awful situation, a truly irrevocable change to his very being, as the magic gripped Grunbin's limb, essentially ditching everything for a mother who, let's face it, wouldn't have done the same for him. Grunbin let out a truly gut-wrenching moan when the raw power struck his center, proving the ritual inflicted extreme torment, both inside and out, while the whole chamber glowed magically, throwing dramatic shadows across the flabbergasted aristocracy, sealing a monumental failure for the Countess's clique. I observed this whole spectacle with an expression bordering on mild boredom, understanding that I was no longer the victim but the architect of my kin's complete social downfall, and I hadn't even broken a sweat, watching Grunbin actually go through with it, clutching the blazing golden scroll, sacrificing his prospects for his parent, a crushing choice visibly etched upon his face. The magical process was now fully engaged, featuring a gargantuan ball of raw energy hovering directly before Grunbin, which wasn't just fancy light work, but the permanent incarceration of his very abilities. The intense illumination started to shrink and vanish, drawing back into a tiny nucleus of power, creating a quiet but heavy atmosphere as the last dregs of his magical reserves were vacuumed from the location. The final flicker of luminescence hovered precisely over his chest cavity as the system officially declared the unbelievable complete. His core power system officially shuttered, signaling the definitive end of his aspiring tenure as a swordsman. The audience's collective reaction perfectly crystallized the moment. These haughty nobles stared at him as if he were a phantom, realizing they had just witnessed a social execution broadcast live. Stella collapsed, utterly crushed seeing her son dismantle his own life just for her sake, sobbing through the mouth binding. Recognizing her own avarice led to this precise awful juncture, while Grunbin stared at his now empty palms, trying to rationalize that his self-destruction held some merit if it helped his mother. Stella simply deflated, her inner fortitude utterly shattered as reality crashed down. She grasped that everything, her schemes, her influence, and her son's entire life trajectory had just vaporized. Grunbin appeared to have aged a full decade in 60 seconds, looking completely spent. He was technically born to rule but exhibited crippling naivete for this incredibly harsh existence. He made a weak attempt to soothe his distraught mother, urging her not to lose heart, still trying to play the dutiful son even as their entire world imploded around them. An extreme focus on Stella's eyes revealed absolutely nothing but scorching, undiluted fury. She wasn't mourning her child, She was absolutely incandescent with rage directed squarely at me. She thrashed against the restraints, the gut barely containing the primal scream she wanted to unleash, fixing me with a deadly stare, holding me responsible for every catastrophe that unfolded. The metallic restraints tightened as she writhed on the floor like a trapped beast, a truly pathetic spectacle for someone who had just been strutting around like the manners and disputed sovereign, finally letting out a muffled curse promising generations of my downfall, threatening to rip me limb from limb. Though let's be practical, she wasn't achieving much from that prone position. I remained perfectly still, radiating the cold indifference of a marble effigy. My mental accounting confirmed that without his power, Grunbin wouldn't even qualify as a beginner-level guard. I glanced toward Leeler, using her as a sad yardstick for how utterly weak my brother had become, confirming in my internal assessment that Grunbin was now officially neutralized in the ongoing power struggle. Grunbin reached a hand out toward his mother, looking desperately as if he simply wanted to retreat to a safe place, but the heartbreaking truth was he no longer possessed a safe haven to return to. I allowed myself a fleeting moment of empathy regarding the theft of a young man's aspirations, momentarily softening my gaze. But don't be fooled. The tiny, cartoonish version of me instantly popped up to smack that sentimental feeling away, insisting this was just a complex simulation game I was progressing through. Russell stood nearby, sporting a massive, visible question mark above his head, completely bewildered by my sudden mood swing, unaware I was wrestling with my own internal play versus narrative conflict. My face instantly reset to that of a calculating mastermind. The game controller was back in charge, ready to proceed with the necessary positive end tidying, giving Russell the signal to fall in line as we initiated the removal protocol, with absolutely zero possibility of turning back now that I was fully committed to finishing this unpleasant business. A sweeping overview of the enormous room emphasized how utterly small and maroon the previous rulers appeared, the balance of authority having dramatically shifted, making the entire space thick with unresolved tension. I issued the definitive decree, stating that until the official review concluded, Stellar and Grunbin were strictly prohibited from any communication, essentially treating them like low-level detainees within their own dwelling, and they were subsequently escorted past me, the man who had just nullified their entire existence. Grunbin worked with bowed shame while Stellar's glare suggested she was already plotting her next act of vengeance. Only text N. The heavily armored bouncers guided the disgraced countess and her boy through the giant wooden entryway, permanently relocating them from the seat of power. There was less of an exit and more of a get out, forever for the former VIPs. I observed their departure with a smug sense of accomplishment. The primary roadblock had been bulldozed, but I still had a whole list of traitors to deal with. Didros, the chief financial officer, appeared to be channeling a stroke victim, or maybe just really bad indigestion. He knew perfectly well he was in my crosshairs, and he was completely freaking out. Russell jabbed a finger, roaring accusations that Gidros had been leaking sensitive data. The old man's entire corrupt empire was crumbling faster than a week-old cookie. Russell officially stripped away his fancy title and ordered his immediate detention. Gidros tried to whine about it, but nobody ever listens to a freshly minted traitor. Gidros instantly ditched any semblance of dignity, shrieking at the knights and labeling them lowly soldiers. Pro tip, insulting the people currently dragging you to a dungeon is generally considered a tactical blunder. He flailed against the knight's grip, realizing quickly that this was a losing match. He continued demanding they not contaminate him with their filthy hands while being thoroughly manhandled. The knights completely ignored his pathetic insults, opting instead to physically haul him across the stone floor like a sack of potatoes. Who looked utterly pathetic, a real downgrade from his high-ranking official status. I observed the glorious mess with a quiet, politely sinister smile. They're performing admirably, I mused, thoroughly satisfied with how Russell was managing the grunt work. The surviving nobles at the table were now trembling like they were auditioning for a horror movie, wondering whose turn it would be next. The silence in the great hall was so thick you could cut it with a knife, as they collectively held their breath. I stood there, perfectly positioned in the moonlight, looking every bit the main character of this whole ordeal. The succession struggle was officially resolved, but I was only just beginning the fun part, reorganizing the entire operation from scratch. The nobles' hushed conversations revealed they understood that even without a fancy designation or political team, I had seized control of everything. The thought that the entire night's agenda was essentially my personal to-do list sent shivers down their spines. I dominated the center of the hall, truly the main attraction of this entire performance. I'd made sure everyone understood the message loud and clear. Pose me, and your career is over. I began working toward the door, my crimson cloak billowing majestically behind me. Every single pair of eyes followed my every movement, with the tension in the room reaching critical levels. I paused and glanced back over my shoulder, allowing the room to see the wheels spinning in my brain. This wasn't just a simple departure. I was ensuring everyone understood exactly who was the boss here. One specific noble looked like he might actually collapse from the sheer pressure. He was sweating profusely, desperately anticipating a single utterance from my lips. Russell moved in close to the terrified man, cautioning everyone present to cease causing unnecessary drama. He was essentially telling them to shape up and fall in line, or face the consequences. The wide shot of the lengthy council table revealed significantly more empty seats. The entire social hierarchy of the Sheik and Countdom had been thoroughly overhauled in less than 24 hours. Dart, recognizable by his white headgear, bowed his head in complete submission. He was meant to represent the intellectual side of the territory, yet he currently appeared to be a man who had misplaced everything he owned. He formally submitted his resignation, claiming full responsibility for the administrative chaos. He was making a last-ditch effort to perform a graceful exit before I could decide to toss him in the slammer. I examined him with a completely impassive look, mentally registering that Garrett enjoyed high approval ratings from his staff. I was currently performing a cost-benefit analysis of his utility versus his risk of future backstabbing. Russell promptly vetoed the request for resignation. He argued that replacing every single staff member simultaneously would lead to far too much public outcry and administrative mayhem. Garrett was presented with a list of officials implicated in the assassination plot. He read the names with a blend of disbelief and dread, understanding that his entire department was a complete disaster area. He gawked at the document, finally grasping the extent of the corruption. This wasn't just a couple of slightly rotten apples. It was a deep, systematic betrayal originating from the inside. I watched him intensely, my teal eyes catching the faint glow from the torches. I was waiting to see if this individual had the necessary guts to handle what was required. I started moving away with Russell, but I hadn't finished issuing instructions for the night. I moved with a purposeful air of someone who has already meticulously scheduled the next 3 weeks of management. I casually delivered a devastating announcement. Every financial officer except for was immediately put under investigation. I had basically lopped off the entire department's head with a single statement. A close-up shot highlighted my faintly glowing green eye as I asserted the necessity for fresh, trustworthy personnel. I wasn't politely requesting approval. I was simply laying down the new lore. Garrett was completely stunned, practically yelling in disbelief. He pleaded for mercy for those with smaller transgressions, clearly horrified by the sheer size of the coming purge. I brushed aside his concerns, insisting we absolutely needed a department staffed by people we could rely on completely. In my book, a 90% failure rate demanded nothing short of a total system reboot. Garrett simply gaped at me, finally understanding that I was operating on a completely separate level from everyone else. He was utterly dumbfounded by my unwavering determination. I folded my arms, contemplating whether these people would appreciate my benevolence or just mistake it for weakness and get cocky later. I was already plotting strategies for long-term psychological conditioning. Garrett attempted one final appeal, but I promptly interrupted him with a sharp, decisive "Very well, please proceed." I was entirely finished listening to any further justifications. I adopted a grim, focused expression and announced that my decision was final. I was exuding a level of pure, unadulterated authority that no one in that room had ever witnessed previously. Garrett trembled as he saw the transition, realizing the pampered student was replaced by a king whose vibe said stop messing around or die. My mind flashed to that pathetic puddle of tears by the fountain, the version of myself so soft he makes tofu look like granite. The aristocrats held their breath while watching the great scholar crumble like a cheap cookie, realizing the prince had become a total boss. The atmosphere grew heavier than a lead balloon when the crowd realized the Shy Royal was officially the new management of this dump. I giggled like a villain in a low-budget movie, feeling like a sweaty gamer who just cheesed a boss fight, because the shake and countdown were basically my loot now, and as a wicked grin stretched across my face, I realized I had finally hit the win condition for this opening arc while my eyes shimmered with a toxic waste glow. The holographic menu popped up for Garrett Olson, displaying his numbers like I was checking the calories on a snack I intended to devour. I peeked through the digital interface to judge Garrett's administrative stats, treating these posh folks like expendable non-player characters, until the room suddenly filled with glowing floating menus for every single wealthy loser sitting at the dining table. I ducked into the dark with a smirk that screamed evil genius, thinking how much fun it would be to scout the survivors for my ultimate fantasy team lead. I surveyed the ballroom as if it were a massive chessboard, plotting to fire everyone and renovate the government while thinking several moves ahead of these amateurs. I opened the profile for Garrett Olson, seeing his anxiety about the schedule, but I had zero patience for lag and kept scrolling through the staff roster. I shot a look over my shoulder that was sharper than a sushi knife, seeing right through these predictable nobles who were basically working open books. I glanced at the crowd and started hitting the delete key in my brain, because cleaning out the trash factions felt just like uninstalling useless apps from a cluttered desktop. My gaze narrowed on the guy sitting on the fence, because in my new kingdom, being indecisive gets you a one-way ticket to the unemployment line without any severance. I stared at the swarm of blue screens marking the incompetent staff, preparing a massive corporate restructuring that would leave only the actually useful ones standing in my new office. I let out a creepy wheeze of a laugh while hiding in the shadows, deciding to only hire the suckers who managed to pass my loyalty test, because I was totally vibing with the whole ruthless mastermind aesthetic. The rich guys were shaking, muttering about how I look like a sleep-deprived demon, as my icy stare confirmed they were one wrong word from being totally finished. Total chaos erupted in their heads as they realized being on my naughty list meant potentially losing their literal heads, making them shake in their boots like they were running a marathon in the snow. The room turned into a mosh pit of desperate brown noses screaming their devotion and tripping over their own feet, so I pivoted back to my sweet baby prince act and told them to chill with a bright smile, hiding the fact that I was already mentally measuring them for their fancy hardwood coffins. The nobles were gasping for air and sweating through their silks after my sudden mood swing, while Russell looked like he needed a triple shot of espresso just to deal with my chaotic energy, since babysitting a genius with the personality of her psychopath is clearly a high-stress job. The fortress looked peaceful under the moonlight, though behind the fancy walls, I was busy cooking up some seriously complicated political schemes to take over everything. Back in my private room, I stretched like a lazy cat, letting out a groan because acting like a tyrant is surprisingly hard on the back after a long day of pretending. I flopped onto the mattress with a heavy thud, realizing that managing a real-life kingdom is way more taxing than clicking buttons on a gaming mouse, and I just wanted to pass out from exhaustion. My eyelids became heavy as my weird teal eyes dimmed, finally giving me a quiet moment to process the crazy path that led me to this fancy bed. I recalled my former existence as a plain-looking C student with hair as exciting as wet cardboard, a distant ghost of a life that drove me to be something legendary in this new world, since I was just another face in the crowd before that one special game changed everything for me. I remember wondering if I could actually finish the game that everyone else rage quit, and that stubborn gamer energy is exactly what turned me into a legendary figure in this world. I thought about the sad nights spent staring at monitors and scribbling notes, driven by a desperate hunger to be more than just a background character in a boring story. The victory screen flashed in my memory, crowning me the first person to reach the throne of the gods, which was a pretty cool title for a guy who used to be a total shut-in. The game's voice still rang in my ears like a broken record about me claiming the divine seat, making me remember that desperate moment when I hit my breaking point and begged to be reborn in the land of Ellen, never imagining that my pathetic plea would actually come true in this weirdly high-stakes reality. My old memories and new life started blending together like a bad smoothie, mixing blonde and brown hair in a dizzying mental kaleidoscope that made my head spin. I bolted awake as a piece of hidden lore clicked into place, realizing my walkthrough knowledge was basically a cheat code that might come with some nasty side effects later. The digital decree flashed across the cerulean canvas, demanding me to navigate stormy seas, dispense justice, and any heartfelt yearning would materialize. This was my new assignment, my grand destiny for this realm, and I jolted upright in bed, a colossal revelation dawning with a jolt. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, my palms slick with a nervous sheen. I cast my mind back to the fervent plea uttered in my former abode, pondering if my deepest desire had indeed been fulfilled, my gaze tracing the lines of my new appendages with a potent blend of wonder and apprehension. Feeling a touch queasy, I cradled my abdomen, musing if the celestial beings interpreted that as my ultimate aspiration. It truly appeared the divine entities possessed a rather peculiar sense of mirth. I relinquished my grip on the sheets and turned over, attempting to absorb the sheer immensity of recent events, murmuring that regardless, there was absolutely no retracing my steps. I had to embrace this novel existence. Staring into the inky blackness, I pondered if purifying this realm and ascending anew would unlock the door to another wish. Even before completing the initial tutorial, my mind was already strategizing my grand finale. With resolute intent, I shut my eyelids, pledging to conquer this world. As a seasoned gamer, surrendering was simply not in my lexicon. I settled into my slumber, the chamber a haven of quiet save for the rhythm of my respiration. To any observer, I appeared a typical adolescent asleep, yet within my cranium, a fierce strategic skirmish was underway. The camera then zoomed out, revealing the imposing silhouettes of the castle ramparts beneath the lunar glow. An oppressive silence prevailed, a poignant reminder of my current repose before the impending confrontations. Dawn broke, bathing the lavishly carved wooden casement in a cascade of radiant sunlight. A fresh chapter commenced for the newly invigorated era of the Shekin Dominion. I stood by the window, extending my limbs skyward with an audible stretch. I felt an unprecedented surge of vigor, far surpassing any previous state of readiness. My gaze, sharp and intently focused, scanned the surroundings as I pondered my initial course of action. My days of trivial pursuits were over. I was poised to commence the serious business of leadership. I paced the confines of the room, loading with a touch of bewilderment that while the Earl's territory remained crystal clear in my memory, the name Shekin had never registered. This was a glaring omission in my comprehensive gaming knowledge. I gently stroked my chin, my thoughts delving into an introspective abyss. I truly began to question the geographical whereabouts of this mysterious place. If it was absent from the virtual landscape I had dedicated a decade to exploring, then where precisely had I landed? I lowered myself to the floor and conjured my ethereal blue heads-up display. My instinct was to consult the map, hoping the system possessed the crucial intel I required. Abruptly, a notification materialized, confirming a historical conquest of the entire Ellen continent. The system was duly acknowledging my prior player exploits. The subsequent communique materialized, heralding a clear bonus, with every map landmark now illuminated. My eyes widened in sheer astonishment as I vociferously exclaimed. This was the ultimate secret advantage, a cheat code of unparalleled magnitude. My being pulsed with unadulterated delight, my cheeks flushed with an expansive, cheerful grin. This felt like a divinely provided treasure chart. I mused, realizing I possessed an omniscient perspective of the entire world. The view narrowed to a close-up of my iris, mirroring the intricate cartographical data. Each forgotten ruin, hidden dungeon, and elusive secret within Hero's destiny was meticulously unfurled before me. The system elucidated this as a distinct bonus, utterly unbeknownst to anyone else, reward solely for achieving ultimate game completion. My decade of digital devotion was finally yielding dividends. I meticulously examined the map, recognizing designations like Joseph, and was impressed that it even incorporated details beyond my prior knowledge. In essence, I now held the master keys to the entire realm. My elation reached such a fever pitch that I began to somersault on my bedding with the unrestrained glee of a child on Christmas morning. I guffared, proclaiming this endeavor would be ludicrously simple, feeling utterly invincible. However, my energetic contortions ceased mid-tumblr, my expression shifting to one of profound gravity. I pondered the current temporal placement, needing to ascertain the precise year to effectively leverage my accumulated intelligence. The system indicated the year as 289 of the imperial calendar. I swiftly deduced that the central narrative arc of Hero's destiny was slated to commence in the year 294. Thus, I found myself a full 5 years ahead of schedule. I sat upright, my countenance etched with serious concern, my fair locks disheveled from my enthusiastic rolling. Being 5 years premature offered distinct advantages, yet it simultaneously thrust me into uncharted territory. I gazed vacantly into the distance, pondering the curious absence of any mention of the Earl of Sheckin, given my presence within the same world. A significant historical lacuna was evidently at play. My facial features contorted into an expression of pure, unadulterated terror, my eyes wide with disbelief. Could this potentially mean this very land was fated to vanish within the next 5 years? I speculated, realizing my grand reward might well be a sinking vessel. I vividly recalled Russell's early mention of the earldom's precarious financial situation. A cold sweat broke out as I grasped the genuine reason for my near-fatal encounter. They were demonstrably incapable of affording basic security. Swiftly, I accessed the financial status interface for the Sheckin Earl's territory. I braced myself for the impending revelation, my digits trembling with trepidation as I activated the designated icon. A horrified shriek escaped my lips as I clutched my head in absolute bewilderment. I vociferously expressed my incredulity at the unfolding situation. The figures presented were unequivocally more dire than my most chilling nightmares. An external vantage point of the imposing castle underscored my anguished cry. This is simply unfathomable. My voice likely reverberated all the way down to the humble village below. The final, extreme close-up captured my wide, bloodshot gaze, and I whispered a stunned, disbelief-laden no way, recognizing my newly inherited domain was engulfed in total economic devastation. Truly, a commencement on the most challenging difficulty setting. I stared intently at the financial ledgers, the sense of desperation creeping in, contemplating a hasty departure. Absconding with the land was impossible, leaving me ensnared between primal survival instincts and my newfound noble obligations. I rested my forehead against my palm, my demeanor shifting to a summer contemplation of the predicament. Capital could be required, but the Sheckin ancestral lands represented a singular, replaceable inheritance. It would be a lamentable waste to relinquish all that I had managed to procure. I commenced an exhaustive examination of all fiscal documentation, slamming a substantial tome onto the desk with a resounding thud. I resolved to engage in an all-night endeavor to pinpoint the source of the fiscal hemorrhage. I meticulously reviewed the tax declarations, noting that agricultural revenue appeared consistent with regional norms. I observed a transient escalation in the national defense expenditure from the prior year, yet this did not appear to be the primary contributing factor. A rapid succession of images depicted the relentless passage of hours as dusk descended outside. I was utterly submerged in an avalanche of paperwork, my desk obscured by a chaotic expanse of scrolls and parchments. Finally, I unceremoniously planted my face onto my desk with a wearisome groan, lamenting the profound exhaustion that consumed me. Perusing a decade's worth of monotonous fiscal history proved to be the most arduous trial I had ever encountered. I reclined, my gaze fixed upon the ceiling, identifying the initial, significant area of concern. All commerce with the Madrasadeza kingdom, situated beyond the elevated highlands, had been abruptly severed, constituting a substantial detriment to our revenue stream. A cartographical representation of the Sheckin earldom illustrated the Gorda Plateau, effectively impeding the passage to the Madrasadeza kingdom. Without this vital trade conduit, the territory sustained a significant reduction in its customs revenue. The prolonged, exasperated exhalation escaped me. While the trade disruption was an unavoidable event, a far more sinister element lay concealed within these financial records, and it was unequivocally not a mere oversight. I erupted in a blaze of righteous indignation, my very aura manifesting as an inferno of flames as I scrutinized the exorbitant interest rates. I bellowed in outrage, demanding to know from whence they had procured such a colossal sum, realizing the accrued interest far surpassed our annual tax collection. I was hunched over my desk, enveloped by a disarray of open tomes and hastily scribbled annotations. Having reached an impasse with the extensive documentation, I recognized the imperative need to glean further insights from a live interlocutor. I closed my eyes, allowing a moment of mental clarity after countless hours of numerical analysis. The intricate mechanisms of my game-focused intellect began to whir as I mused aloud, seeking a more expeditious solution. My vision snapped into focus with a vivid, turquoise shine, finally locating my quarry. I realized all the necessary details were locked away in a cell beneath the castle. A calculated, mischievous grin spread across my features as I thought of Gidris, the swine who helped drain the estate's resources, currently rotting in the subterranean prison. I recalled the memory of Gidris, a quivering puddle of fear and sweat. He held the key to who bankrolled the operation and why the shipping routes were deliberately halted. I started my descent down the winding stone staircase toward the dungeon, the place where the air hung thick with mildew and rust, barely lit by flickering shadows. My crimson cape cut through the monochrome corridors as I ventured deeper into the darkness. I was completely focused on extracting every last drop of information from my XEFO. The guard snapped to attention, completely bewildered by my presence, and stammered out, "What on earth brings you down here?" clearly flustered by the unexpected visit. I immediately clamped my hand over my nostrils, reeling from the putrid odor. I lamented the awful stench, recognizing that the plumbing had apparently been on permanent vacation for decades. The warden trotted behind me, sputtering that he never expected such a high-status visitor. I gave him a thorough once-over, cataloging every weakness in the security chief's subordinate. The warden was a nervous wreck, bowing and dripping sweat like a human faucet, perfectly designed to grovel before authority. I yawned internally at his predictability, realizing how simple it would be to twist someone like him around my little finger. I visually catalogued the warden's features, confirming he was loyal to the head of security. As far as I was concerned, this fellow was simply another forgettable pawn in the grand chess game of power politics. The warden practically bent over backward with deference, effusively describing how truly blessed he felt to be in my presence. He was making a desperate attempt to appear both capable and completely subservient. I strode past him, my gaze frigid, catching the reflection of the cell bars in my eye. "Now then," I commanded, my voice cutting through the silence with a sharp authority. I turned back to face the guard, my expression somber, having identified the man's treacherous nature and deciding to capitalize on his lack of fidelity. I recognized the warden's vulnerability to displays of power. I mused that any wrongly imprisoned individuals deserved an opportunity to present evidence and exonerate themselves. I flashed the warden a calculating, slightly malicious grin. I posed a question, gauging his reaction to a direct command about liberating specific inmates. The warden was practically hyperventilating, his head bobbing like a manic dashboard toy as he sputtered, "You are absolutely correct." He was visibly petrified of disagreeing with my assessment. I instructed him to review all cases, especially those involving inmates who were deemed permanently detained. This high-stakes assignment essentially forced the warden to become my personal detective. The warden snapped to attention with a sharp salute. "Dillon, understood, my lord." He had completely surrendered to my will, now desperate to fulfill whatever request I might have. I observed him departing, noting how readily he turned on the head of security. A moment of clarity hit me, revealing that I was now behaving just like the unscrupulous political figures I once utterly despised. I reminded the warden to watch his language, clarifying that I had not yet assumed the title of lord. The guard looked absolutely terrified, choking out a frantic apology for his mistake. I let out a weary sigh, waving away his apologies and explaining I was finished with these petty formalities. My patience was thin and I needed to deal with the swine in the cell. A sharp asterisk clang asterisk echoed through the hall as we finally arrived at Gidris's quarters, the guard still hovering nearby, desperately trying to curry favor. Gidris was yelling from inside his cage, bragging about the terrible food and boasting that he would be free very soon. He was clearly still operating under his former delusions of grandeur. I paused at the bars, staring at the man with a chilling, contemptuous look, and inquired whether he was orchestrating a prison break, my tone saturated with mockery. They barked a sharp, derisive laugh that bounced off the dungeon walls. I was essentially shoving Gidris' predicament directly into his face, reminding him precisely who held all the power now. Gidris looked up, completely stunned. As I mentioned, he actually owed me a favor, a psychological tactic designed to make the inmate feel like he was already defeated. Gidris attempted to maintain his facade, demanding to know what possible obligation he could have to me. I stood erect, gazing through the bars with an expression of complete and utter disdain. The warden watched on with a self-satisfied smirk as I informed Gidris that his execution was fast approaching. The full weight of his predicament began to chip away at Gidris' self-control. Gidris switched gears, trying to laugh and emphasizing his 2 decades of financial expertise. He clearly believed his accounting skills would save him. I leaned closer, my features stark against the dim light, and told the inmate that I knew he was exactly why I bothered coming down here, acknowledging his grim significance. Gidris mumbled that he understood, flashing a calculating grin. He clearly imagined he had discovered a way to bargain his way out of this predicament by using the enormous debt as a negotiation tool. I addressed him as former chief financial officer, ensuring Gidris understood his position had vanished. I questioned whether he actually believed a mere financial transaction could purchase his freedom. My presence grew heavier and darker as I internally scoffed that the swine didn't understand his lack of standing. Gidris let out a noise of pure frustration as his cocky expression finally collapsed. Without warning, I bellowed for the warden, my voice echoing throughout the prison. The warden immediately jerked to attention with a panicked, "Yes, sir," clearly worried about my sudden change in demeanor. I demanded to know if a qualified interrogator was on duty, causing the warden to appear as if he might pass out. I had abandoned the pretense of games and was now prepared to acquire the necessary information by any method required. I commanded him to fetch the expert, indicating the corridor with a gesture. The warden began to stammer, asking if I meant immediately, realizing I was in an exceptionally foul humor. I was absolutely incandescent with rage, appearing to be on the verge of total collapse. I stepped close to the warden, radiating a frightening presence, and asked if my expression suggested I was kidding. The warden trembled uncontrollably, finally understanding he had made a huge mistake, and let out a choke sound, bowing to retrieve the interrogator at once. The guy took off down the hallway like a scared rabbit on espresso. I remained in the gloomy dungeon, projecting a sinister presence that made the air feel even colder. I found the whole scene quite amusing. The warden apparently believed he could charm his way out of trouble using his advanced years. I strode forward with quiet self-assurance, realizing the man behind the bars was about to receive a difficult education. Behold those luminous, turquoise eyes, a sign of someone fully stepping into their new persona. I recognized that I was establishing myself as the true authority behind the Earl's domain, and I wouldn't permit any obstacle to impede my progress. Gidris's bravado finally evaporated as he started to perspire heavily behind the iron bars. He understood that summoning an interrogator completely altered the stakes, grumbling a frantic oath as his circumstances rapidly deteriorated. I rested my forehead against the cold metal, watching the prisoner tremble. I casually remarked that I doubted an individual of Gidrus's constitution possessed much tolerance for the impending interrogation. I calmly requested his absolute finest effort, my voice deceptively serene, while Gidrus sweated buckets, looking up with a face registering pure, distilled panic. My silhouette, backlit by a ghastly glow, informed Gidrus that exemplary endurance might just downgrade his execution from swift to agonizingly slow, which was frankly rather mean. Poor Gidrus appeared utterly defeated, his eyes suspiciously moist and his complexion drained of color by fright, finally realizing he wasn't facing some fragile youngster but a genuine, greater fiend. The final, intensely focused shot captured Gidrus' wide, turquoise eye reflecting my own form. He knew with chilling certainty that this fellow held his mortal fate, possessing absolutely no capacity for pity. Now thoroughly cornered, Gidrus desperately pleaded for clemency while I maintained a gaze as cold and impenetrable as granite, leading the former official to spill his last, pathetic trump card, like a rodent cornered by a housefly. The ex-bureaucrat shrieked from behind the steel rods about an unbelievable financial windfall, attempting to peddle some instant riches scheme as a desperate plea for self-preservation. I remained entirely unamused, feeling this entire charade was a monumental waste of my valuable time. Dead-eyed dramatically sighed and uttered, "Oh yes, elaborate then," granting Gidrus one final, fragile opportunity. Gidrus revealed the staggering total indebtedness of the Earl's entire domain, kneeling awkwardly to appear helpful rather than just a conniving schemer, dropping the name Jared Merces, a merchant supposedly possessing the ultimate access codes. I adopted an air of deep consideration as Gidrus detailed how this Mercers managed the clandestine treasury for that rival Kosherin clan. The freshly brewed tea was scalding hot, and the revelation was that the Kosherin family utilized this very merchant to siphon off crucial mining tax revenue meant for the crown. I absorbed this colossal political revelation while standing perfectly still, realizing it struck literal gold. Gidrus confidently proposed that publicly accusing the merchant before the royal court would instantly nullify the entire debt, preening slightly, as if he'd just handed over a golden ticket to immediate freedom from his cell. I narrowed my gaze suspiciously, playing the skeptical detective, and posed a hypothetical. What if this sly merchant managed to offload the debt rights cheaply just before his impending capture? I inquired pointedly, supposing it was sold straight to the Kosherin lot, maintaining an expression of utter boredom, effectively showing Gidrus that his supposed intelligence had a massive, gaping hole in its logic. Gidrus's mental processes seemed to seize up instantly. He had completely neglected to anticipate the merchant's exit strategy, now realizing he was precisely back where he started, facing an increasingly irritated sovereign. Just then, the jailer burst back in, bellowing that he had successfully retrieved the required person, but I remained facing the pathetic captive, refusing to acknowledge the interruption. Behold, the premier master of agony in the whole Orals region arrived. The chap looked like he'd strolled directly off the set of a gruesome horror flick, complete with a spooky mask and an enormous, serrated executioner's blade. The shrouded figure exuded a noticeable, throbbing aura of dark purple energy, screaming a silent warning, which caused Gidrus to look like his poor heart was preparing to stage an emergency evacuation just from the sheer atmosphere. I deliberately began to saunter away, feigning utter disinterest in the proceedings, which caused Gidrus to completely unravel, rattling the bars frantically and squealing for mercy while the terrifying henchman loomed just behind him. Gidrus was shaking the ironwork so violently his fingertips were blanching white, begging my pardon, finally grasping that his flimsy financial tips wouldn't protect him from the man wielding the enormous, hungry axe. I awarded him a truly wicked, diamond-like smirk. I was absolutely certain the Kosherin family's secret slush fund held a minimum of 1 million gold pieces, and I intended to confiscate every last shiny bit. I activated my unique Grandmaster intuition, my vision shimmering with that familiar, emerald luminescence, scanning Gidrus for any buried secrets, seeing straight through his flimsy deceptions to the actual riches he was hiding. I executed a casual exit, stealing a backward glance over my shoulder, knowing I was expertly manipulating Gidrus, allowing the sheer, palpable dread of the torturer to perform the necessary heavy lifting. I departed whistling a jaunty little melody, my footsteps echoing sharply on the cold flagstones, leaving Gidrus stewing in the gloom with a masked psychopath who was definitely not there to discuss artisanal cheeses. The whole thing worked. Gidrus completely capitulated, shrieking for me to halt, promising with breathless urgency that he knew the exact whereabouts of Gerard's hidden treasury. Now this was the real prize. I froze mid-stride, my demeanor instantly shifting to one of sharp, focused menace. The secret bald, you say? My lethargic curiosity was finally piqued. The torturer didn't hesitate for a microsecond, slamming Gidrus against the cold stone floor with a sickeningly loud thump, gruffly telling him to hush, but I was already fully committed to this juicy new thread. The masked car let loose a low, guttural chuckle, his crimson eyes burning malevolently. Gidrus lay flattened on the stone, looking utterly pathetic as he tried to negotiate a deal for his continued existence. Gidrus dissolved into knee-ups, frantically insisting the information was fact because he'd been a chief financial officer for ages, ready to spill every illicit detail just to get that monster away from him. I strolled deliberately back to the bars, towering over the crumpled man with an air of undeniable sovereignty that permeated the entire gloomy space. I reached through the bars, gripping Gidrus firmly by his jaw to force his gaze upwards, issuing a demand that brooked no refusal, asking precisely how he came to possess the plans for a top-tier secret storage facility. Gidrus sputtered incoherently, his eyes wild as he scrambled mentally for an explanation. Gidrus was clearly concealing some deeply shameful fact, looking profoundly nauseated from the intense pressure of being stuck between an imperious prince and a professional butcher. I pivoted toward the executioner and inquired if we should commence proceedings. The masked man confirmed with a sharp affirmative and a terrifyingly enthusiastic little sound. Clamping down like a rusty vice, the interrogator snatched the man's digits and proposed a systematic bone-snapping session, leading our victim to blabber immediately about his botched burglary, essentially confessing he was as incompetent at larceny as he was at loyalty. My jaw hit the floor while I questioned why a fancy money man like him would ever risk breaking a nail on actual manual labor. Huddled on the cold stone like a discarded damp rag, the disgraced official confessed to hiring professionals who clearly didn't get the memo about succeeding. Intrigued by the sheer scale of the failure, I prodded for the price tag of those crooks to calculate exactly how much taxpayer cash he burned. When he muttered the number 300, I stared in shock, wondering if he really threw that much gold away on a mission that achieved absolutely nothing. He corrected himself to 3,000, making my blood pressure skyrocket as I realized I was interrogating a world-class champion of weaponized idiocy. Just imagining that towering heap of shiny coins made my head spin, leaving me frozen in a trance while my mind struggled with his Olympic-level theft. Echoing that massive sum with total shock, I watched the prisoner turn a lovely shade of bruised eggplant while he tried to melt into the floor. Both the jailer and the bonebreaker were doubling over in hysterics, finding it hilarious that our captive was the biggest mark in the history of con jobs. Tears streamed down their faces as they suggested ending his misery, but I silenced the room by noting that fortune equaled half the region's taxes, then demanded to know where the loot originated despite already sensing the crime. With a chilling blue glare, I pinned the embezzlement on him while looking like an angry deity banning a hacker, causing him to wail about a magical orb being the only thing stopping his perfect crime. The prospect of a magical artifact definitely caught my attention, specifically when he explained that some con artists tried to charge him an additional mountain of gold for a fake key, forcing me to listen with a skeptical expression while I already started calculating how to plunder the secret treasury for my own benefit. Delivering the harsh truth, I informed the buffoon that he had been played like a fiddle, leaving him staring at me with a face full of pure, unadulterated shock. I detailed how the local merchant and his hired thugs were clearly partners in draining his pockets, demanding his status as the most gullible man in the kingdom. Attempting to save face, he pleaded for me to believe his eyewitness account of the hidden door, but I cut through his rambling to demand the exact location of that mountain of shiny gold coins. Tense silence filled the room while my grim expression loomed over him, the atmosphere thickening as we neared the revelation of a truly life-changing fortune. In a hushed tone, he mentioned the Gorder Highlands, peering like a broken soul who had just traded his final mystery for the slim chance of keeping his neck intact. While he admitted his blindfold prevented him from knowing the precise coordinates in those mountains, I studied the terrain on the display, digging through my mental encyclopedia for any secret tunnels or ancient landmarks in that region. My companions observed my vacant stare with confusion while the prisoner questioned my focus, unaware that my consciousness was already miles away scouting the peaks. Zooming into the mountain range, I utilized my protagonist-level intuition to filter the sights until a notification suggested a closer look, giving me a solid lead that required some boots on the ground to confirm. Considering the need for a local guide, I stroked my chin while weighing my options, eventually landing on the lethal assassin Lila who trained there, assuming she wouldn't try to perforate my internal organs first. Suddenly, everything clicked into place and I was itching to depart, finally seeing the golden road that led straight to that hidden stash of wealth. Barking orders at the jailer to clear out, I watched him stumble over his own feet in fright while he frantically gestured toward the exit with shaky hands. Clinging to the iron cage with a bewildered look, the poor sap cried out to see if he was being abandoned to the mercy of his smiling personal tormentor. Departing without even a courtesy wave, I focused on my mountainous destination while the prisoner's desperate shouts faded into the damp, dark corners of the stone corridors. A deafening thud marked the closing of the heavy gate, effectively silencing the whining and signaling the official start of my quest to liberate that secret treasure room. Strolling through the palace corridors with a mask of serenity, I fumed internally about the sheer audacity of this entire corrupt hierarchy, where the jailer took kickbacks while his prison eluded the treasury for a fortune. Halting mid-step, I decided that letting the keeper of the key slide without a little psychological pressure would be a waste of a perfectly good opportunity to secure his devotion. Addressing the man with a chillingly polite tone, I watched him freeze in place, his face turning pale as he prepared for the verbal hammer to drop. Casually bringing up the astronomical theft of those funds, I asked the nervous fellow if he truly had no idea, setting a delicious snare that he was about to wander into blindly. Chewa the jailer was practically leaking sweat and stuttering like a broken record while addressing the prince, and he attempted to act nonchalant, clinging to the hope that his lack of a paper trail for those illegal kickbacks would keep him out of the gallows. I radiated a spine-chilling vibe that made him wonder how on earth I discovered his secret stash from Gidris. As I made it crystal clear his little schemes were no longer a mystery to me, I informed the guard I picked up some juicy gossip from Gidris during his absence, which caused the poor man to psychologically liquefy under the intense strain, and his complexion turned ghostly when I mentioned my usual kindness as its limits, signaling that his professional future and heartbeat were now my playthings. So the fellow eventually crumbled onto the tiles, slamming his forehead down while shrieking for mercy, as he was a completely shattered shell of a man. The tiny version of myself watched with a grin of pure satisfaction as the warden internally roasted Gidris for being a stool pigeon, and he couldn't believe that swine had the audacity to stab him in the back while locked in a cage. The man was groveling and offering frantic oaths that his days of mischief were over, having been thoroughly crushed into a loyal servant. Jewett glanced up with eyes wide from absolute fright, expecting a reply but finding only the eerie quiet of the corridor where I had magically disappeared, and he whimpered my name while scanning the vacant hallway like a man haunted by a phantom, standing isolated and bewildered in the gloomy garden, since it dawned on him that the fresh royalty in town was definitely the last person on earth you should ever try to deceive. Clenching his jaw with a face contorted by fury, he resolved to vent all that pent-up anger directly onto Gidris, and he promised to give the prisoner a one-way ticket to misery, stumping back toward the prison cells with murderous intent. I was secretly spying from behind a stone partition, sporting a wonderfully wicked grin on my face, and I watched the jailer retreat, feeling quite proud of how my mental gymnastics routine successfully scrambled his brain. I observed the warden fleeing and figured it was time to focus on Gidris next, and by masterfully pitting my underlings against one another, I ensured they were too busy clawing at each other's throats to ever coordinate a coup against me. My facial expression shifted instantly when I sensed someone lurking in my personal space, causing me to let out a startled gasp as I spun around to identify the intruder. A gargantuan shadowy figure loomed over my frame in the narrow path, creating a dramatic moment where the narrative asks who this stranger could be, and the visual panned out to show the peaceful nocturnal castle grounds, though we all know that in this tale, there is always a creepy crawly hiding in the darkness. I went into full combat mode, swindling as I detected a stalker, barking out a demand for identification while getting ready to rumble, and a lad with chestnut locks and a crisp warrior outfit emerged into the glow, looking incredibly polished as he politely inquired about my identity. I evaluated him in a heartbeat, deducing from his fancy equipment that he belonged to the Blue Lion Squad, so I remained cautious while asking why he was bothering me so late, and the soldier performed a dignified salute and gave his name as Kraut Selim, clarifying that a representative of Lord Russell sent him to serve as my private bodyguard. I fired up my secret scanning ability, my eyes flashing with binary code while I checked out the newcomer to see if he was actually useful, and a window displaying the attributes of Kraut Selim appeared, revealing that his power levels were absolutely off the charts, even though he acted modest while offering a greeting, since the cold hard numbers proved he was a god-level fighter in disguise. I was fanboying inside over his numbers, trying to recall if such a beast existed in the source material, though his name rang no bells, suggesting he probably bit the dust early in the original plot, and I saw that Kraut could reach the high 700s in levels, ranking him among the elite century of the world's most powerful beings, since possessing an A-rank tactical ability made him as rare as a shiny Pokemon in the wild. I gawked at Kraut, who appeared quite baffled by my creepy staring contest, as I began connecting the dots and questioning if he was secretly a celebrity warrior. My face hardened as a wild idea popped into my noggin, wondering if he was that legend. I suffered a miniature mental breakdown, wagging my head and yelling that there was no way such a thing was possible, since imagining a mythical executioner right there was just too much for my brain. I attempted to use logic, since the actual Grim Reaper was supposed to be a scrawny sad sack, whereas this Kraut fellow was stacked like a brick house and looked way too healthy. Just look at those biceps. Because Kraut was far too shredded to be the lanky ghost from the folk tales, so I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid. I inspected the guy's mug once more and saw that his gaze was far too bright and sincere, making it impossible for this pleasant warrior to be a heartless murderer. I chose to let the matter rest, figuring that overanalyzing without data was useless, while Kraut just stood around waiting for orders and wondering why his employer was acting like a total weirdo. I began strolling away, concluding that even if he wasn't a myth, his top-tier growth potential made him a keeper, with the knight trailing behind still attempting to start a conversation. I broke out of my trance when Kraut eventually managed to get through to me, as I had apparently drifted off into my own imagination. The knight seemed honestly concerned and asked if I was feeling okay after ignoring his calls, so I brushed it off by mumbling that everything was fine and asking for the latest updates. Kraut spilled the beans that our salesman called Gerard Mercer's was at the gates wanting a meeting, the name I instantly recalled from Gidris's earliest snitching session, and a brief mental replay confirmed that this Gerard fellow was the accountant for the Kosherin family's hidden treasures, responsible for the tax evasion and the enormous regional deficit. My eyes sparkled with intensity upon realizing that the moron Gidris was actually being honest, which made things spicy since the businessman had delivered himself right to my doorstep. I barked out in order to move, sprinting down the corridor so fast the crowd had to hustle to keep pace, eager to confront this traitor and uncover the full extent of the money laundering. During our trek, I pondered Kraut one last time, still skeptical he could be that mythic harbinger, while the man himself just looked shocked by my sudden athletic explosion. Our trio strode through the massive, fancy corridor of the palace, where the sheer size of the walls emphasized the gravity of the situation, and the giant door swung open with a bang as a servant ushered us in, signaling the start of our high-stakes mental chess match. So I entered the chamber as a greeting echoed, looking totally boss in my crimson cape which clearly identified me as the man in charge. A close-up shot captured my face as the merchant extended his welcome, showing me looking utterly bored and completely unimpressed. It was the ideal expression for a high-stakes meeting. Meet Gerard Merces, the man who bowed deeply, embodying the typical middle-aged businessman persona, complete with a slightly greasy smile. He identified himself as the proprietor of a modest trading company. I maintained my act, casually mentioning that even if his business wasn't gigantic, I'd heard it was highly regarded. I was essentially slathering him in compliments before preparing for the kill shot. I faked a bright, enthusiastic smile, waving my hand and assuring the merchant that skilled individuals like him were always welcome here. It was quite the performance. Gerard pretended humility, insisting I was flattering him. He was trying hard to portray a modest entrepreneur, but his ulterior motives were transparent. I took a seat and immediately demanded we get straight to business. I questioned why a successful merchant would seek an audience with me, since I technically held no official authority yet. I even suggested Gerard should have approached Russell's representative instead. Gerard let loose a booming laugh that resonated through the room. He was trying to relieve the tension, but Kraut watched his every move with hawk-like intensity. Gerard leaned in with a greasy spark, stating that while Russell might be temporarily in charge, the territory ultimately belonged to me. He was piling on the flattery to butter me up. We sat opposite each other across the sofa, and Gerard asked pointedly who in Shkekin would possibly dare to disobey my future decisions. He was making it abundantly clear that he already considered me the de facto boss. I again played the role of the humble prince, claiming I was only one of two heirs and advising Gerard not to overestimate my position. I was testing the merchant to see how much intelligence he had gathered. Gerard didn't skip a beat, dismissing my modesty immediately. He claimed that even though it hadn't been officially announced, rumors indicated the succession struggle was already finished and I had won. My expression sharpened as I noted Gerard possessed exceptionally keen ears for news that hadn't yet reached the public domain. The merchant had essentially confessed to running a spy network within the castle walls. Gerard gave a nervous little laugh when he realized he might have said too much. He started sweating slightly, recognizing that the supposedly naive prince might actually be sharper than he expected. He quickly attempted to apologize if his words were offensive, but that smug merchant grin remained fixed on his face. He was a complete professional at torquing his way out of awkward scenarios. Gerard then started bragging about his capabilities, claiming that if he didn't have access to secret intelligence, he wouldn't even be able to conduct business. He tried to spin his slip-up into a point of pride. Gerard's face turned completely serious as he analyzed me further. He was shocked because the rumors had described me as a simpleton, but the kid in front of him was cynical and astute. He began to wonder if I had spent a decade hiding my genuine personality. The thought that a teenager had managed to fool the entire world for such a long duration seemed completely unbelievable to him. The narrative perspective shifted, confirming that while the gossip about my personality was entirely false, the stories about my breathtaking beauty causing hearts to flutter were completely accurate. The flowery background imagery certainly underlined this fact. The full-page shoujo manga panel depicted me looking incredibly innocent and beautiful, framed by a cascade of roses. This clearly represented how the world perceived me on the surface. Gerard was literally blushing and almost drooling, thinking I was precisely his ideal type. This merchant was a total creep, and his behavior made the atmosphere in the room intensely uncomfortable. Back in reality, I looked absolutely disgusted by the merchant's creepy blushing. I was radiating a dark aura, signaling that I had completely reached the end of my patience with polite conversation. I slammed my hand onto the surface and stood up abruptly. I was finished with being courteous and prepared to terminate this meeting immediately if Gerard couldn't get to the point. I let out a low growl. I announced that I wasn't here to waste time and if he had no real agenda, I was leaving right now. I was forcefully asserting my dominance and putting him firmly back in his place. Close-up showed my glowing blue eyes, which looked genuinely terrifying. I had dropped all pretense and was showing the merchant exactly who he was attempting to manipulate. Gerard panicked completely and bowed low, begging me to remain seated. He knew that if I walked out at this moment, his complex plan to trap the territory in debt would immediately fail. He tried to regain his composure, claiming he was merely mesmerized by my striking appearance. He was sweating profusely and desperately trying to keep me from exiting the room. I stared at him with a deadpan expression, thinking, what a bizarre individual. And what an unsettling facial expression. I was not fooled by the merchant's sudden display of admiration. I commanded, that's enough idle chatter. Get to the point. As I resumed my seat, I had completely seized control of the interaction, and Gerard was visibly shaken by the abrupt shift. Gerard finally became serious, saying he was asked how he could assist a prince in my dire financial situation. He was attempting to frame his predatory loans as a generous act of aid. A large text bubble appeared, dropping the hammer. I have come to discuss a massive debt related to the late Earl Karin. This revelation was the merchant's primary source of power. I maintained my composure, acting as though this was completely new information to me. I mentioned that the territory's financial officer was currently locked away in a dungeon for criminal activities, effectively telling Gerard that his insider source was gone. Crowd immediately snapped, pointing a finger and shouting about how morally filthy the merchant was. He absolutely detested people who tried to exploit my family's tragedies. Gerard smirked, clearly still convinced he held the upper hand. He pointed out that 5 years had passed since the loan was issued, making it plausible that I wasn't personally aware of the paperwork. A close-up shot captured Gerard's wicked, jagged-toothed grin. He had been looking forward to this precise moment, eager to observe the look of pure despair on my beautiful face when I realized the debt was completely insurmountable. This was a peak moment of Gerard's delusion. He imagined me breaking down in tears and begging for mercy while roses bloomed around me. This merchant was truly operating on an entirely different plane of fantasy. He thought to himself that watching that level of despair was the ultimate source of bliss in life. He was truly a total sadist who derived pleasure from destroying families purely for financial gain. Back in reality, Gerard continued to discuss the intricacies of the contract. He explained that since 3 years had passed, he now had the authority to demand immediate repayment of both the initial principal and all accumulated interest. He looked down with a fake, mournful expression, whispering that he had to be careful not to reveal his inner delight. He informed me that the repayment deadline was in just 2 short weeks. Kraut was completely floored. screaming about a sum of 60,000 gold pieces, which Gerard confirmed was the total amount. That was an absolutely insane amount of money for a territory that was already financially ruined. I simply sat there with a perfectly blank, deadpan expression. I just responded with, "I see," which was definitely not the dramatic, panic reaction Gerard had been hoping for. Old man Gerard struggled to maintain his poker face while finding my chill vibe ironically cute, expecting me to eventually crumble like a soggy biscuit. My buddy Kraut suffered a massive brain freeze while imagining a skyscraper of 60,000 gold pieces, finally grasping the bottomless pit of our financial misery. The greasy salesman Musos flashed a nasty grin as if he won the lottery, but I simply stared back with sleepy eyes, completely unimpressed by his dramatic peacocking. Nervous Kraut leaked sweat like a broken faucet while begging for a timeline extension, fully aware our bank account was emptier than a desert and 2 weeks meant certain doom. Gerard wore his best resting jerk face while ignoring our pleas, acting like the professional loan shark he truly is. This massive room felt like a boxing ring between a greedy vulture and a broke prince facing a mountain of inherited debt. The merchant claimed my dead dad ruined our credit score, using corporate math to trap me like a rat in a cage. He leaned close to remind me their patience expired after a year, pretending to be reasonable while secretly sharpening his metaphorical teeth for the kill. Poor Kraut seemed ready for the loony bin as he whispered nonsense to himself, realizing that hitting things with a sword doesn't magically pay off a massive 60,000 gold debt. I squinted at the sneaky merchant, recognizing his fake kindness was actually a noose tightening around our necks. The 2-week limit was a blatant trap, not our gift, so I leaned in to startle the greedy man. I told him he might be missing some facts, keeping my voice smoother than butter despite being technically bankrupt. The guy looked doubtful when I brought up our yearly income of 6,000 coins, probably wondering why I was giving him a boring lecture on elementary school arithmetic. I casually mentioned that finding a new sucker to lend us 60,000 coins would be a total breeze, telling the shocked merchant to relax his aging face. Kraut wore a look of utter disbelief as if I had suddenly started speaking in riddles, clearly wondering which lunatic on the planet would actually lend us that much cash. The merchant chuckled like a movie villain and called me a clueless kid, assuming I was just talking trash to avoid looking pathetic. He stood up with a spooky green glow surrounding him as he got ready to bounce, promising to bring the paperwork for my inevitable surrender. I just kept staring at him with a poker face that revealed absolutely nothing, perfectly content letting that arrogant jerk believe I was just a naive child playing house. The greedy man flashed a shark-like smile as he mentally measured the curtains for my palace, convinced he already owned the place. He gave a mocking bow and fake well wishes on his way out, while I sat in the shadows looking like a mysterious boss. I watched his back with icy eyes, imagining how hilarious it would be to see him crying for mercy once I flipped the script. The creep was actually planning to sell me into slavery because he liked my face, hoping to flip my soul for profit after stealing my house. He paused at the exit with a drippingly sarcastic thank you, sounding so fake that it practically made my skin crawl with annoyance. The dude worked out with a cocky farewell that sounded like a punchline, genuinely believing he had just pulled off the greatest robbery in history without firing a shot. I remained standing as the heavy doors banged closed, the quiet air buzzing while my brain worked overtime to plot a massive revenge scheme against that arrogant thief. My knight was having a seizure trying to calculate how many centuries of minimum wage work it would take to clear our massive debt. I told the poor guy to shut up and take a seat, acting more bothered by his noise than the actual bankruptcy facing us. He yelled like a crazy person about my weirdly calm attitude, thinking the kingdom was ending while I was busy memorizing mountain maps. I recalled a prisoner mentioning a hidden treasure stash in the highlands, and I knew exactly which dusty old basement it was buried in. The digital window appeared as I scanned for old buildings, using my gamer brain to pinpoint exactly where that merchant hid his stolen lunch money. Exploring outside safety was no work in the park since this world was packed with beasts that would love to eat a prince for breakfast. The mountain area was crawling with angry monsters and high-level thugs, making it a place where a single run term meant an immediate funeral. The glowing red eye of a beast showed that the hills were not friendly, proving this wasn't a camping trip but a death wish for anyone who lacked pro gamer skills. Night fell over the peaceful town as I marched through the dark alleys with a specific target in mind, while Kraut followed me like a bewildered golden retriever. He kept asking why we were out past bedtime, obviously thinking the stress of the dead had finally made my brain snap. I told him I required a local tour guide for the scary mountains, reviewing my inventory of people to see who wouldn't die immediately. I remembered a certain assassin who preferred living over dying, figuring she would be the perfect GPS, so I headed to the dungeon. The sleepy guard jumped when he saw me, clearly not expecting a royal visit during his late-night snack break. Kraut stared at my sinister expression, realizing that whenever I look this happy, some poor soul is about to get their life ruined. The guard gave me a stiff salute and a polite greeting as I reached the iron bars, suggesting the staff were finally learning some manners for once. I thanked the guy for his service and told him to get lost, explaining I needed some quality one-on-one time with our resident criminal. I stepped into the old office while Kraut hovered behind me like a bodyguard, surprised to see the place actually looked decent for once. The new tenant clearly had better taste than the previous corrupt jerk, having turned the dump into a cozy little home. I spotted Lila and hummed at her progress, noting how she had cleaned up the mess and ditched her edgy assassin outfit for a normal dress. She stood up looking quite fancy, though she complained that the previous owner had terrible, overpriced taste in furniture. I gave her a cheeky smile and complimented her appearance, trying to be nice before I forced her into some dangerous manual labor. Lyle yawned and said she was doing great, acting way too chill for someone who recently tried to murder me in my sleep. Kraut lost his temper and barked at her to show some respect, clearly not a fan of her sassy attitude toward royalty. The girl looked bored while I stayed relaxed, and the tension in the room grew thicker than a bowl of cold oatmeal. I locked eyes with her and reminded her that she was a big fat liar whose life was still technically on the chopping block. She jumped when I brought up the poison, especially when I mentioned I had given her a little taste of my own secret recipe. The spooky image of a Grim Reaper appeared as I asked if she knew about the legendary puppet toxin, using its scary name to freak her out. Lila screamed that I was a total liar, convinced a spoiled rich kid like me couldn't possibly score such a rare and highly illegal chemical weapon. I leaned closer with a freezing gaze, reminding her that cash is king and I have more connections than she could ever dream of. She started sweating as the realization hit her that I wasn't joking, making her look like a cornered cat. I let out a dark grin, thoroughly enjoying the moment she finally understood that her life was officially in my hands. I teased her for catching on so quickly, messing with her mind just enough to ensure she stayed obedient and didn't try to pull any fast ones. Leela leaned back on the polished surface, her question hanging in the air like a perfectly aimed dart. So, after all this effort, you finally decided you can't live without me. She was a true professional, an expert in reading desperate clients. My poker face remained unchipped, yet my ears were definitely perked, anticipating her next move, the sign of true collaboration. Instead, Leela unleashed her inner rebel, declaring my directives were no longer her cup of tea. She playfully hinted that a private, intense rendezvous might just sway her opinion, attempting to weave a spell with her dangerous charm. She even licked her lips with a come-hither smile, clearly trying to reel me in, knowing full well that a distracted target, especially for an assassin like her, was simply a dead one. She coolly informed me that earning her assistance would require an exceptional performance, turning our conversation into quite the spicy tango, though I showed no sign of taking the bait. Proud, having apparently reached his limit for dramatic flair, unsheathed his blade with a furious roar, ready to silence the insolent woman then and there, but a raised hand from me halted his heroic, albeit premature, intervention. I met Leela's gaze head-on, informing her I was offering a lifeline, the chance at survival, effectively ditching the parlor games for the unforgiving, concrete truth of her precarious predicament. Leela squinted skeptically, wondering aloud what exactly I meant, clearly realizing her siren song had bombed spectacularly, thus forcing her back into a purely defensive stance. I bluntly explained that setting her free would be a fast track to meeting her maker, the moment she stepped beyond these castle walls, reminding her that her former employers weren't fans of loose ends, the policy as strict as a librarian's. I let out a weary sigh, allowing the gravity of her situation to truly sink in, essentially giving her a menu of options, guaranteed death outside or a lottery ticket to survival by joining my quirky ensemble. Kraut-eyed the assassin with deep suspicion as I brought up the ongoing feud with the Viscount Kusharin's rather testy family, highlighting how the political chessboard was becoming an absolute mess for every player involved. Leela sat perched on the table, absorbing my lecture about how, given her monumental failure and the sealing of Grumbin's Marner, her old associates would show absolutely no mercy, a revelation that finally painted her as a ghost already working among the living. I dubbed her the star witness, the singular catalyst for this entire magnificent mess, pointing out that to her former benefactors, she was simply the ultimate, inconvenient loose thread, betting to be neatly snipped. Leela looked utterly poleaxed, her complexion draining to a ghostly white, accompanied by a little gasp of shock, as she finally grasped the full, horrifying extent of her abandonment. She slumped there, a visibly broken figure, realizing that retracting her statement wouldn't save her skin, and even if it did, it certainly wouldn't reverse Grumbin's social death sentence, meaning her old family would still be sharpening their axes for her head. I neatly tied it all up, explaining that the Kusharin family's grand scheme to snatch territory had been utterly squashed, effectively showing her the final score, and dear Leela was definitely in the losing column. I informed her in no uncertain terms that nobles rarely permit those who obstruct their grand designs to draw another breath, especially if they hail from humble stock, essentially clarifying that her life held precisely zero value to the very people she'd once served. Leela's eyes held a horned glaze, as she quietly confessed to witnessing countless lives extinguished like mere insects in service to the gentry, a grim fate she never imagined would land squarely on her own plate, and the brutal truth was now absolutely crushing her spirit. She gritted her teeth, her gaze burning with a fierce, intensely personal fury, then groaned, Aspen, why must it always be me, hitting her emotional rock bottom with a resounding thud. In a sudden burst of pure, unadulterated panic and rage, her hand shot out, snatching up either a glass pitcher or a heavy candlestick from the nearby table, moving with lightning speed, driven by an urgent, primal urge to simply lash out at anyone within arm's reach. Kraut's reflexes were instant, but she was already a whirlwind of motion, screaming for me to perish as she hurtled forward. Leela became a dangerous blur, launching herself from the table, the glass object held high overhead, aiming for a kill shot, her face contorted into a mask of pure, murderous frenzy. A close-up of her hand gripped the improvised weapon as she brought it down with savage force, pouring every last ounce of her desperate will into this one, last-ditch strike. I found myself smack dab in the middle of her desperate assault, looking up with eyes wide and comically shocked, realizing this was the ultimate video game over screen, wondering if I could actually survive a surprise attack from a cornered, highly motivated assassin. Leeler's impromptu attack was abruptly cut short by a colossal hand that snatched her mid-swing, the glass weapon she wielded stopping dead in its tracks against Kraut's sheer, immovable strength. The impact sent her hurtling backward, as Kraut effortlessly shoved her away, letting out a roar of disgust at the filthy assassin while Leeler visibly recoiled from the unexpected force of his mighty shove. Kraut positioned himself protectively between me and the would-be assailant, his hand already resting on his sword hilt, practically fuming as he demanded to know how a mere common killer dared to defy me, of all people. Leeler lay sprawled on the cold floor, panting heavily, clutching her side with a pained groan, looking completely defanged, finally realizing her new escort operated in an entirely different league than her own. I maintained a perfectly serene composure, informing Kraut that while his protective instincts were charming, there was really no need to excessively belittle her. I then gazed down at her with a detached air of someone inspecting a faulty appliance, pondering whether to repair it or simply toss it out. Kraut bowed his head in a deeply apologetic gesture, clearly feeling he'd overstepped, but I simply waved it off, reminding him that Leeler, in a weird twist of fate, had actually been quite helpful to my cause. I began waxing philosophical, musing that people often despise the bearer of inconvenient truths far more than the scoundrels who actually ruin their lives, essentially delivering a lecture while she was still on the floor, which, let's be honest, was a power move worthy of a villain in a melodrama. Leela peered up at me through a curtain of disheveled hair, her eyes brimming with a potent mix of exhaustion and bitter resentment. I then casually asked her why she thought that might be, forcing her to stare directly into her own rather bleak reflection. I patiently explained that folks simply pick hate over truth because it's the path of least resistance, a much easier stroll, while Leela just sat defeated on the rug, proud observing the whole uncomfortable scene. I knelt down to her level, a move designed to appear empathetic but merely serving to deliver another verbal blow, informing her that screaming and crying offers only a fleeting, second burst of relief, systematically dismantling her emotional shields with icy, unyielding logic. I flashed a truly devious, almost razor-sharp smile, remarking that her fierce, stubborn will to survive was, in fact, her most valuable asset, having already slotted her neatly into my grand, unfolding scheme. Leela fixated on the floor for what felt like an eternity before finally uttering a barely audible, "Of course not." That tenacious survival instinct was still flickering, and I knew I'd just found the precise emotional button I needed to enthusiastically push. She practically shrieked that she absolutely refused to die, her face a mask of pure, manic desperation, clinging to her existence with every fiber of her being, which, naturally, was exactly the melodramatic declaration I was waiting to hear. A close-up showed my mouth curling into a satisfied, almost smug grin, as I mentally congratulated myself, realizing she truly couldn't afford the luxury of dying, making her the perfect high-stakes pawn for my next brilliant maneuver. I then announced, "Alright, this should make you somewhat useful," rising to my feet with an unnervingly cheerful demeanor. Leela simply stared at me with a bewildered expression, as if she'd misplaced a few key script pages. I proceeded to offer her a rather tempting proposal. If she joined my ranks, I'd become her personal bodyguard against the Kosherin family's hit squads, and I even threw in a promise to look after her family, should she have one, like a good little pension plan. Leela looked genuinely rattled, her expression morphing into one of deep suspicion as she queried what exactly I meant by that, the mention of her family evidently striking a nerve she hadn't anticipated me hitting. She snapped at me, demanding I keep her family out of our messy affairs, accusing me of planning to use them as bargaining chips, now entirely on the defensive, cowering in the corner, warning me not to mess with her. I simply let loose a loud, profoundly mocking laugh that reverberated around the room, thoroughly enjoying her fear, instructing her not to jump to conclusions, because frankly, I wouldn't shed a single tear if she simply expired on the spot. I stared down at her with utter contempt, stating that assassins of her caliber were about as rare as a rogue sock in the laundry, making it abundantly clear she was 100% expendable if she failed to cooperate. Leela was absolutely furious, yet she had her concede that in the eyes of her high noble, she was nothing but a disposable tool. She challenged me, demanding to know why I was even wasting time trying to convince her when I had a kingdom full of other options. I peered over my shoulder, my eyes icy, and delivered my primary rationale. It saved me the hassle of looking for anyone new. I was being relentlessly practical, treating her as if she were just another spare part in my inventory. The second reason was incredibly simple. I already knew she was a survivor, tough as nails. I looked her directly in the eye and informed her she had exactly 1 minute to decide her own fate. I raised a single finger, starting the countdown on her life right there in front of her. I told her that if she refused, I would simply grant her the absolute freedom she so desperately craved, which everyone understood was a polite way of saying I'll kill you now. Leela watched my hand, finally comprehending the immense gravity of the choice before her. There are no other options, she thought miserably, realizing I had her trapped in a corner with zero avenues for escape. She lowered her head, letting her long hair completely obscure her features as she reflected on her career as an assassin. She had been continuously pulled into missions to pursue and eliminate traitors to her former organization. She clenched her fists so tightly it began to tremble, resolving that she had to do whatever it took to keep breathing, even if others called her selfish for it. She grudgingly admitted she might hate this little runt, but she knew he was her only viable lifeline. Leela looked up with a determined expression, and said, "Alright, I understand." She had officially traded in her pride for the sake of survival. I watched her with detached amusement, noting that the Shaken and Kosherin families had already crossed a critical line of no return. I predicted that soon enough, one of them would be completely annihilated. A truly villainous grin spread across my face as I declared how much more beneficial it would be if the Kashirin family were the ones to vanish completely. I was finally starting to sound like a genuinely ruthless master of this territory. I told Leeler, finally, you're starting to catch on, flashing a wide, creepy grin. I was thrilled she finally shared my perspective. Leeler then stood up, ready to set her own ground rules. She demanded to be treated as a contracted mercenary, not some low-level subordinate, and specified that she would ignore any orders unrelated to the mission. Prout was hovering in the background, looking like he was about to burst from her insolence. I just let out a weary sigh as my new ally immediately began to issue her demands. Prout yelled at her again, wanting her to watch her mouth when speaking to me. He was taking his whole loyal knight persona far more seriously than I was. Leela held up her hands and told Kraut to relax, even calling me her employer. She was attempting to establish dominance in the room, which Kraut did not appreciate in the slightest. She gave Kraut a sassy look, asking if he was really planning to rough up his new partner. She even brought up the fact that he was supposed to value chivalry, which was a truly dirty blow. Kraut was practically smoking with rage, muttering under his breath about having allies like her. He seemed like he wanted to punch a wall just thinking about being forced to work with an assassin. The two of them were staring each other down in silence, creating a palpable tension thick enough to cut. Kraut looked ready to draw his sword at any second while Leeler acted completely unbothered. Kraut suddenly recalled something I mentioned a few days prior, and a light bulb finally flickered on in his head. He realized that my grand plan had been in motion for quite some time. Leela confirmed the location. It was the Golder Highlands, where the merchant's secret vault was located, right in the heart of her old stomping grounds. The scene flashed back to a bleak training camp where the Kashirin Shadow troops train war orphans. It looked like a scorching hot, miserable facility for Gulf's special unit, definitely not a destination for a relaxing vacation. Back in the present, Prout asked what exactly I was so excited about when he noticed my sudden burst of enthusiasm for the location. I was already busy planning my next big heist. I pointed a finger and explained that I alone could access the window map. I claimed I possessed a special map detailing the entire kingdom and the area surrounding the Kashirin territory. Prout looked highly skeptical, immediately pointing out that a perfectly serviceable large map was readily available in the military council room. He was trying to apply real-world logic to a guy with a video game HUD. I simply yelled at them to go and charge out of the room with a massive grin. Prout trailed behind, complaining about my ridiculously high levels of useless energy. Kraut held the door open with a polite, "After you, my lord," desperately trying to keep up his knightly decorum while following his chaotic boss. Leeler and I worked side by side, but I kept looking back. I was confused about why the knight was following us instead of leading the way as he was supposed to. Kraut asked if I was lost, since he was ordered to be the guide. I snapped back that I knew exactly where we were going, but insisted he take point anyway. Shibai Mai was practically pushing Kraut forward, shouting at him to speed up. Kraut was sweating bullets, lamenting internally that knights should follow their lords, not the other way around. We finally reached the military council room, which was crammed with bookshelves and massive tables. I looked around and quietly said, "This is her," preparing to show off my superior map knowledge. Leeler and I stood beside a table, examining old documents. The room was dimly lit, adding to the high-stakes atmosphere of our planning session. A large top-down map was spread out on the table, a map which, according to the narration, contained the highest level of military secrets on the entire Elan continent. I was lost in thought, repeating the words, "Golder Highlands," to myself. My eyes were intently searching for that specific landmark that would lead me directly to the gold. I shouted, "I found it," and pointed my finger at the specific spot on the map marked Golder. I turned to the others and asked what information they had about this particular area. Prout immediately interjected, explaining it was a well-known area where the Kashirin family and Baron Revan were currently fighting over territory. It sounded like an absolute geopolitical nightmare. A close-up shot focused on Kraut's eye as he explained that the region possessed high-quality copper mines, but development had been completely stalled due to the constant fighting. It was essentially a gold mine that nobody could get near. I asked the single most important question, is Baron Revan on our side? I needed to identify my allies before I started digging for treasure in what sounded like an active war zone. Prout confirmed with a hesitant, "Yes, that's correct," but I remained skeptical. I demanded to know how accurate the map was and when it had last been updated. Prout admitted he didn't know for sure, while Leeler added that the map looked outdated but probably didn't contain any major errors. She was already proving her worth as a valuable local guide, testing her skills. I questioned if a simple paper map would suffice for her navigation, pausing the girl to smirk and boast she had owned those woods since her toddler days. Kraut wondered why those dusty golden highlands were so vital, so I revealed my master plan to explore a set of crumbling ancient ruins. The girl seemed completely blindsided, swearing she spent her entire life there without encountering any mention of mountain relics, making me remember the restricted zones my elders mentioned. I grew quiet while piecing it together and realizing those banned spots were likely the specific coordinates for the hidden cache I was pursuing, which is why my look turned so intense. The camera zoomed in on the girl's bewildered face as she processed that a total stranger knew her backyard better than she did, making the Highland mystery even weirder. Acting like a professional detective, I grilled the scout regarding the Kashirin family's hidden squad, while the big guy watched her confess that her former employers kept a private army in the shadows. Leaning forward with an intense stare, I demanded to know the starting point for these stealthy soldiers, because they wanted their hidden agenda rather than just a time on a clock. The scout mentioned being a 5-year veteran from the 6th graduating class, wondering why on earth I was so obsessed with the boring details of her employment history. Crowd actually became useful for a change, mentioning a border spat from 15 years back that made the whole timeline feel fishier than a seafood market. The shot focused on my finger drumming against the wooden table while my brain cells worked overtime, finally linking that old conflict to the birth of those sneaky squads. When Crowd asked if I cored a lead, I played dumb and pretended to be clueless, even though I had basically solved the entire mystery in my head while he watched. Tension spiked as I gave them the silent treatment, leading Crowd to finally snap at the girl for acting way too relaxed while he was stressed out. My companions started a chaotic shouting match while clutching each other's faces, proving they had the romantic chemistry of a toaster and a bathtub, which was comedic gold. I interrupted their squabble to mention that growing a secret army isn't cheap, reminding them that you can't exactly build an elite shadow force with pocket change. While Crowd pouted over his damaged pride, the scout let out a bored sigh and asked me to get to the point already instead of giving a lecture. I delivered the punchline by revealing the Kasharans definitely found a secret pity bank, pausing Crowd to mumble that I was a complete moron under his breath, quoting the big guy's earlier info. I confirmed the family hit the jackpot right when the war began, looking like a total cinematic genius in the dim room light. I detailed how that illicit cash definitely paid for their secret army and shadow operations, using the classic villainous playbook where dirty money buys a private force. The girl looked down, realizing she was merely a small piece in a massive, corrupt machine and wondering what those dark missions were actually for if profit was a real goal. She grew intense, demanding to know what this mountain of cash had to do with the ruins, finally understanding that I wasn't searching for ancient history but was actually hunting for the family's secret wallet. I dropped some expert geology knowledge by explaining that copper mines usually sit right next to silver veins, noting that ore often hides the shiny stuff from untrained eyes. Prout looked absolutely horrified, asking if I was accusing the Kasharan family of secret precious metal extraction, since he knew that digging for silver without a royal permit was a crime that led straight to the gallows. I told them to use their nuggins and imagine finding a silver mine, which is exactly the kind of secret that gets people buried in child graves. I noted that no sane aristocrat would ever report a silver discovery to the king, essentially calling the Kasharans a bunch of tax-dodging backstabbers who love hoarding loot. Prout finally asked about the status of the ruins, prompting the girl to mention she was very familiar with the location, even if she still doubted any actual treasure was waiting for us. Sporting a devious grin, I claimed those old ruins were the ultimate hiding spot, confirming that the family vault was sitting there right under everyone's noses. The scout remained doubtful and asked if I was actually insane enough to ignite a full-scale war just to fill our empty pockets, clearly questioning my mental health. With a pained expression, Crowd confessed we were too broke to even dream of a war, admitting our side was basically bringing a spoon to a sword fight. I told them reporting it to the crown was a bad move since the king would just steal the mine, so we had to loot the place first to save our own skins. Lowering my head in fake defeat, I confessed our land was nearly broke, making this daring heist the only thing keeping us from becoming professional beggars. While Crowd and the girl watched me with a blend of pity and utter confusion, I focused on the massive pile of accumulated cash just waiting in those highlands. I flashed a wicked grin, pointing out that since all the gold was earned through illegal schemes, the Kasharans wouldn't be able to report it stolen or sue us if it suddenly vanished, which I figured was a total genius play since criminals can't exactly go to the police for help. Later that night under a cinematic blue moon, the castle was thick with tension as our squad prepared for a late-night tax collection heist. Down in the courtyard, the veteran soldier Russell spotted us and shouted my name, looking like a man who had some serious concerns weighing heavily on his grizzled old mind. While Kraut stood there looking jittery, Russell pulled me aside to express his deep worries about trusting an inexperienced kid with such a suicidal mission into the Highlands. Acting like the world's biggest party pooper, the old man started lecturing me on how sprinting toward danger usually ends in a funeral. He tried his absolute hardest to convince me to scrap the whole plan and stay home where it was safe. Flashing a cheeky smile, I told the veteran he sounded like a worried grandmother, explaining that it was crucial for prospects like the big guy to face intense pressure to reach their potential. Look at the crimson mud on Kraut. The dude is practically glowing since I boosted his ego. He muttered, Malish, confirming his status as my #1 stan. I ditched the facade, eyeballing Russell while admitting that ditching the Ford during a crisis was a total dice roll. This isn't madness, it is just some very spicy math. Russell stood there like a glitching NPC before muttering a soft, understood. He finally accepted that the pampered little porcelain prince was dead and buried. The man lowered his noggin, confessing that his own logic was about as deep as a puddle. He swore his blade to me, ordering the squad to treat my every whim like a divine mandate. Captain Sirius snapped back to reality, barking at the grunts to stay sharp around me. He promised them a world of hurt if I ended up with even a tiny scratch on my royal hide. Prout returned to his hyperactive settings, throwing out double thumbs and yelling, relax, I get this. His battery level is honestly annoying, but his golden retriever energy is infectious. Russell served up a spicy head smack to the clown, demanding some actual professionalism for once. I just stood there watching the veteran give the rookie a vertical tune-up, foot force slam against the dirt in a rhythmic beat as the guys formed up. The air tasted like high-stakes drama and military precision as they geared up for the trek. Russell barked orders while rocking the crimson fit like a true protagonist. He made it crystal clear that keeping me alive was their only real job today. The squad looked locked in, hearing the boss ramble about how I was still basically held together by bandages. He was shamelessly milking my near-death experience to boost their morale. He kept the hype train rolling, insisting I cooked up the suicide mission purely for the good of the people. The guy was basically writing my fanfiction, making me look like a tactical genius to the plebs. The big man gave the ultimate command to fall in, and the boys let out a roar of agreement that probably shook the rafters. It was peak cinema, honestly. 2 men on my face as I spectated the chaos. I had the devious strategist smirk, likely tallying up the massive friendship bonuses I just milked from this scripted event. The grunts were gossiping about how no fighter wants a frail boss, and here I was being bold. I could feel the respect meter climbing, realizing that farming XP and charisma is part of the grind. Leela observed the circus from beneath her cloak, keeping her poker face perfectly intact. She stood there like an emo background character while the aristocrats played house. Suddenly we were staring down a hole so dark it would make a charcoal factory jealous. This felt like one of those pro-gamer shortcuts you only find in a walkthrough guide. Kraut took point, descending a sketchy rope ladder into the abyss. The visual made it pretty obvious that this pipe was way tighter and deeper than it looked. He bit down on a lantern like some kind of basement-dwelling action hero, mulling over my safety with every step. He clearly hated bringing royalty into a glorified sewer. I tailed him while making noncommittal noises, wiggling through a cramped rock corridor. The dim light made the walls look like they were dancing in a very spooky way. The group finally touched down with a wet thud, splashing into some mystery liquid. We hit the floor, and now the actual slob through the muck officially starts. Kraut gestured forward, clarifying that this damp sewer was our VIP pass out of the fortress. He seemed twitchy, mentioning that the walk to freedom was going to be a long one. The glow highlighted a creepy cabin overflowing with puddles and pointy ceiling rocks. This place screamed secret level or a spot where a boss fight definitely happens. I yelled for the squad to move out, and Kraut barked a firm affirmative as we marched into the gloom. We were on a mission now, venturing into the great unknown. The camera panned behind as we slogged through the sooty passage. Our tiny flickering lamps were the only thing preventing us from becoming permanent residents of the void. The troops trailed behind in a tidy queue, firelight bouncing off the puddles like a classic dungeon crawler game. We hit a misty patch, peering like specters floating through the haze. The only noise was a wet slap of boots in the heavy silence. Kraut froze, eyes bulging at something up ahead. He hollered, "Check it out." As his light hit a gigantic rock contraption. I was wheezing like a broken accordion, totally drained by the physical labor. Kraut declared we made it, and my face showed pure relief at finally escaping that damp hellhole. I grabbed a massive metal crank on the bricks, grumbling about my lack of upper body strength. Kraut gushed over my ability to spot the secret lever like a seasoned veteran. An ear-splitting screech of grinding stone echoed as the gear shifted. I clenched my jaw, thinking, mission accomplished, while the hidden passage finally creaked wide. Kraut offered me his paw, telling me to hold tight. He was playing the role of the devoted bodyguard perfectly, ensuring I did not faceplant right at the finish line. I took his hand, highlighting the hilarious size difference between my tiny fingers and his metal mitt. We were tag teaming this bonus level like a couple of legends. I choked on my surprise as I hauled myself into the fresh room, looking completely floored by the view. The mystery of the Highlands was finally out in the open. I poked my head through a floor hatch like a bewildered prairie dog, asking for our location while scanning the ancient dust. Kraut was chilling by the exit, propped up against a broken mill door. He flashed a grin and pointed toward the sun, beckoning me to follow him out. I finally caught a glimpse of the outdoors and let out a little yelp of wonder. The landscape was actually gorgeous, providing a much-needed mental reset after our subterranean vacation. Skyward perspectives captured a cramped, frantic base position near the timber plant, where Kraut kept badgering me to finally climb the stallion. The man seemed positively radioactive with joy while pointing at the ready hosses, proving he adored his profession even if my spirit remained completely drained. My boots marched past with a grimace, demanding he stop the noble babble, because our group approached a combat zone where yelling my status guaranteed a funeral. I dictated fresh protocols, requesting the title of Junior Master, which shocked Kraut into a quiet nod. I surveyed the squad, finding the peddler costumes entirely weird, knowing if we appeared fraudulent, our undercover ploy was essentially junk. He hollered his consent but fumbled his speech, uttering the junior label instead of his usual royal address as his brain failed to override his ancient training or control his flapping lips. I questioned if every single demand had been met, causing him to appear jittery, mumbling a weak confirmation that sounded like he was delivering a death sentence. I lifted a vendor's robe that seemed unacquainted with water for a century, radiating visible clouds of stench, and voiced my disgust regarding the necessity of donning such an absolute biohazard. I wore a mischievous grin, hinting Kraut could trade for the luggage carrier's attire or perhaps simulate a marriage with Leela, which served as the peak intimidation tactic. We completely panicked, yelling his compliance, as he preferred munching on soil over faking a domestic life with a spine-chilling lady slayer. Leela remained still in the rear, a gloomy shadow beneath her cowl, peering indifferent to the reality that her presence induced massive shivering in others. Our fake sales team eventually departed through the hazy woods, a modest appearance for royalty and his wars, but ideal for an illicit grab and go. I gazed at the floor with a moody, irritated vibe, fed up with the night's theatrical whining and feeling the soldiers spoke far too many pointless words. The hidden friction felt heavy while Kraut marched in front and I seethed behind, and even with squash cartoon proportions, our lack of unity was obvious. Kraut maintained a solemn, damp expression while guiding the mare, attempting to validate his feelings by acknowledging that his fright was genuinely authentic. The man attempted a brief chivalrous act, offering his palm and inquiring about departure. His effort to connect with Leeler felt like a disaster. He stood abandoned with his limb outstretched as the masked individual simply blinked, creating a heavy quietness that made Kraut's dignity shrivel up. Leeler dismissed him with a freezing comment about his obstruction, rejected the polite title, and commanded him to step aside, effectively pulverizing his pleasantry. I observed the entire catastrophe from the edge with a stunned face, recognizing that our collective synergy was basically a zero at the moment. I saw them head toward different horizons, pondering the abyssal social chemistry between my underlings, which failed to meet my grand expectations of harmony. I donned a somber, anxious mask, reflecting on the benefits of friendly bonds, knowing that without cohesion, they would build subgroups and brawl constantly. The tight focus on Leeler's visage beneath the fabric showed a mood like a stormy weekend, making me fret that someone would expire or resign without a morale fix. I visualized a grim scenario where Kraut and Leeler traded sword blows in a fatal fight, realizing that our division among my crew meant a lonely trip to the cemetery. I stayed at the firmament, questioning if this realm exceeded its digital code, perhaps crafted by a deity to reflect the messy sentiments of reality. I noticed Leeler stroll into the carts and wondered if some covert assistance might foster her devotion, showing I was finally developing a supervisor's mindset. Kraut yanked me from my profound musings, bellowing that the gear was packed, returning my focus to the current situation and the upcoming march. I mentioned we should maximize the distance from the stronghold before the sun rose, and Kraut barked in agreement using my new title before we began. The convoy navigated the pitch-black timbers while Kraut swung the light at the front, mimicking a standard questing sequence as we exited our protected zone. The zoom on the rotating spokes sinking into the soil underscored the trek, while the groan of timber was a solitary noise. From the clouds, the string of wagons meandered along the tight path, maintaining a sluggish speed to dodge prying eyes. The squad pours to pitch tents, with laborers and sentries gathering near a toasted hearth, presenting a serene evening for a collection of ordinary traders. The expedition persisted into the following morning, with the vehicles gliding down a bright, tree-lined avenue as we advanced further into the secluded countryside. Kraut loitered in a local bazaar, masquerading flawlessly as a basic seller by the apple crates, keeping a sharp lookout for danger while we traversed the area. I was bundled in my crimson mantle, perched on a box within a bustling plaza, enjoying a short break while analyzing the inhabitants of the frontier. Our dusty wagon train chugged across the blistering flatlands like ants on a frying pan. We had officially abandoned civilization, drifting into those sketchy areas where maps just give up and stop existing. Darkness fell and the guys huddled around a puny flame, trying to stop their teeth from rattling. Everyone whispered like they were sharing secrets in a library, sensing the bad guys nearby. Big guy Kraut and I shared the warmth, while I realized today's village was the final stop for safety, meaning things were about to get spicy and lethal. I commanded the crew to ditch their fake outfits and stop pretending to be peasants. My hair did the majestic hero flutter in the breeze, making me look super stylish while I braced myself for the upcoming brawl. Some mystery meat soup simmered over the logs, acting as our last decent meal before the chaos hit. Once the sun rose, we were done playing dress-up as traveling salesmen. I gave the embers a look so intense they almost went out, announcing that the vacation was officially over. I was itching to flex my pro skills and show everyone I was not just a mascot. The squad donned their heavy armor, looking like a bunch of terrifying shadows, with Kraut and Leela trailing my lead. Our wheels kicked up a massive cloud of dirt as we floored it toward our goal. Now that the costumes were in the trash, everyone felt the pressure to move. From a bird's eye view, the team raced through a gap in the trees, making a beeline for the Gorder Highlands with zero hesitation. Big Kraut froze in his tracks, squinting like he saw a ghost in the distance. He turned into a human radar, scanning the thick branches for any hidden jerks waiting to jump us. He cheered loudly when he spotted our scouts galloping back, and I leaned in, dying to know the latest gossip from the front lines. The sweaty scout sprinted over, gasping that our gang of farce Sasquatches was chilling on our path. This was our first actual boss fight of the trip. Kraut looked like he had seen a bill he could not pay, muttering, 5 of them, because he knew that many hairy beasts meant a total wipeout for normal guys. Pan in a leather glove casually fixed a hood, looking way too relaxed for someone about to fight monsters. I was already cooking up a genius strategy in my brain. I looked at the giant man and told him to hurl me into the branches. I needed a high ground view of the carnage before we started the party. The big lug flashed his pearly whites and gave me a cheerful, "Des, sir." He honestly loved participating in my weird and wacky tactical ideas. Kraut snatched me by the belt, using his ridiculous muscles to launch me like a rocket. The sheer force of his heave made it look like I was being shot out of a cannon. The guy was carrying me around like a confused puppy while we leaped. I made a very unheroic squeak as I found myself soaring toward a leafy limb. We stuck the landing on a sturdy branch, getting a sweet view of the woods and the peaks. It was a perfect spot to spy on the baddies without them seeing our faces. Kraut kept me from falling while we balanced like squirrels. I caught sight of the hairy creeps and yelled, "Found them," all pointing my finger at the meadow. Up close, the forest Sasquatch looked like a nightmare on a bad hair day. It was a giant gray monkey with pointy fangs and a face only a mother could love, looking much tougher than your average tutorial enemies. Those beasts were hanging out by skull-top poles, glowing with a weird purple mist that screamed bad news. It looked like they were setting the table for dinner, and we were the steak. One of them glared with laser-red eyes, looking totally feral. All the narrator reminded us these dudes were no joke. Kraut, still holding me like luggage, asked me, "What is the move, boss?" Ready to wreck house the moment I said go. I jumped right in and started yelling instructions, telling them to trap the exit with some spicy fire arrows. Kraut nearly dropped me, screaming for me to slow my roll for a second. My face went full villain mode as I screamed my cold-blooded plan at the top of my lungs. Kraut looked genuinely spooked, asking if I had finally lost my marbles. He finally saw that I was playing for keeps and not just fooling around. Leor was chilling against a trunk, giving me a look that said I was being a dummy. She started her sentence with, "Sorry kid, puss," in a tone that definitely meant she was about to ruin my fun. Kraut chimed in with a frown, reading with her logic. He explained that this was not about looking awesome on camera, but about keeping our dudes from getting turned into Sasquatch snacks. I was absolutely steaming, squinting and clenching my jaw like I had just been insulted. I was definitely feeling salty about the feedback, but I was not about to trash my brilliant idea. The camera pulled back to show the massive woods, with me perched like a bird while Leo waited on the ground. The gap between us really showed how much I was treating this whole war like a video game level. I sat there pouting, knowing I had more monster lore in my head than any scholar alive, but I had zero evidence to back it up. I was basically a guy on the internet saying, "Trust me bro," without any receipts. Kraut leaped up and hauled me back down like a heavy bag of flour. I let out a long sigh and canned the fire idea, vowing to find a way to win without a high body count. I stumped back to the tents, knowing that even if I won over Kraut, those Blue Lion Knights were going to be a bunch of tough critics to impress. I marched past Lilo with my red cape fluttering like a dramatic movie hero, already crunching the stats for our next move. Suddenly, we were back at the main camp where the soldiers were huddled around a tent. The mood was so heavy you could have carved it up and served it for lunch. Inside my head, I was screaming and turning shades of violet. The current plan was basically just, cope for the best and fight hard, which is a total rookie mistake for a hardcore gamer like me. I put on my serious face, knowing if I did not show some actual value and get some respect, I was just dead weight. It was high time to stop being a noob and start acting like a real leader. Leela stood by a tree looking like she stepped out of an action movie. She barked at the squad to move out now, letting everyone know the torquing phase was finished and the hitting phase was starting. The view from above captured the entire army getting their gear ready to roll. The job looked impossible to most, but I was already playing 4D chess while they were playing checkers. I hopped back into the cart, chilling on a pile of hay while my brain worked overtime. I needed a quick breather before the whole world decided to explode into pure madness. Peering from our wooden taxi, I informed Leela we needed a chat because I was cooking up a fresh scheme for our little stroll. She sauntered toward me with a puzzled brow, and it seemed we were forming a professional bond that was getting delightfully awkward. My companion delivered some brutal honesty, claiming our current strategy was a funeral march that would end in a messy pile of corpses. Kraut stood there bathing in golden rays like a bargain bin protagonist, swearing he trusted me to rescue the squad even if he croaked. I gave her a knowing glance and confessed I wasn't as oblivious to the impending doom as she likely assumed. "Thank you very much." Growing cranky, she demanded to know why I was cosplaying as a mute statue instead of offering actual solutions to our terrible situation. With a jaw tighter than my boots, I explained I was balancing the joys of leadership with a hobby of not getting everyone slaughtered. She stared at me with a look usually reserved for a three-legged dog, curious if I possessed even a single spark of genuine motivation. Putting on my big boy face, I asked for her expert input, finally prepared to hear what a literal professional kill had to say. She began a lecture on beastly parenting, noting that big hairy forest dwellers turn into helicopter parents and prioritize hiding their toddlers during a scrap. Those glowing red peepers signaled that once the nursery was secure, the creatures would transform into unstoppable engines of vengeance until we were dust. I deflated like a pop balloon, massaged my temples, and begged her for a clever way to sneak around those oversized drug monsters. The girl seemed shocked by my humble tone, remarking how out of character I was acting. Consequently, she required a brief pause for fact-checking prior to exposing the grand scheme. Staring at the dense trees, I mentioned our objective wasn't extermination, but rather slipping past the giants without making a peep, aiming for peak stealth. She nodded and proposed we bamboozle them by making their nursery seem vulnerable, which would clear a nice path for us to escape. I visualized a grand tactical map where Kraut leads a frontal assault while another unit creates chaos near the nests, forcing the hairy beasts to scramble back to protect their infants and leaving a massive opening for our main squad to slip through undetected, which is the oldest trick in the book. I kept my cool and claimed that strategy was already in my repertoire. Then I inquired if she was officially pitching it, only to be met with a piercing glare and the million-dollar question regarding who would actually be the bait. She noted that the designated distraction would likely be chased by a very angry, very hairy lynch mob, making it a total career-ending position. I hollowed that it sounded like a one-way trip to the grave and immediately signed myself up, which left everyone wondering about my sanity. I felt a bit confused by my own bravado but honestly trusted my own skin-saving skills way more than some random fodder's luck. She wagged a finger at me like a suspicious schoolmarm, clearly not falling for my sudden transformation into a selfless paragon of virtue. One of my colorful peepers squinted when she brought up a mythical liquid, wondering if I held a bottle of mermaid essence, indicating she had been snooping through my private stash. Her jaw practically hit the floor as she questioned how I knew about the item, but I simply retorted that she was far too intelligent to join a doom mission without having some sort of secret trump card ready to play. Relaxing on the rear of our transport, I mentioned requiring a particular plant to fool the smelly giants, behaving like I had a gaming guide while everyone else freaked out. She gazed at me with pure shock, noting I'd transformed into a stranger lately. And she wasn't wrong about my shift, though my dramatic moment was ruined when I started hacking up alone, prompting her concern as I wheezed that our insane gambit would surely succeed if we just kept our cool. Scrubbing my face, I told her to relax because I possessed total certainty, remembering that I had explored this land since my childhood days playing a simulation. The tiny, cartoonish version of Leela appeared to be glowing with admiration, providing a weirdly cute break from our grim discussion about monster guts. I grew thoughtful, contemplating why on earth this woman was actually helping me instead of just letting me get stumped by a Yeti. With a cocky grin, I insisted my strategy was flawless. Then I inquired if she felt alright with receiving absolutely zero credit for assisting me. She maintained a stony face while absorbing the information, eventually concluding that my chaotic proposal was actually worth a roll of the dice. Petting on my feet, I mentioned a last queer prior to her exit, since double-checking the blueprints was vital before our paths diverged. Lifting her gaze, Leora inquired about the specifics of her custom itinerary, so I gestured toward the woodland path to highlight the bumpy soil where our grand scheme would soon go down. According to Leela, Bigfoot types are always sneakier than they appear, which makes sense because those hairy dudes are basically professional hide-and-seek champions. Nodding along, I figured the scouts would likely loop around to give us a surprise spanking from the rear, basically playing chess while they were still playing tag. She signaled toward 2 leafy locations to check if I was actually paying attention, so I identified a goblin village that the local Sasquatches used as a buffet while consulting my mental GPS for sneaky corners. Flashing a thumbs up, I expressed gratitude for the intel, feeling confident that we would cruise through this without Leela having to do anything remotely heroic or dangerous. She whispered a soft response while silently hoping I'd tell the armored boys to watch those areas, but then she spun around to state her demands because nobody works for exposure these days. From the driver's seat, Kraut let out a grumpy grunt because he was perpetually worried about the spooky stabby lady whispering sweet nothings into my ear. As our wheels rolled along, we sat in the rear looking like cozy travelers, despite the fact we were actually plotting a giant monster barbecue using ourselves as the sausages. We shared a very dramatic stare down while the carriage bumped along, creating a vibe so thick with awkwardness that you could probably cut it with one of her daggers. Wearing a wicked grin, she found my reaction hilarious and pressed in close while I struggled to find my words, completely dominating the conversation and leaving me looking like a confused potato while she appeared quite thoughtful. Suddenly, she lunged forward and snatched my cheeks in her hands, causing me to squeak like a rubber duck as she yanked me into her personal bubble. My head was pulled inches from her nose and I turned a vibrant shade of tomato, babbling nonsense because I definitely skipped the tutorial on how to handle feminine proximity. The view zoomed in on her lips as she invaded my breathing room, making my chest thump so loudly it probably sounded like a drum solo in a quiet library. My face was glowing like a neon sign and my brain was spinning in circles, causing me to yell out a confused exclamation since my professional composure had officially evaporated. After that unexpected facial massage, I sat there looking totally rattled and pink, my legendary gaming dignity having left the building while I stared blankly at nothing. Finally sapping out of my daze, I grumbled some insults while failing to hide my bright red face, but she just gave me an innocent smile and held up a stray leaf as an excuse for messing with my head. Looking away with a burning face, I felt the breeze mess up my hair and accepted that knowing the stats didn't mean I knew how to talk to actual humans. In a cartoonish display of shame, steam actually rose from my head as I realized I was reacting exactly like a nervous fanboy meeting a famous pop star. The mood broke when Crow hollered my name from the driver's bench, forcing us to break our awkward silence and see what the big lug wanted this time. With a grin that was way too cheerful, the knight hurried over to investigate the weirdness, while I stood there looking like a criminal caught red-handed in a cookie jar. I blurted out that everything was fine in a voice that was way too high, making me look super suspicious and leaving poor Kraut wondering why the vibe felt so weird. Pulling myself together, I barked a professional command for him to go sort out her gear, desperately hoping a change of topic would hide my internal screaming. The knight saluted despite his obvious confusion because he is a simple and loyal soldier, while Leela prepared for her extremely dangerous solo mission and Kraut whispered that he did not trust her further than he could throw her, bluntly demanding to know what the secret job actually involved. Staring him down with fake confidence, I told him to believe in my choices because we were all stuck in this leaky rowboat together and needed to row and sink. Her eyes appeared weary and hollow as she contemplated the dangerous highlands ahead, while the knight grumbled his reluctant agreement and she insisted on carrying her own gear without any help, leaving him shouting in sheer disbelief while I just gave her a flat look. Shadows stretched across the busy campsite as the sun dipped, then Leela ditched her boring merchant Rex to reveal a ninja outfit that actually looked like she meant business for once. While Kraut turned purple and started yelling about public indecency, I turned bright red at her new look, but she just stood there looking like a stone-cold professional in her epic gear. The camera focused on her flexible armor which was built for speedy murder, making her look like a phantom that could slice through the woods without snapping a single twig. Standing tall, her presence completely dominated the area while the random porters stopped their work to gork in total awe, and our band of humble rejects suddenly transformed into a deadly strike team ready to kick some serious butt. Leela snatched a tiny vessel filled with those murky, foul-smelling plants I discussed previously, preparing herself to perform that high-tier aquatic siren elixir maneuver. With a heart of iron and a nose of steel, she rubbed the pungent goo onto her limbs, fully committed to smelling like a burning trash heap for the cores. Her brain justified the stinky choice, aiming to bamboozle the Bigfoot sniffers by masking her human aroma, as it was a vintage dungeon master move designed to trick creature nostrils. The commander plugged his nostrils, bribing that the aroma was causing his snout to twist, though he respected her audacity for enduring such filth to ensure the objective was met. Observing her reflection, she noted her irises had shifted hues precisely as anticipated, her twin blades already gripped and appearing lethal under the dappled illumination. She rotated her knives with expert precision, ignoring the surrounding noise with single-minded focus. My internal dread vanished as I watched her, realizing she was a professional who utilized the unfair advantages it provided perfectly. I voiced the final inquiry regarding our readiness to commence. Liler signaled her agreement, and the excitement for the impending clash became palpable. My offer of providing several infantrymen for assistance was promptly dismissed since she realized the elite warriors would never obey a former slayer. The woman appeared formidable as she prepared to exit, so I gave her a respectful chin flick, telling her I understood and would entrust the task to her hands. She vanished into the thick forest, gliding through the timber like a ghost on caffeine, proving that the velocity of her high-tier combatant is truly terrifying. Pivoting toward the remaining squad, I bellowed the instruction for us to depart immediately, signifying that the primary unit needed to relocate to their assigned positions. The Blue Lion Battalion sprinted through the overgrown weeds at top speed, hoping to catch the mountain giants off guard before the diversion commenced. Reaching the summit, the troops peered into the basin and spotted a hairy village that was surprisingly overpopulated. Prout unsheathed his steel with a grimace, yelling for a one-hit knockout as they tumbled down the hill with capes flying. I observed the breeze carrying their scent straight to the monsters. Luckily, Lyle had ventured windward to position her snare. I maintained an incredibly stern expression while witnessing the skirmish begin, admitting that I still lacked Liler's tactical mastery but was cataloging every single motion in my memory. A close-up of her massive beast revealed it was sniffing the breeze like a bloodhound on steroids. The creature grunted in alarm as it courted the nightly musk, spinning around just as the soldiers arrived. The stealth mission was officially dead, replaced by a chaotic playground scuffle. Prout plummeted from the clouds like a falling star, aiming a catastrophic plunging strike to remove the primary beast from the conflict instantly. His edge slammed against the monster's skull, creating a massive cloud of grit and foliage, yet the sensation of a true hit was absent. The leader's face looked troubled as he muttered about the wound being too shallow, realizing his opening gambit lacked the punch he desired. While I watched from the rear, I screamed that he was a moron, explaining that sneak attacks require precision on soft spots rather than wild swinging. The captain was caught completely off balance by my verbal jab, uttering a bewildered sound because he anticipated a pat on the back rather than a lecture. The creature recovered instantly and launched a massive, woolly wrecking ball over fist at the commander's skull, with the sound of the blow highlighting the raw power of the retaliation. A heavy boom shook the ground as the giant's knuckle sandwich connected, hiding everything in a cloud of grit. Emerging from the haze, Crow parried the limb with his iron, grinning through the pain because he finally felt alive in a genuine scrap. I stayed with pure fanboy joy, noting that this was way cooler than the pixelated duels on my monitor. Real-world carnage was intoxicating, even as the monster bellowed in fury with crimson eyes while the captain stood his ground without flinching. The warriors suddenly felt a cold sweat as dozens of extra shadows stepped out of the woods, screaming like banshees. The entire pack had arrived early, meaning the bait hadn't worked, and our main squad was now the filling in a hairy sandwich. Turning a lovely shade of ghost white, I whispered that things were looking grim, second-guessing my strategy and wishing I had just borrowed a flamethrower. Without wasting a second on doubt, Prout commanded the Blue Lion Battalion to lunge forward, choosing a total offensive to shatter the surrounding enemy line. I pleaded for a timeout, but the armored idiots were already sprinting. Ignoring my cries to halt, a pair of guards named Albu and Thomas stuck to me like glue, warning me to stay put while the field turned into a meat grinder of fur and blades. The captain's gaze ignited with a turquoise flame, sparking with azure lightning as he charged up his finishing move. A swirling hurricane of cobalt energy and sparks enveloped the man, cranking the local power scale up to 11 as he prepared to bring the thunder down on the beasts. His iris was hyper-focused in a tight shot, showing a microscopic pupil that betrayed the massive mental tax of holding back such a magical dam break. He howled as his strength topped down, his skin turning pasty from the effort while electricity fried the surroundings. A gargantuan bolt of light crashed down, vaporizing the heart of the woods with a divine explosion of pure wrath. A blinding flash of ivory radiance swallowed the scene, leaving me as a tiny shadow mesmerized by the captain's top-tier skill. As the smoke drifted away, it revealed a wake of sapphire sparks, proving that the shockwave was strong enough to push the very air aside. The warrior flopped onto the turf with a loud thump, his heels furrowing the dirt, yet he managed to look stylish despite almost blowing himself up. He exhaled a massive sigh of relief, dripping with perspiration but wearing a smug look as he surveyed the carnage. The dude definitely gave it his all. The giant hairy target sailed through the air like a discarded plushie, crashing into the timber while azure sparks danced on its pelt. Kraut smirked like a thief, declaring victory with an arrogance that ignored how close he came to a permanent haircut. I was in the background, and frankly, Prout's dramatic posing was really testing my patience. I screamed at him to quit showing off and actually do something useful, because the other knights were literally having a terrible day and were about to die. Kraut suddenly woke up from his little performance with a sharp intake of breath, realizing he had absolutely whiffed on prioritizing correctly. He let out a quick, frustrated oath as he pivoted back to where the actual battle was raging. One unfortunate knight took a direct hit from a Sasquatch fist, immediately screaming in agony. The power gap between the regular soldiers and these massive forest freaks was genuinely painful to witness. The poor soul went tumbling through the air like a ragdoll, completely helpless after taking the shot. It looked like their carefully planned formation was starting to disintegrate under the relentless pressure from the Sasquatch herd. The monster came barreling toward a helpless knight on the ground, its red eyes blazing with an almost cartoonish desire to kill. These things were shockingly quick for such enormous creatures, and they covered the distance almost instantly. A close-up showed a terrified eye reflecting the giant beast, casting a shadow that covered the whole screen, making it pretty clear the soldier had run out of extra lives. Right at the last second, Kraut slid in like a professional baseball player and delivered a brutal smack to the Sasquatch's head. He used the force of his attack to send the beast flying, his face contorted in a mask of intense concentration. Kraut was absolutely bellowing at the knight to hurry up and secure his weapon, straining against the immense bulk of the creature to hold it back, which clearly required massive effort. The knight scrambled to get upright, yelling out his gratitude to Kraut while a Sasquatch was conveniently pinned down just behind him. The entire area was pure chaos, and honestly, they were hanging on by the thinnest of threads. Kraut narrowed his eyes at the remaining creatures, immediately figuring out that they couldn't possibly afford to keep fighting this like a turn-based RPG where they picked off enemies one at a time. He desperately needed a method to finish this quickly before more of his crew were wiped out. The fight was escalating dramatically, as the Sasquatches started chucking huge rocks and snapping trees like matchsticks. A truly enormous shadow fell over the knights, signaling that the next round of attacks was about to begin. Kraut unleashed a powerful slash, the sword shining brightly with his trademark blue energy. He was essentially a solo player in a multiplayer game, slicing through the mayhem to shield his squad. Another Sasquatch took a hit, sending blood flying everywhere in a shocking display. The monsters howled in agony and fury, transforming the previously quiet woods into a gruesome, chaotic free-for-all. Kraut was breathing heavily, his face drenched in sweat, as he grumbled about the endless supply of enemies. Even with his high-level attributes, the sheer number of creatures in this horde mode was clearly starting to exhaust him. Yet another Sasquatch joined the battle, and Kraut noticed that even the older creatures were much more powerful than he initially calculated. He was quickly figuring out that his video game knowledge had severely underestimated the actual difficulty settings of this world. I was observing from afar, my eyes shining green while I analyzed the case, then suddenly spotted something critical and pointed toward the woods, shouting for everyone to look in that direction. Kraut glanced over just in time to catch a massive shadow gliding through the thickets. He was instantly on high alert, realizing they had completely missed counting a sneaky foe during their initial headcount. A huge blade suddenly came crashing down, slicing through the air with an ominous sound. The force behind this new, hidden assailant was clearly in a completely different tier than the regular monsters they were facing. A Sasquatch with glowing red eyes and a prominent scar glared at them, clearly looking like the pack leader and extremely annoyed that his subordinates were being eliminated. Kraut clenched his teeth, blood dripping from his arm, and figured this was their opportunity to strike. He prepared to put everything on the line for one final confrontation with this obvious high-level boss creature. A row of blue lion knights stood prepared, their shields interlocked and spears pointed forward. They were attempting to reorganize, but the sheer exhaustion was visible on every single face. Kraut started shouting that they had miscalculated as he realized the formation was far too sluggish. The Sasquatch was already in midair, meaning the knights were essentially about to get flattened. He suddenly recalled the scout report that mentioned 8 monsters, realizing now that one had been unaccounted for. Kraut was certainly clever, but even high intelligence doesn't prevent you from being ambushed by a stealthy enemy. Kraut genuinely panicked, shouting no, don't let it be. As he frantically searched the vicinity for the last creature, he understood that a missing Sasquatch often indicated a fast, assassin-style enemy was hiding nearby. A shocking shot revealed the missing Sasquatch, which was smaller, significantly quicker, and had eyes glowing with a dark purple energy. It was lingering right within the deep shadows, waiting for the absolutely perfect chance to execute its attack. Kraut yelled, "There it is." As he finally spotted the purple-eyed creature launching its charge, he attempted to intercept the threat, but unfortunately, he was already stuck fighting 2 other monsters at the same time. However, the monster completely ignored the knights and Kraut screamed in pure terror as he realized it was actually coming straight for me. The alpha clearly had some strategy, choosing to go directly for the high-priority target. I was staring directly at the charging beast, looking incredibly calm despite the immediate threat. I wasn't running away. I simply watched with my sharp blue eyes, as if calculating the exact frame rate for a perfect dodge. Kraut was completely losing it, frantically trying to reach me and screaming for help, pushing himself beyond all limits, but he was still too far away to stop the imminent attack. One knight suddenly threw himself in my path, yelling for me to back up immediately. He was clearly trying to act as a human shield, but against the potent purple energy, it seemed like he was volunteering for a very short, very final mission. Out of nowhere, an enormous column of brilliant blue lightning slammed into the ground. The voice roared, "You absolute scoundrel!" as the entire clearing suddenly lit up as if it were the middle of the day. The knight who tried to protect me was left blinking in confusion, making a small noise as the lightning faded away. I just stood there behind him, completely unfazed by the ordeal. The other knights stared at the massive hole in the ground, debating whether they had actually managed to eliminate the creature. The smoke was dense, and the silence after the huge blast was absolutely overwhelming. Dust particles and sparks drifted down across the entire area. It was exactly like the typical moment in a boss battle where everyone holds their breath to see if the big attack actually landed. The gigantic, hairy fist suddenly burst from the smoke. The lightning strike hadn't defeated the creature. It had simply made it extremely angry. The Sasquatch now pulsed with a chaotic purple energy, ready to fight again. The protective knight let out a shocked gasp as the creature loomed over them once again. It was noticeably stronger than it had been just moments ago, and its physical attributes were obviously enhanced. The Sasquatch swung its fist, creating insane motion lines as it blurred toward the knight's head with terrifying speed and force. The resulting impact was truly unbelievable, sending dust and wreckage flying as a huge shockwave tore through the clearing. I was visible in the background, simply trying to stay upright while everything around me was annihilated. My jaw hit the floor while surveying this messy landscape of utter chaos, staring at a massive wave of flying dirt and wishing I had brought a much bigger shield for this surprise party. A giant, shadowy figure emerged from the debris like a bad omen at a picnic, signaling that the main antagonist had officially joined the server and ruined everyone's afternoon mood. The camera zoomed in on my face, which was dripping like a leaky faucet, showing eyes wide with the realization that we were currently being served as the main cars. Thomas actually stepped up and gripped his blade tight, yelling for me to stick to him like glue while a masser, furry knuckle sandwich prepared to impact our personal space. That oversized monkey delivered a downward swing that could pulverize granite, moving with such velocity that the soil immediately transformed into a freshly dug grave for anyone standing there. Prout looked absolutely livid as he hollered insults at the beast, rushing headlong into the fray with eyes shining like neon signs and a very bad attitude towards oversized primates. He peppered the beast with a series of electric cuts that turned the area into a disco of pain, surrounding the target with enough static to power a small city. Thomas dragged me away while I craned my neck to watch the brawl, fully aware that if our teammate failed his task, we would all become very expensive monster snacks. The poor guy took a solid blow and dropped like a sack of potatoes, weirdly screaming his own name as if he needed a self-introduction during a life-threatening crisis. I gestured frantically toward the tree line and yelled to target the elderly ape, knowing that ignoring the team captain would lead to our group being permanently deleted from existence. My guard glanced over his shoulder while gasping for oxygen, desperately suggesting that if we survived for 5 more minutes, some heroes might actually show up to save us. I lacked his optimism and looked quite pathetic, questioning who exactly would stumble upon us in this desolate wasteland where even the GPS would probably give up and die. The knight trembled while holding his weapon, begging me to reconsider the suicide mission, but I explained with peak efficiency that he would die regardless if the main defense collapsed now. I used my ruthless tactical brain to prove that his survival depended on him moving his legs toward the danger right this instant before we were both crushed. He stared at the dirt, paralyzed by the conflict between living another day and following the strict babysitting instructions given by his superior officer earlier that very morning. I finally snapped and shrieked his name with enough volume to wake the dead, asking if he truly intended to commit career suicide by ignoring my royal demands right now. His face hardened with sudden courage as he muttered about his noble title, standing straight and acknowledging that following orders was the only way to keep his dignity while dying. He offered a short salute and readied himself to sprint toward the monstrous leader of the pack, determined to end things on his own terms. I tracked his progress with a heavy heart, offering a simple nod of agreement while feeling like a terrible person for using him as a temporary meat shield to win. I waded through the tall weeds like a lost tourist, whispering that this specific patch of dirt had to be the location I was hunting for all this time. Breezes swirled around my tiny frame as I stood alone in the scary forest, my visible gasps of air proving that I was definitely not built for this outdoor lifestyle. My pupils dilated when I caught sight of the goal, hollering out in triumph because I had finally discovered the secret ingredient needed to not lose this entire game. The scene switched to poor Albu looking like a broken toy in the lawn, his gear completely trashed while the howling air mocked our miserable failure to stay safe. I wore a mask of pure shock while examining the wreckage, making a small squeaking noise as the reality of his severe injuries began to sink into my brain. The tight shot showed a rag turning deep crimson, the fluid leaking out with a rhythmic tapping sound that made my skin crawl and my stomach do a flip. The man was laid out like he was waiting for the Grim Reaper to arrive, lying in a growing puddle of red that suggested he was rapidly running out of juice. I dived toward him while begging him to keep his eyes open, frantically peeling off his broken metal plates to find the leak before he completely drained of life. I stared at the mess with a summer face, admitting that although I had plans, the actual burden of another person's mortality was proving to be a real buzzkill today. I lifted the shirt to find a nasty purple mark across his belly, realizing that while he survived the hit, the real nightmare was just getting its opening credits. The system messages clarified the horror, explaining that his gut was inflating like a balloon from internal leaks that a basic strip of cloth could never hope to patch. I grabbed a tiny bottle from my pack but tossed it aside in anger, yelling that this cheap juice was about as helpful as a band-aid on a gunshot wound. I searched the area for a magical medic, dreading the thought of using my one expensive elixir that I was saving for a much more convenient and less tragic emergency. My blade now firmly in hand, I swore a solemn, unspoken pledge that Albu absolutely had to make it. I was about to dive headfirst into peril, seeking answers, and so I bolted at top speed into the thick, dark woods, shouting to the unconscious Albu to just keep breathing until I got back. Talk about a pressure cooker situation. A heartbreaking close-up revealed Albu's barely open, glazed eyes, making him look like he was fading away, all alone in the grass. Suddenly, a colossal thud rattled the timber and as a Sasquatch face planted, or perhaps just landed with unexpected flair, the impact kicking up a huge cloud of grit and leaves. A truly enormous Sasquatch, boasting fur as red as a fire truck, gazed off into the great beyond, clearly not pondering world peace. This creature seemed to have clawed its way right out of a horror movie, and it certainly appeared to be spoiling for a fight. I peered from behind a towering tree, my brow slick with sweat, muttering to myself, just as I suspected, Yahello was spot on. The assassin's intel had proven entirely accurate, confirming the red-furred beast now stood amid a genuine goblin village, utterly surrounded by chaos and carnage. I realized this particular area was the Sasquatch clan's favorite hunting ground. The monster then let loose a gut-wrenching roar that made the very branches tremble, primal display of roar power that would send any sane individual fleeing for the hills. Clapping my hands over my ears, I let out a roar, the pain groan as the sheer sound weighed slam into me. Yes, I was definitely way too close to this action, and I knew it. I gawked at the gruesome scene with utter revulsion, mumbling how utterly disgusting it all was. Apparently, the Sasquatch's dining etiquette was even worse than its roaring, judging by the stomach-churning mess of blood and guts scattered across the forest floor. The gravity of the situation hit me. One misstep, and I'd be just another unsightly heap of monster chow. Trembling, my face shadowed, I admitted that I was terrified. Even knowing Yahello had likely set a trap, the whole strategy still felt terrifyingly perilous. A truly terrifying close-up on the monster's jagged teeth made me instantly realize this was nothing like the cozy video games I played back home. There wasn't a convenient keyboard or a spawn button to save me here. I crouched in the shadows, panting like a tired dub, desperately trying to rein in my breathing. The forest's heavy silence was only punctuated by the loud, plodding footsteps of the massive monster, which weren't exactly stealthy. A vivid mental snapshot of Albo, pale and teetering on the brink, flashed through my mind. The grim vision was exactly the kick in the pants I needed to stop quivering and actually start doing something useful. My face hardened to a steely resolve as I assured myself, everything's fine, I absolutely won't die. I was officially activating my Game Master, or perhaps more accurately, my survival at all costs mode. I strode confidently from my hiding spot, my boots landing on the grass with a resounding thud. I announced with complete conviction that this was my burden to bear. Standing fully exposed, I bellowed hey. At the absolute top of my lungs, thereby securing the monster's undivided attention, acting as the ultimate, or the noisy, deeker, a fierce glint entered my gaze, my very aura practically fizzing with blue energy. I roared that today was, as I braced for my grand move, the massive Sasquatch towering over me like a furry, muscle-bound mountain, and I finished my declaration with a thunderous, death day. The enormous monster lunged forward with a blood-curdling shriek just as I readied my sword, its movement so fast the air itself seemed to blur, a truly impressive, albeit terrifying, display of speed. I unleashed a barrage of incredibly rapid slashes, the brilliant blue energy from my blade literally carving through the air as I expertly met and countered the monster's ferocious charge. The Sasquatch howled in pure agony as crimson liquid erupted from its freshly inflicted wounds. I wasn't just hitting it, you see, I was quite methodically disassembling it, piece by terrifying piece. The monster's face contorted into a mask of pure fury and pain, its eyes wide with stunned disbelief. It clearly never anticipated a seemingly weak human like me could deliver such a monumentally devastating blow. The Sasquatch slammed into the ground with a bone-jarring thud. I stood amidst the chaos, my crimson cloak fluttering dramatically in the wind, as the defeated beast writhed at my feet. A close-up showed the monster's teeth as it snarled, its pride utterly shattered. It was beaten, and it knew it. Then, another Sasquatch abruptly loomed behind me, casting an enormous shadow, making it abundantly clear I'd just stumbled into an impromptu monster gathering. I glanced over my shoulder, my eyes widening with a sudden, stark realization. I wasn't panicking, however. No, I was merely calculating the absolute optimal next move, perhaps even a brilliant chess-like maneuver. A colossal explosion of white fur and churning dust completely filled the scene, looking like a truly massive impact had just occurred, accompanied by someone knelling in pure surprise. I was grappling to hold something immense back, sweating profusely and bellowing for it to take this, pouring every single ounce of my remaining strength into this desperate, final gamble. A close-up showed my gloved fist either punching or activating some hidden contraption. A sharp click echoed as the trap finally sprang into action, and a colossal net or cage, woven from thick vines, burst from the ground. It shot straight into the sky, ensnaring the surprised Sasquatch precisely in its aerial trajectory. The enormous beast was definitely caught, roaring and threshing wildly as the thick, magical vines coiled around its limbs, firmly pinning it, rather dramatically, to the unyielding earth. The system helpfully identified the trap as arachn's vine. These weren't just any ordinary plants, but specialized magical restraints crafted specifically for high-level creatures, like this overgrown furball. I then elucidated my ingenious siren's potion trick, explaining I had cunningly attached the powerful anesthetic to the vine's thorns, ensuring the monster would be promptly knocked out the very second it began to struggle. Yahello's intel had been absolutely flawless. Those monsters, it seems, can be quite easily captured without any real fuss, provided one employs the correct tools and just a touch of the delightful siren's potion. The Sasquatch let out a final, rather weak groan as its eyes eventually rolled back, finally succumbing. It actually worked, I mused, watching the colossal beast finally go limp within its powerful bonds. Standing tall, I pointed my sword forward, shouting for us to advance. I wasn't about to waste another precious second now that the path ahead was completely clear. I unleashed another powerful battle cry, looking far more like a seasoned warrior than I ever had, finally embracing the brutal, hard-mode reality of this unforgiving world. I brought my blade down with full force, directly through the skull of the now-pinned beast. The cracking sound was undeniably brutal, definitively ending the entire fight for good. There were funds. I felt the sword connect with bone, a sensation that thoroughly rattled me to my core. I pondered this unsettling feeling, grimly realizing that actual killing in real life was absolutely nothing like its glorified video game counterpart. Blood sprayed everywhere, drenching both the grass and my cloak in a gruesome crimson. It was a messy, violently decisive end to what had been an utterly terrifying, and frankly, quite inconvenient, encounter. I gazed at my hands, my expression a mask of pure disgust, muttering that it was absolutely disgusting, clearly quite traumatized by the truly unpleasant task I had just been forced to perform. I stood among the grim wreckage, pondering how I never once imagined I'd actually be directly involved in killing. I'm a gamer, for goodness sake, not some kind of cold-blooded murderer. But in this new, harsh world, the distinction was becoming incredibly, disturbingly blurred. I stared down at the deceased Sasquatch, the chilling realization dawning on me that I had just personally ended the life of a living creature with my own hands. The sheer, overwhelming weight of the act was visibly etched across my weary face. Covered in blood, I looked utterly broken, shouting into the desolate forest about how absolutely detestable this all was, truly grieving my lost innocence. From the deepening shadows, a mysterious, goblin-like figure observed me, noting I had fought on par with a Class 4 knight, yet found my level surprisingly weak for such prowess. Talk about a harsh performance review. I suddenly sensed a presence and snapped my head toward the rustling brush, my eye glowing with an intense blue light. I let out a surprised sound as I realized, with a jolt, that I was still being watched. This particular story segment concluded with an absolutely enormous burst of sapphire-colored energy illuminating the entire woodland, suggesting someone, or perhaps some very boisterous thing, had just made a grand, albeit explosive, entrance. My showcased in an unnervingly tight shot, truly conveyed the moment's raw intensity. Splattered crimson obscured my vision, while my startling teal pupil dilated wildly with a cocktail of sheer terror and pure adrenaline, fixated on a fresh adversary. The unfolding tableau was utterly savage, as one of our brave knights lay tragically immersed in his own gore. This was no longer a simulated skirmish, it seemed the stakes had unexpectedly escalated to a mortifyingly authentic level of peril. I found myself unceremoniously skidding across the grassy terrain, looking utterly pulverized, my form a dismal canvas of earth and blood as I gasped for breath, swallowed whole by the forest surrounding bedlam. Feast your eyes upon this charming individual. This wall, unnervingly pale, goblin-esque creature crouched directly before me, its optic orbs radiating a sinister pink glow of pure homicidal intent, clearly primed to leap. My gaze shot upwards, my face a ghastly white, eyes wide with unadulterated dread. I was completely trapped, staring down the creature, with the mangled remains of my fallen knight resting mere paces away, a truly awful backdrop. We were afforded another disheartening glimpse of Albu, and frankly, our poor fellow wasn't looking too spry, lying motionless in the grass with enough blood staining his white armor to suggest we might be short a team member. A profound fury now simmered within me, my features obscured by deep shadow as my teeth ground together, and a low, menacing growl escaped my throat, a clear sign that my patience had officially evaporated, along with my sanity. Astonishingly, the vile goblin retorted, shrieking a roar the personal insult as it lunged forward with unexpected swiftness, proving this particular antagonist boasted far more character than your average cannon fodder. Abandoning all pleasantries, I unleashed my sword with every ounce of dwindling strength, the visible streak of white motion indicating my unwavering intention for a full-on decapitation. But this tiny tear proved frustratingly elusive. Another intense close-up on my eye revealed the goblin's precise reflection in my pupil, a testament to my unwavering focus, utterly determined not to allow this pestilent creature another damaging blow. I unleashed a rapid barrage of strikes, steel clashing with a shower of sparks as my blade made repeated contact, steadily forcing the goblin backward, my expression a rigid mask of pure, undiluted fury. My breath came in ragged gasps, my hair a chaotic mess and my face coated in grime, a stark realization hitting me that fighting for survival was significantly more strenuous than merely clicking a computer mouse. I brought my weapon down in a thunderous arc, my sword faintly shimmering with a cerulean glow, the impact so profound it literally churned the very grass and soil around us. The goblin barely evaded the blow, prompting me to shakily murmur, "Bower, that was a hair too close for comfort." I then understood how easily one tiny misstep could lead to a permanent game over in this brutal reality, and I only survived that particular attack because my own arms were, humorously, shorter than I'd planned, performing an impromptu anatomical analysis during a deathmatch. My gaze drifted to my gloved hand, which trembled noticeably from the strenuous exertion, a humbling admission that my body was far too frail, barely capable of wielding my sword with any semblance of proper technique anymore. The amethyst-hued goblin, lurking ominously within the tall grass, truly resembled something straight from a nightmare, and I couldn't help but observe its irritatingly superior reach, making this engagement even more lopsided. I began rapidly calculating in my mind, theorizing that by ingeniously combining the length of my trusty sword with my own arm, I might just possess enough extended reach to land a decisive, winning blow. The goblin launched itself skyward in a dizzying aerial display, spinning toward me like an amethyst-colored streak, executing a breathtakingly high-flying maneuver aimed squarely at my jugular. I firmly planted my foot into the yielding grass, bracing myself for the imminent collision, resolved not to retreat this time, instead meticulously preparing for a devastating counterattack. Behold that magnificent swing, as I spun my blade in a colossal arc, erecting a formidable barrier of steel between myself and the airborne abomination. Indeed, my blade found its mark, connecting directly with the goblin's head, sending a sickening spray of crimson across the scene as I finally delivered a solid, perfectly executed strike upon the irritating little fiend. But hold on, I shrieked, a horrified realization dawning on me. Oh no, as I desperately wrestled to retract my sword. It seemed either the blade was firmly lodged, or the tenacious monster was attempting to drag me down with it into the abyss. A thunderous impact echoed as the goblin violently slammed into the unforgiving ground, the sheer force so immense it propagated a shockwave through the grass, picking up an enormous, choking cloud of dust. I collapsed onto the ground, beads of sweat streaming down my face, panting heavily, internally musing that I had narrowly avoided being bisected at the shoulder, a truly uncomfortably close call, when to my horror, the goblin began to stand again. Wide-eyed with pure panic, I yelled that it was coming back for more. This thing clearly had no concept of staying down for the count. I lashed out again, but my movements were becoming hopelessly clumsy from profound exhaustion. The goblin now dodged with mocking ease, appearing to merely amuse itself at my increasingly desperate expense. The image captured my utterly desperate countenance, blood glistening from my sword, as I recognized I was pushing past my absolute limit, understanding implicitly that I needed to conclude this wretched encounter immediately. I resorted to a well-placed kick, driving my boot squarely into the goblin's chest, sending the creature hurtling backward, a surprisingly effective display of close-quarters combat for someone so fatigued. Then a dagger, my secret weapon, spun through the air towards the monster as I screamed for it to perish, pouring every last vestige of hope into that single throw, my face a contorted mask of pure desperation as I howled for its demise. Now so caked in gore I resembled a completely different, much bloodier, person. The goblin looked up, its eyes widening with genuine astonishment as the glinting blade rapidly approached, clearly never anticipating a supposedly feeble human like myself to possess such a deadly, concealed trick up my sleeve. With a powerful impact, I violently slammed the creature directly into a sturdy tree, pouring all my remaining momentum into the strike to ensure this particular engagement firmly concluded right there. I stood there panting, leaning forward with a weary, blood-streaked grin, having finally managed to subdue the bothersome little monster, though I looked decidedly on the verge of simply collapsing from the effort. The goblin's legs dangled limply from the tree trunk, utterly motionless, its defeat absolute, while my own ragged gasps underscored my desperate struggle to simply maintain consciousness after such a grueling ordeal. The goblin's twitchy toes had finally given up the ghost. Well, it appeared I'd just earned my very first oops. I did it again. Fetch for extinguishing a life in this bizarre new reality. My trembling digits clung to the hilt of my trusty blade, which had found an unexpectedly woody home in a nearby trunk. The gravity of my recent adventure was settling in like a bad breakfast, making my hand do the char-char. A panoramic view of the decidedly unglamorous tableau revealed the little green guy artfully stapled to timber by my weapon. The quiet now hummed with a fresh, unsettling vibe, making the woods feel considerably less like a fairy tale and more like a run-for-your-life special than they had just moments prior. My gaze had apparently decided to take a permanent vacation to the dirt, leaving my eyes utterly empty, like a politician's promises. I seemed to be in an advanced state of bewildered stupor, my gray matter furiously attempting to compute that this grim reality wasn't some pixelated fantasy game. I was positively marinating in sweat, my face a stark white canvas beneath the gory artwork. It appeared my composure was about to stage a dramatic exit, probably involving a lot of weeping right in the middle of the wilderness. Unable to stomach the day's bloody events any longer, I let out an unholy sound, promptly introducing my breakfast to the forest floor. The grim truth of extinguishing a life had finally punched my gut with full, nauseating force. Clinging to a tree, I was unceremoniously giving back my lunch. It hit me with the weight of a planet that this grim reality was nothing like a game. The stench, the crimson, it was an overwhelming buffet of unpleasantness. I was quaking like a leaf cord in a hurricane, sweat raining from my face, as I confessed my genuine certainty that my number was truly up. Consider it a brutal, splash-zone-level reality check, delivered with unexpected monster-slaying panache. Out of the blue, a familiar asterisk ping asterisk echoed, startling me. I peered upwards, utterly bewildered, as my glowing, cerulean status screen spontaneously materialized, like a helpful but terribly timed celestial pop-up. The ethereal system scroll helpfully chimed in, validating my recent monster disposal efforts. Apparently, I'd successfully taken down a D-class creature, a feat that, it proudly declared, earned me an outrageously beefy reward bonanza for facing such a comically powerful adversary. Another little digital memo popped into existence, confirming I'd also somehow vanquished an F-class creature, implying a whole lot more beasties had apparently keeled over than just my direct victim. Then, glorious news, level up. I rocketed from a respectable level 8 straight to level 11, all thanks to one particularly chaotic skirmish. As a bonus, I even gained access to an inventory, which felt less like a feature and more like winning the lottery of convenient storage. Seriously, that's a power-up worthy of a superhero montage. A faint sound echoed from afar, making my head snap around with the precision of a trained predator. I remained on peak alert, my eyes wide as saucers, completely prepped and eager for the next inevitable, utterly charming confrontation. Suddenly, Proud emerged, sprinting through the tall grass like a knight in a rush, yelling my name and anxiously checking on my safety. His face was a veritable billboard of genuine worry, bless his chivalrous soul. Upon his arrival, Proud's jaw practically hit the forest floor. He was utterly dumbfounded by the sight. His cheeks were still delightfully rosy from his sprint, but that healthy flush swiftly morphed into a mask of pure astonishment, culminating in a rather vocal expression of sheer disbelief. Our noble knight stood there, utterly mesmerized, gaping at the unfortunate goblin elegantly affixed to the tree trunk, his expression a masterpiece of utter incredulity. It was clear he'd never once entertained the notion that a supposedly frail prince such as myself could single-handedly dispatch a beast of the caliber. The grim close-up showcased the goblin's head, still impaled, the macabre memento of my very first true battle. It also served as a stark, blood-splattered billboard advertising the potent, hidden power I was clearly starting to unleash. Proud, a whirlwind of worry, rushed to my side, grabbing my shoulders, frantically shouting inquiries about my injuries and checking for wounds. Suddenly, the Blue Lion Order Knights surrounded me, looking as if they'd seen a sparkly ghost, while I, ever the picture of Fokul, merely muttered about being perfectly fine. Naturally, Kraut declared our luck off the charts, explaining the other Sasquatches had wisely retreated after we'd unlived two of their hairy, oversized companions. My attention, however, had already mentally checked out, my gaze wandering into the middle distance, clearly pondering something far more exciting. My expression froze into a mask of stone-cold seriousness as I sharply rebuked Kraut, stating luck played no part. I promptly credited Leeler's brilliant strategy for our success, clearly demonstrating my unwavering faith in my game master tactics. Suddenly, a snap of my fingers and a shouted "Oh, right," punctuated the air. A vital piece of information, temporarily dislodged from my memory banks amidst the recent thrill, had finally decided to stage its grand return. I abruptly yanked Kraut by the front of his armor, demanding with an unsettling intensity to know the precise location of that fallen soldier. Kraut, bless his oblivious heart, stayed back, completely dumbfounded by my sudden, rather startling aggression. My voice tore through the air, screaming Albu's name, as grisly images of the blood-soaked night assaulted my mind. I was frantic, needing desperately to know if my friend was still stubbornly clinging to life. Kraut, with a surprising lack of fanfare, merely gestured behind us, accompanied by a rather uninformative murmur. A close-up of Kraut's digit pointed casually towards the looming woods, as he calmly offered, "He's over there," a statement delivered with the serenity of a monk, completely contrasting my own impending aneurysm. I slowly spun, my face now a terrifying canvas of roar, pointing despair. Ominous, dark purple aura pulsed behind me, visually announcing my dangerously close proximity to a full-blown mental meltdown. The scene itself had opened with a summer, reflective atmosphere, as lonely leaves drifted across a clear blue canvas above. I grudgingly admitted my prime objective was survival, yet the stark, gut-wrenching reality of losing human lives was truly beginning to solidify. The camera offered a truly gut-wrenching close-up of poor Albu, now tragically deceased, with a rather unsettling crimson puddle expanding from his lips. My heart shattered into a million pieces, and I let loose a tear-soaked wail of his name, the final, despairing whisper of "I'm so sorry." I knelt, a crumpled mess, my face obscured by the encroaching shadows, tumbling down a dark rabbit hole of overwhelming guilt. My mind, the tireless self-blame factory, relentlessly produced theories about how my perceived sloppiness had tragically twisted fate, making everything irrevocably worse. From my periphery, the mysterious rose of night stood like a silent, elegant statue, witnessing my heartfelt despair. The profound, crushing melancholy draped itself over the entire summer group, thick as a winter fog, as I continued to whisper those two maddening words, "If only I." Proud, stepping in as the impromptu voice of reason, loomed over me, attempting to soothe my shattered nerves. He quite plainly stated that this wasn't my fault, and furthermore, that the soldier had departed the mortal coil having achieved a truly honorable, battle-forged demise. The torque of honor struck a nerve, and I promptly snapped back, practically screaming, "That's preposterous." My patience had finally evaporated, having officially reached critical mass with all the saccharine, utterly unhelpful nightly pronouncements. I appeared utterly deranged, my visage a ghastly tapestry of gore, and my eyes, dilated with a potent cocktail of sorrow and fury, gleamed menacingly. I shrieked, asserting with absolute conviction that the concept of an honorable demise was a fantastical myth. For me, death was merely death, the universal constant of profound and relentless tragedy. Proud appeared genuinely caught off guard by my rather spirited protest. He then consciously attempted to temper his voice, conceding that this was, in fact, my maiden voyage until losing a subordinate, and thus, my rather spectacular emotional response was wholly comprehensible. Only text N. My fury evaporated into a soul-crushing vacuum while I whimpered softly, plopped on the turf like a sad potato in a cloud of gloom. The camera zoomed out to reveal the messy aftermath, where two metal clads handled a laundry-wrapped corpse, as the rest of the Blue Lion squad imitated garden gnomes among the trees. Captured from the side, I looked like a soggy piece of toast without a crumb of my usual boss energy, especially when Kraut listed our casualties of 3 fatalities and 1 wounded soldier, attempting to gaslight me into thinking this was a win, though I just glared at the mud and whispered about my incompetence while bearing the crushing guilt of 3 souls on my back. I realized that if I had exploited my cheat codes for a superior strategy earlier, everyone would still be breathing, finally learning that commanding flesh and blood is way messier than clicking buttons on a screen. Flashbacks flashed by showing the snare that spared my neck and Albu looking like he lost a fight with a lawnmower, proving I only made it out thanks to Layla's housekeeping and Albu playing a very literal human shield. My leather-wrapped hand met the soil with a pathetic thud, as I was sick of being the damsel in distress while my babysitters took all the actual hits for me. A primal howl of absolute misery escaped my throat, marking the funeral of my casual gaming career and the messy birth of a true leader forged in suffering. The armored spectators watched my meltdown with concerned faces, having never witnessed their boss getting so touchy-feely or emotional over their expendable lives before. Crowd stared at his boots and asked the awkward question of how to handle our new collection of corpses, desperately seeking any command that would snap us back into professional soldier mode. I climbed to my feet with a look that could cut glass despite the mud on my cheeks, demanding the team to pack up our fallen friends if we didn't get ambushed first. Glancing back with a gaze like a freezer burn, I told them to fall in line because my morning pity party was officially over and I was ready to kick some teeth in. Prout saluted so hard he nearly gave himself a concussion, barking out my instructions to the rest of the gang like a caffeinated drill sergeant. Kraut looked secretly stoked as the soldiers scrambled into gear, noticing my vibe had switched from mopey teenager to alpha boss, while the troops gossiped about my tender heart for the deceased, deciding I was a leader worth taking a bullet for, and as they stood straight to pledge their eternal protection, my charisma stats officially broke the scale. Kraut picked up on the mood swing, noting that everyone's grumpy faces had turned into determined mugs, making the unit's motivation even higher than it was before the brawl kicked off. I glanced at my crew and Kraut knew I had them in the palm of my hand, signaling a major promotion in my career as a boss, while the overhead view of the woods showed the ironclads huddling by the carts, finished with a panic but still very much on the clock. Kraut trotted over to my pony to report that the stiffs were pickled in magic juice and we were good to go, as the knights lined up with their blue laundry flapping in the breeze, exuding a level of focus that suggested they might actually know what they were doing now. I scanned my squadron and realized they weren't looking at me like a spoiled toddler anymore, having finally graduated from being a burden they were forced to nanny. Kraut stood by my side and insisted that we stop crying over spilled milk, basically telling me to get my act together and keep our momentum going. I nodded and shoved my feelings into a dark box to focus on the prize, striking a heroic pose at the front of the line while yelling at the boys that they did a decent job avoiding the monkey beasts, then commanded them to haul tail toward our goal right away. I told the survivors to patch up the bleeders and gave a classic hero speech about no man being left behind, pointing my finger like a fancy statue and demanding they confirm their loyalty, which they did with a deafening shout of agreement that shook the forest before the screen flashed back 1 hour to show what the other team was doing. The zoom-in revealed the black boot treading lightly on the mulch, as some sneaky ninja navigated the shrubbery without making a single sound. Layla reappeared in her edgy hood while chilling in the bushes, looking like she was ready for her specific chores, unaware that a red-eyed Sasquatch was creepily watching her from behind a trunk, leading her to realize her ghost act was failing because these furballs had surprisingly good noses. She dodged like a caffeinated cat when the beast took a swing, her cape waving around as she ducked under a knuckle sandwich that could have flattened a cow. Layla slapped back with a glow-in-the-dark magic knife, the blinding light proving she wasn't interested in playing tag with these overgrown farce mutts. She was doing gymnastics mid-brawl and twisting through the sky to avoid more monkey punches, making the big idiots look slow while she pirouetted through the carnage, eventually landing a stab that painted the grass red and reminded the local monsters why hiring a hitman is a bad idea. She hopped up to a tall limb to catch her breath and reminded herself to move fast, since her role as the world's most dangerous fishing lure had a very tight deadline. The camera focused on a knot tied to a sturdy lob as part of my fancy snare, just as Layla performed a swan dive with her blade out, using gravity to give her next poke a bit more oomph. She stuck the landing and scanned the woods like a goth ninja in a leafy maze, eventually standing still while the heavy thumping of an incoming beast got closer, though she looked about as bothered as a stone guardrail. The jumbo-sized Sasquatch popped out from the shadows behind her, casting a shadow so big she vanished in it, and while the beast prepared to scream, Layla was already setting the hook for her trap, glancing back with a look that said she enjoyed being the mouse in this high-stakes game of predator and prey. Layla flashed a smug grin as the beast fell for it, proving my devious little script was running exactly as I had planned. With a bold stride, she stayed down the creature, calmly announcing, "Alright big guy, it seems my little surprise party, also known as the grand finale of her meticulously laid trap, was about to begin." The Sasquatch, looking rather miffed, like someone stole its last cookie, bared every one of its formidable teeth, ready to swoosh the minuscule human. Little did the big brute know, it was about to get a rather unpleasant wake-up call. Then, with a distinct crack, like a giant wishbone breaking, the crucial rope where trigger sprang, signaling Layla's contraption was finally hitting its crescendo, with impeccable timing no less. The Sasquatch, swinging a limb the size of a small tree, found only empty air, as Layla had gracefully vacated the premises. The resulting explosion of dust and fiery sparks, though, was a potent reminder that this hairy behemoth skipped arm day never. Alas, Layla found herself rather unceremoniously enveloped by a colossal eruption of pure light, or maybe just some highly aggressive magic. A surprised yelp escaped her, realizing her carefully laid plan had just taken a seriously unexpected, and quite frankly, colossal wrong turn.